All the employees had long since left the office. There was no glow anywhere. Only one ulle sat doing overtime work, staring at the monitor. Despite his fatigue, the man continued to feverishly write down everything his job description required of him. It was getting harder and harder to breathe by the minute, his eyes nearly popping out from the exertion. Ulle held onto the table to keep from falling. Unfortunately, it couldn't last much longer. The man's strength was gone. He slipped off the chair and fell to the floor. The tired employee barely overpowered himself and struggled to grasp the desk with his hand. He tried to lift his weakened body. With a strong tug, Ulle got to his feet and angrily slammed his hands on the table. He has no right to leave until he finishes all the work. Suddenly, the young man felt that he could not stand on his feet. Losing his balance, he fell to the floor again. The documents flew out of his hands. For the first time in his life, Ulle felt death approaching. He couldn't even move due to the loss of energy. The pen fell out of his weakened fingers. In the last seconds of his life, all the young man could feel was some kind of liquid coming out of his mouth. The boy's brain was going blank. His sightless eyes rolled back more and more, bringing his death closer and closer. The medics who arrived in the morning had only to officially state the fact of death from overexertion at work. Ulle, who had died to all, was reborn in the midst of a quiet green forest. He sat on the lawn by the round tombstone. It was very strange for the boy to remember his past life. For him now, everything was starting all over again in another world. As fate would have it, office employee Ulle was reborn as a young security guard named Zhenfei. At that moment, the lad was standing at the burial place of his father, who had died while hunting a wild beast in the mountains. Zhenfei couldn't get over his irreparable loss. A little more, and he would simply lose his mind. It was at this moment that office worker Ulle was possessed by a security guard and given a new body, leaving himself with memories. It turned out that Zhenfei lived quite poorly. There were a few pieces of dried meat hanging on a rope outside the house. The young man couldn't believe that there was nothing else left of the groceries. He cried like a little child. The thing is, in his previous life, Ulle saved money on everything. He had a 6-figure sum left in his bank account. The boy calmed down rather quickly. It occurred to him that the opportunity to live in another world could not be bought with money. Since this opportunity did not come often, I should have thought hard about how I could improve my life. Suddenly, a bright bluish glow appeared to Zhenfei's left. Something like a display appeared in the background. The young man turned his head in horror. Everything unknown in a new world is very frightening when you encounter it for the first time. A strange voice in his head announced the activation of the Ascension system. He had to cover his eyes because of the bright light. Suddenly, Zhenfei realized the meaning behind the words. He had appeared in the new world for a reason. His true purpose was to rule the world. The young man danced with joy. He realized that all these manhwa were describing the reality. A harem of several thousand beauties awaited him. When he had dreamed enough, he spread his arms wide apart. He was ready to take in the whole new world. Zhenfei straightened up and closed his eyes. He shouted that he was willing to accept any system gifts and was ready for new accomplishments. To his surprise, the glow began to fade. The system menu began to close due to inconsistencies with the new user's requirements. The young man was angry. He realized that the plan to quickly conquer the world had gone awry, and he demanded an immediate explanation of what criteria he didn't meet. It turns out that you have to die again, but also prove your usefulness to society. The system will be available again when you are reborn. The young man glanced glumly at the system menu as it continued to disappear. Instead of an intelligible answer, new questions appeared. Finally getting angry, Zhenfei shouted why such a system was even needed, and defiantly showed his middle finger to the system that had started to get angry. Her patience was not unlimited. Thunder rumbled in the sky. A powerful stream of energy rushed downward. After the electric shock, the young man fell to his knees and bowed his blackened face exhaustedly. The system had warned him not to make it angry. She suggested reading the owner's manual first. It was a great idea. The guy praised the idea. Zhenfei asked what he had to do until the moment of death and if he would remain himself. It turned out that the soul was archived. It could not be damaged. That information was understandable. The young man was confused by the fact that he would have to live at least another 50 years in this body. The guy asked the electronic assistant if completing the task would count if he committed suicide. The system was silent. Zhenfei phrased the question differently and asked if he had to die due to circumstances beyond his control. Turns out you can't do that. The system wouldn't activate. The conclusion was obvious. You can't kill yourself, but you can hasten your death. There was only one thing left to clarify. The boy asked the system who he really was now. He remembered his past life in someone else's body. The system told him that he was Zhenfei to the world. The young man rejoiced and promised to lead a proper life. Lastly, the guy was reminded that he should live the life of a decent person. Zhenfei frowned. This would be difficult. He couldn't believe that being reborn in another world was so boring. He would have to live the life of an ordinary man without any desires. The briefing was over. The system wished good luck to the surprised young man. If there are any questions, the system will answer them. Immediately afterward, the system menu went out. The bright blue glow disappeared. The world looked like a normal world again. Zhenfei took a long look at the place where the system had just been and watched the last blue pixels melt into the sky. The sky cleared. It became clear that the system could not be returned to a certain point. It was time to start exploring a new world. The young man smiled, remembering how he was dying of overwork just a short while ago. Now he had a different personality. Everything was in the past. The boy took a firm step towards his home. He wanted to start a new life without breaking the rules of the system. The small hut where the guard had lived before his death was deep in the forest and protected from prying eyes. This night was very important to the Ecstasy sect. Every full moon, the priestess performed a special ritual in the mountain temple. Climbing under the roof, the girl watched the ritual without anyone noticing. The congregation was praising their saint Shui Qingmei. In her hand, the priestess held a brightly glowing pink orb. The priestess held a brightly glowing pink orb in her hand. She solemnly exclaimed that with the help of the magic sphere, the Ecstasy sect would be able to rise above the rest of the demonic schools. The sectarians in black robes praised the almighty saint with one voice. No one would make them doubt their faith. Suddenly, some force made the priestess freeze in place. When she felt the pressure from above, she looked up at the roof. A strong gust of wind swooped down on Shui Qingmei. She badly injured her arm and rubbed the bruised spot resentfully. Suddenly, the priestess felt that she had lost a powerful artifact due to the strange attack. At the top of the temple stood a girl in light-colored robes. She victoriously held a pink orb in her hand. The guest made surprised eyes as if she didn't understand anything and watched the head priestess carefully. Shui Qingmei frowned. She now realized whose mischief it was and vowed to take revenge on her abuser. The girl seemed to pay no attention to her. She raised the magic ball high above her with a bright glow. The priestess squinted her eyes. She had had enough of this. The guest playfully offered to catch up with her and take away the magic artifact. Shui Qingmei felt as if she had woken up. She shouted loudly that the sphere should be taken away and rushed first. The sect members ran after her. Zhenfei slept uninterruptedly until the wee hours of the morning. The sun had already illuminated the thatched roof of his small forest cottage when he started to wake up. The young man yawned and reluctantly stood up. Stretching on his way, he opened the shutters and walked back to his makeshift bed. Unlike the last world, here you could lie around as long as you wanted and rest properly before starting a new life. Putting his elbows under the back of his head, the guy thoughtfully considered how it would be easier to die without breaking the rules of the system. Suddenly his stomach rumbled violently. Zhenfei pressed his hands against his torso to calm the unpleasant feeling. Unfortunately, it was hard to fool the stomach. Sweating from the heat, the young man realized that he was very hungry. Starvation was not encouraged by the system either. The only option left was to try to get some food by hunting. But the biggest problem was that the shack was surrounded by mountains and forests. He had no idea what he could find in the forest. The young man in his past life had never taken a break from his desk, and so he didn't understand at all how one could survive in the forest. Zhenfei was sure that not even a week would pass before he would suffer the fate of the former body owner's father. Besides, one could simply crash to death. The young man decided that such an unplanned death would not be considered a breach of the system and ran out of the house in search of adventure. For long hours, he did not come across any wildlife. It took a few hours before the boy came out onto the lawn and met the beast. Zhenfei stood there without moving. He was begging the wild boar to be done with him quickly. The young man wanted a new life as soon as possible. It was seconds away from death and rebirth. The ground shook under the hooves of the enraged beast. The boy smiled smugly. Very soon he would get a new life and become the lord of this world. The vulture was approaching faster and faster. His eyes grew more and more bloodshot as he advanced. He ducked his muzzle and sprinted forward. Zhenfei didn't feel any fear. The young man knew that the wounds would be fatal. In any case, he would bleed out and die rather quickly. The beast ran up close to him. Now the boy could see every crevice and jagged edge of its sharp fangs. But at the very last second, something incredible happened. The hunter's hands sprang up in a flash, intercepting the fangs. Zhenfei couldn't understand what was going on. He had never been hunting and had never even seen such a thing on TV programs. Leaning forward a little, the young man arched his back and threw the beast's huge body over him. The wolf's eyes glazed over with pain. The wild beast flew backwards with a howl, dragging the guy who was holding on tightly to his enemy's fangs. It occurred to Hunter that Zhenfei's body remembered his muscle reflexes and automatically repeated all the movements. The flight was fatal for the wild boar. With its enormous weight, it made a large hole in the ground and did not show any signs of life. It made a difference. He stared up at the clear blue sky as if he could find the answer to his question. Zhenfei thought deeply. It became clear that he wouldn't be able to find his doom on the hunt. It would take too much time. Unfortunately, the owner of the body was a strong hunter. The young man inherited all his skills and knowledge. The boy gritted his teeth in anger. He shouted that he did not want to live another 50 years, so let a stone fall on his head and kill him. Even back at the house, the boy continued to stand against the wall and curse his worthless life. He wanted to die quickly. Suddenly, a meteorite hit the thatched roof of the house. As it burned up in the atmosphere, it set fire to the small but cozy dwelling. Zhenfei couldn't believe that his house was burning down right before his eyes. He shouted that this shouldn't have happened. Heaven heard him, but misunderstood him. The stone should have fallen on him, not on the house. The young man ran into the house. He hoped that he would be able to put out the fire and save the house. By this time, half of the roof was gone. Unfortunately, it was too bad. My eyes were watering from the smoke. Broken beams and flooring parts lay on the floor. Looking around carefully, the guy realized he could try to save the day. A few boards from the partition hadn't fallen all the way down. He stooped back as hard as he could and tried to level the partition to keep the roof from collapsing completely. Only one thing was clear in this situation. He had finally lost his home, and now he had nowhere to live. Zhenfei felt sad. Suddenly, the young man realized what was the source of his distress, and he was very surprised. At first, he couldn't believe it. Instead of a burnt piece of meteorite, there was a beautiful girl in light-colored clothes lying on the floor. She was unconscious. Zhenfei froze in place and stared at the guest for a few seconds. He couldn't believe that a cute girl had almost burned down his house. But the facts stubbornly spoke for themselves. There was a huge round hole in the roof directly above Zhao Shuili, through which one could admire the sky. The master squatted down beside the girl. She was still unconscious. A sharp sword lay by her hand. Zhenfei cautiously glanced at the sharp sword with a comfortable hilt. He assumed that the guest was a cultivator from the legends. The young man crawled closer and looked into Zhao Shuili's face. It was hard to tell from her appearance whether she was alive or not. To find out for sure, the guy put his ear to the guest's chest and listened. There was no heartbeat, and the girl was not breathing. Zhenfei lay with her eyes closed and listened carefully. Unfortunately, all signs said that she had not survived. The young man sadly said that he was very sorry. At this moment, the cultivator sat down on the floor and looked at him suspiciously. The boy stood there dead or alive with fear. He hoped that the girl didn't understand anything in her sleep, and everything would be all right. Zhao Shuili stared at the guy intently. There was no doubt about it. This cocky guy was just lying on her chest. His eyes gave him away. Without thinking, the cultivator kicked the insolent man in the stomach. With a howl of pain, Zhenfei flew to the other corner and hit the back of his head. Tears splashed from his eyes. The young man waved his hands and shouted that he was misunderstood. He was just checking his breathing rate. The confused girl's face twisted in pain. The severe wounds made themselves known. She said she was in a lot of pain. The boy looked at the celestial guest with surprise. He could not understand what the girl meant. Finding a small pebble near her, the cultivator threw it at her master with hatred. It hit the top of his head and ricocheted. Letting off a little steam, the girl calmed down and listened to the man's side of the story. They walked out of the ruined house onto the lawn. Zhenfei told the interviewer that the dwelling was completely destroyed, so they could no longer stay in it. He offered to try and heal Zhao Shuili's wounds and volunteered to look for some medicinal herbs. The young man frowned at what was left of his shack. He hadn't even lived in that house for a day. He didn't see that the girl had started to take off her clothes. Zhenfei was thinking hard, so he didn't immediately hear his interlocutor's voice. She said that there was no need to go for herbs. The young man turned his head in surprise and wanted to ask why there was no need to go for herbs, but he couldn't finish the sentence. The cultivator unashamedly undressed in front of him. Such a sight made the guy numb. He had never seen naked women in his previous life. Stammering in surprise, Zhenfei wondered why she was undressing. His eyes almost fell out. The girl had a perfect figure. In the meantime, the celestial woman extended her delicate hand with its neat nails to the young man. Everything about her seemed perfect. As if by magic, two bubbles appeared in the air. There was some kind of substance in them. Zhao Shuili asked her interlocutor to help apply medicine to her body. She is now weak and cannot heal herself. The young man immediately imagined his hands touching the body of a naked beauty. He started to bleed profusely from his nose. Shyly reaching out his hand for the medicine, an embarrassed Zhenfei asked the girl if she was sure she wanted it. The Celestial turned away from her interlocutor and proudly informed the surprised guy that cultivators didn't care about such trivial matters. The young man came close to the stranger and stated that she was quite brave. The girl replied that he was very kind. Zhenfei dripped some of the life-giving substance onto his fingers and began rubbing the cultivator into the skin on his back. He was very surprised by Zhao Shuili's sturdy body. After such wounds, it was unlikely that an ordinary person could survive. In addition to the many abrasions and bruises, she had one impressive injury on her back. It was obviously very serious. A deep cut from his right shoulder blade ran diagonally downward almost to his lower back. The young man gently touched the wound. He evenly filled the entire cut with the substance from the vial and lubricated all the abrasions and scratches on the girl's back. Right before his eyes, the blood curdled. The edges of the deep wound began to heal on their own, as if it were a small cut. After a few seconds, only a barely visible scar was a reminder of the serious injury. Zhenfei suspected that the medicine belonged to immortals. The young man asked the girl in surprise where she had gotten such a deep wound and what kind of miracle medicine it was. Zhao Xueli reached for her kimono and got dressed. She said thoughtfully it was too long to talk about it. The embarrassed girl introduced herself. She is indeed a cultivator of the Naiwen Sword School and is very grateful for the help. The guy looked at his new acquaintance with astonishment. This cultivator was really thanking him for his help. For a few seconds, the young man stared at the celestial. He was very pleased to be near a deity. Zhenfei belatedly realized that the girl was expecting the same thing, and gave his name from the past world. He said he was into hunting. The young man pointed his finger at the sky and asked how Zhao Xueli had gotten inside his house and why she had fallen. The cultivator said that she wanted to thwart the Ecstasy sect's ill intentions, but she was spotted and pursued for a long time. She promised to tell her sect about the ruined house and promised that the guy would be compensated handsomely. Zhenfei turned aside and thought for a moment. This girl was really incredible to have escaped from the sectarians. He turned to his interlocutor and asked Zhao Xueli with interest what she intended to do now. The girl told him that other sect attacks would follow very soon. She had to get to her family as soon as possible. The cultivator suddenly felt one of the wounds on her arm open. It happened very inconveniently. There was no time left at all. The young man shrieked when he saw that his companion's hand was bleeding. Her eyes were watering because of the pain. He stated that Zhao Xueli might not be able to endure the long journey. Her injuries looked quite serious. A little embarrassed, the girl asked for help getting to her sect. She would be very grateful. Zhenfei was surprised. He couldn't believe that a cultivator was offering him a journey together. This was opening up new possibilities. When she realized it, the girl shook her head and shouted that the young man shouldn't accompany her. It might be too dangerous. The guy surprisingly asked the cultivator how far away the sect was. He didn't want to leave Zhao Xueli with such wounds. Closing her eyes, the guest thought and estimated the distance. She said it would take about 2 weeks. The young man asked what the probability of meeting the Ecstasy sectarians was. The woman replied that they would be chased all the time. Zhenfei pretended to think hard, but actually faintly smirked. He had a plan. Turning away from the girl, the guy asked the system if it would be a violation if he died protecting his partner. It turned out that it wasn't against the rules. Zhao Xueli exclaimed that she had no right to force the young man to help her. It was up to his personal desire. Zhenfei turned to his interlocutor and coughed businesslike, pretending to be concentrating on her suggestion. He looked at the girl and firmly stated that everything was fine. He would help her get home safe and sound. The cultivator cheerfully asked if he really agreed to help. The young man had to turn away. His nose began to stretch because of the untruth. The guy pathetically said he couldn't stay away and had to help her fight the demonic sect. Zhao Xueli blushed slightly at such sweet talk. She realized that the person she was talking to was lying, but she decided to leave the showdown for later. The girl asked if he was sure of his decision. Zhenfei smiled and said that she should thank her savior. They would have good luck. Cultivator asked him to hurry up. The stalker sect would soon hit her trail. The young man asked him to wait. He needed to pack his things. After gathering everything he needed, Zhenfei approached the tombstone of the old man. He promised to let his son's body die, and then they would be reunited. The guy was very pleased with himself. As a hunter, he was good, but a few members of the demonic sect would clearly be stronger. Saying goodbye to this place forever, the young man turned in the other direction and called out to his partner. Zhenfei slung his bow on his shoulder. He said that he was already ready to move out on the road. The girl ran happily, catching up with the guy. At this time, Shui Qingmei was in the forest camp and bitterly lamented the loss of her magic artifact. Breathless, the sectarians listened to her curses. Just because of one girl, the priestess would not be able to realize her plan to develop the sect. Choosing a higher rock, the leader placed her bare foot on it. She uses the natural elevation as a podium. Shui Qingmei shouted from on high that she would make the night guests pay the bill. She would regret sticking her nose into their temple. The sectarians did not move. They were well trained to speak only when necessary. The priestess scrutinized the handful of sect members close to her and made a choice, calling out Zhao Kuanyi's name. The man with the long staff in his hand turned his head and nodded politely. He guessed what the leader would demand. The sect master humbly bowed his head, waiting for Shui Qingmei's instructions. He was a reliable person, and the girl appreciated him for that. The priestess said loudly that she had high hopes for the man. He is one of her best people and knows what needs to be done. The leader demanded to track down Zhao Shuili from the sword school and return the demonic school's magic artifact. Zhao Kuanyi humbly bowed and declared that he would complete the saint's task with honor. She could not worry about it. Out of the corner of his eye, the sectarian caught some strange movement to his right and turned alertly. One of the sectarians handed him a golden cloth and reminded him that their opponent was very strong. They needed to use all their strength. The girl put the clothes in the battle scout's hands and asked her to take them with her just in case. Anything could come in handy. Zhao Kuanyi was very surprised. Only a few times had he seen this magic item up close, but he hadn't dared to touch it. The man couldn't believe that he had actually gotten his hands on such a powerful relic. His eyes shone with delight. The sectarian asked if the great saint was really giving him such a valuable artifact. Shui Qingmei faintly smiled. She explained to the man that she was only giving the magic item for the duration of the task. But if he could find and retrieve the missing item and then eliminate Zhao Shuili, the reward would be very generous. Zhao Kuanyi obediently bowed and thanked the priestess. From his decades in the sect, he knew that priestesses did not break promises. The saint smiled gloatingly. She had managed to track down her rival with the incense that indicated the location of the soul. In the late afternoon, the guy and the girl took a break. Zhenfei went to sleep close to the fire to make it easier to keep an eye on him. Putting his shield under his head instead of a pillow, the young man snored and didn't see the cultivator approaching him. After the long crossing, the lad slept so sweetly that no rumbling in the world could have awakened him. Zhao Shuili slowly approached her partner. After making sure that he was asleep, the girl reached out her hand to him. The cultivator touched her body with her wispy fingers and gently ran her fingers over the young man's chest. He continued to sleep. Zhao Shuili moved closer and put her foot behind the guy's groin. Zhenfei just turned his head. When he felt the pleasant touch, he opened one eye immediately. He was very curious to know who was seducing him. To the guy's surprise, Zhao Shuili, red as a boiled crayfish, was standing beside him. Her foot was right on his chest. Zhenfei couldn't believe that the cultivator herself had come to him at night for a specific purpose. With surprise, he woke up. The girl made him very embarrassed by this prank, and the guy himself blushed. The events were moving too fast. Zhao Shuili removed her foot and sat on top of him. She leaned closer to the young man. This caused his heart to nearly rise out of his chest. Closing her eyes, the cultivator leaned closer and closer. A little more, and their mouths would merge in a continuous kiss. The girl's lips pressed against the boy's ear. She whispered in a languid voice that she loved him very much and the hour had come. There was a fire burning not far from them. They felt good together. Everything around them was in a kind of translucent pink mist. Zhenfei looked at the cultivator with interest. He was pleased to feel the touch of her hands on his body. Suddenly, a confused Zhao Shuili seemed to wake up and exclaim that they should be careful. The sectarians were very close by. The young man gingerly turned around and asked loudly where exactly those people were. He was unhappy that it was over so quickly. The fog kept not clearing. The boy kept asking questions, and the cultivator asked him to speak a little quieter. She told the surprised interlocutor that this spy was very cautious. She had smelled him because of the sect's fog that awakens desires. Zhao Shuili asked the young man to take a closer look. He could see the pink mist caused by the sect artifact. Zhenfeng followed the girl's advice and gazed into the fog. It really did not seem gray now, but with a pink tint. The young man was beginning to realize something. It turns out it was the fog that did it. It had entered his mind and made him act irrationally. The guy remembered that he often read various meaningless stories furtively at work, when no one saw. Zhao Shuili leaned closer to him and embarrassingly confessed that the Witch Mountain artifact only worked on girls. Zhenfei blushed. He only now realized what had caused the girl to come to him. Everything happened because of the magic item. The cultivator coughed suspiciously. The young man turned around and excitedly asked what had happened to her. The girl stood with her eyes closed. She admitted that she could resist for a while longer, but it would be difficult. The night was just beginning. The moon was shining over the forest. Unfortunately, it was no longer time to sleep. We had to get rid of the pursuit. Zhenfei crouched beside her interlocutor, holding her by the shoulders. The pink fog made her feel like she was in a dream. The guy let go of the cultivator and asked what they could do against the pink mist invasion. Without opening her eyes, her companion slowly muttered that there were two options. The first option was more effective, but risky. The astonished young man heard that in such a case the enemy would die, but he himself might die. Zhenfei rejoiced. This kind of option suited him. He mentally asked to use this particular opportunity. The girl interpreted his silence in her own way. She had no intention of sending her savior to his death. The guy worriedly glared at Zhao Shuili with his eyes and begged the heavens for the girl to change her mind. He would agree to this option. Cultivator stated that there was another possibility. The young man only needed to find the spy. She would kill him herself. Jen Feng pointed at himself in surprise and asked if his interlocutor really wanted him to find a sectarian. The girl explained that by using magical items, the man hides his presence, and she cannot detect him. Since the guy grew up in the woods and knows every path here, he should be able to find the sectarian much faster than she does. Zhao Shuili recognized that she was sending him on a difficult mission. But now it is the only way to survive. There is no other way. One sectarian could also solve his question. The young man smiled and said that he understood. He would definitely find the spy. Turning away from the girl, Jen Feng smiled even wider. His time had come. As soon as he met with the sect master, he would immediately perish and be reborn. The young man stood in the fog and tried to guess in which direction he should go to quickly disappear from this world. Zhao Kuanyi was much closer to them than they both realized. The magic cloak camouflaged him in the shadows of the trees. Other than that, it was impossible to smell or hear the man in this cloak. None of the five senses could recognize him. The sectarian knew very well that his enemies could only stumble upon him by accident. And even then, they wouldn't be able to recognize who was standing in front of them. Watching the couple, Zhao Kuanyi decided to wait for the witch mountain to affect the girl and then kill her. He crept closer and thought that it would be a good idea to take away the sect artifact from Zhao Shuili and get an additional reward. Suddenly, the man noticed the young man peeking out from behind a tree and looking cautiously in his direction. He could not believe that he had been spotted. It turned out that Zhen Fei just happened to be nearby. As he drew the bowstring, he gingerly peered into the trees, trying to find the enemy. Zhao Kuanyi cautiously peeked out from behind the tree. He realized that the guy was just trying to find him and calm down. The sectarian knew that his rival would not be able to detect him. He could confuse the trail so that he was looked for in the south when he was in the north. Watching his enemy, the man chuckled wryly. He was sure that a mere mortal would not be able to find him. Suddenly, the sectarian realized that he had underestimated his opponent. It was clear from his eyes that the man had discovered himself. Spinning at a tremendous speed, the arrow with a sharp tip flew straight into the tree that Zhao Kuanyi was standing by. There was no time to think at all. The deadly weapon was at an alarming distance from his face. The man had no choice but to give himself away and break the arrow, intercepting it not far from himself. The moon still hung over the forest. Blackbirds, disturbed by the night's incident, flocked around the trees. Zhao Kuanyi tried to stealthily leave and tossed the broken arrow aside. Unfortunately, the disguise was already broken. Both boys were thinking the same thing. The young man was disappointed that his rival had revealed the location, and now the plan would not be realized. The mercenary couldn't understand how this mortal was able to easily determine his location. Now one must start over again. Jen Feng was tearing his hair out of anger. He couldn't forgive himself for hitting the enemy the first time and almost killing him. A moment ago, the boy had calculated that the smell was coming from the south. If he shot toward the north, he'd miss for sure. In order to avoid accidentally hitting Zhao Shuili, the young man decided to shoot at an open area that wasn't covered by branches. With the bowstring firmly drawn, Zhen Fei looked around. The plan was unmistakable. Everything would work. Once a guy goes to raise an arrow, he will inevitably draw the attention of the sectarian sitting in ambush. The man will immediately jump out of the bushes and deliver the fatal blow. This is the end of his life in this world. Remembering how ingenious the plan had been, and how quickly it had fallen into disrepair, the young man couldn't help but cry. He couldn't even imagine that this type would think of hiding in a completely different place. Zhen Fei tiredly fell to his knees. He had lost his only chance. Now Zhao Shuili would not allow himself to let the sect master go. Suddenly the boy saw the man lightning fast between the trees, taking advantage of his confusion. Turning back to the girl, the young man was surprised to realize that the cultivator was still standing near the trees and didn't even move. Zhen Fei wondered why she didn't chase after that guy and finish him off like she promised. Burning with shame, Zhao Shuili admitted that her wound was still very strong. Besides, she didn't expect the young man to find the spy so quickly. The girl stepped forward and grabbed his hand with both of her own, expressing her gratitude for his help. The boy carefully released his hand and looked at his companion in surprise. He didn't know what to do next. Blushing with embarrassment, the cultivator asked to catch the man again. She definitely wouldn't miss him this time. Zhen Fei promised to do his best. He asked the girl to stay in that spot and keep an eye on the area. He stepped back a few meters and drew the bowstring. He promised himself that this time he wouldn't succeed. The boy stared off into the distance and told himself that under no circumstances could he get into that sectarian. Watching him out of the corner of his eye, the man thought the same thing. No mortal would be able to hit him this time. He moved through the forest quickly and silently. Not everyone in his sect could pinpoint his location. After flying around a large circle in deceptive ways, Zhao Kuanyi returned to the same place he was before. He praised himself. No one would think of shooting at the same spot. The man took cover behind a tree and smiled. He was curious to see where that warrior would shoot this time. Zhen Feng stood beside the girl by the fire. The sectmaster ducked his head slightly. He had a good view of the couple. The young man drew his bowstring and looked around the forest carefully, trying to figure out where the man couldn't hide. He decided that the spy couldn't be hiding in the same place. The sectarian watched the boy's movements suspiciously. To his surprise, the insane man's arrow crashed again into the tree under which he sat watching the hunter. Zhenfeng turned black with anger. His death had to be postponed again. The sect master couldn't believe that he had been found again. With a quick jump, the man disappeared into the dense forest. The young man was surprised to realize that the spy had escaped again. He turned towards his partner. Zhao Xueli's cheeks instantly flared up. She knew that she was guilty in front of her boyfriend. The hunter perplexedly assumed that the girl didn't have enough time to eliminate the mercenary this time either. The cultivator covered her eyes with her hands in shame. Her body was trembling. Trying to justify herself, the girl said that it happened too fast. Zhao Xueli almost burst into tears with frustration. The mercenary turned out to be too fast. She frowned and pulled herself together. The warrior drew her sword. Now she wouldn't give the sectarian any more chances. He wouldn't get away a third time. The warrior's body was still very weak. She stood leaning on her sword. Blood continued to drip from her arm. The cultivator groaned in intense pain and gripped the hilt of her sword more comfortably. She announced softly that she was ready to slay the enemy. Zhao Xueli swore that she wouldn't let the spy get away again. Once the guy finds the sectarian, she will kill him. Zhenfeng gingerly looked at his interlocutor. Despite her painful appearance, the girl could finish off a crippled enemy. Tightening his bowstring, the young man pleaded that this time the man would definitely be in a completely different place and attack him. There was no more time left. The pink mist had almost cleared, and the girl's medicine would take effect. This was his last chance to die. The sectarian also couldn't help but notice that his charms had almost ceased their magical effect. He had one last attempt left. Zhao Kuanyi didn't know if he could survive today, but he wasn't going to give up without a fight. He rushed into the center of the fog, leaping through the trees. Zhenfei drove his bow around the forest, trying to figure out where to shoot to avoid hitting the spy. Nothing interesting came to mind. The sectarian was jumping on the branches like a squirrel. He did not understand where he could hide from the shooter. He couldn't decide where to shoot the arrow. The guy could be anywhere, and he could accidentally hit him. The man at this time was sitting in the mist on one of the branches of a tree, sheltering himself higher up. He realized that hiding from the boy everywhere was dangerous. After long deliberation, the hunter realized that he had to shoot at a place where the sectarian would definitely not be able to hide. Zhao Kuanyi also decided to outsmart the enemy and appear out of nowhere in the exact place where the enemy would definitely not fire. Quickly glancing around the surroundings, the man decided that the most reliable tactic would be to attack from above, from the sky itself. As the young man perplexedly drove his bow through the forest, choosing a place to hunt, the sectarian leaped at him from the top of a tree, celebrating his victory. Unfortunately, the guy thought that Zhao Kuanyi would definitely not hide in the sky and released an arrow in the direction of the spy. This time it was much worse. The man saw the enemy arrow only 2 centimeters away from him, and it was too late to dodge. The sectarian realized that all this time the guy had been watching his movements. He had only pretended not to see him. At the last second, the man thought it was too mean of the young man. He was just playing with him, like a cat with a mouse. All he could do now was pray the arrow didn't hit him in the face. That would be the worst of it. Then he wouldn't be able to complete the mission. When Zhenfei saw what had happened, he could barely contain his anger. This madman had jumped right on top of his arrow. No common sense could explain the reasons for this sectarian behavior. The young man could not understand why he fell into it every time. Suddenly, the guy realized everything. This spy also has a system and craves death. That's why he bravely throws himself at his arrows. At this time, Zhao Xueli managed to break through the fog. She quickly flew towards the mercenary while paving her way with her sword. Her eyes blazed with hatred. The girl was rapidly approaching. A pink plume in the sky remained in her path. Zhao Kuanyi saw a cultivator flying after him and was a little frightened. It was already more dangerous than a mortal with a bow. As the warrior flew closer, she swung her sword and angrily shouted that it was the last hour for him. There was no other way out. The man activated the protective blue translucent sphere, hoping it would hold. Zhao Xueli continued flying forward and furiously brought her sword down on the sectmaster's hiding place. The sphere cracked. The powerful weapon sliced through the blue ball. The sword continued to cut into the protective sphere like a knife into butter. The cultivator was inexorably approaching the center of the sphere. The girl continued her flight. There was only one thing on her mind now. She had to take the chance and kill the spy. Zhao Kuanyi realized with horror that the cultivator was already inside the sphere. He had a few seconds to live. In the same second, there was a huge release of energy. The place of the fight lit up with a pink bright light. It was like a big fireworks display. Raising his head, Zhenfeng excitedly watched the fight. A flash of incredible power illuminated the patch of forest they were in. Stones of various sizes were flying from the sky. They almost hit the boy himself. The young man didn't care about that. He was worried about his companion. Right in front of his eyes, somebody flew past at great speed and landed with a thud not far from the bushes. The dust cloud began to dissipate after a while. Zhenfeng saw that there was a spy lying on the path. Out of the corner of his eye, the guy noticed Zhao Shueli descending from the sky not far away. The girl didn't seem to be injured. The young man rushed towards the sectarian whose face was covered in blood. He hoped to be able to talk to him before the cultivator killed the man. The hunter leaned over his opponent and wondered why Zhao Kuanyi kept throwing himself at his arrows. Seeing the source of his problems in front of him, the sectarian looked angrily at the boy. With a shaking hand, he tried to reach for his pursuer. Yinfeng leaned a little lower and was surprised to assume that the man actually wanted to die. Zhao Kuanyi was even more angry, but he couldn't even say a word. At his own helplessness, the sect master burst into tears. The young man saw that his victim was bleeding profusely. He cried out that the bandages were stained with blood. The guy worriedly shouted that the bleeding was too much. He was worried about the sectarian's well-being. Zhenfeng angrily lifted his opponent by the scruff of his neck and exclaimed that it was too early to die. He wanted to ask a few questions. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Zhao Shueli put her sword away in its scabbard and asked how she was feeling. He assumed that it was too early to put the weapon away. The girl replied that she was fine. The demonic sect was only testing them. Next time, the opponent would be stronger. The young man asked in surprise as to how the sectarians knew of their advancement. After all, there are many ways to reach the sword sect. The cultivator confusedly admitted that they had to get to her temple in 2 weeks at the latest, or she might die. There are only 3 shortcuts. They are well known to the Ecstasy sect, so there is simply no other way. The girl blushed and informed him that she wouldn't blame the guy if he left, because he agreed to this trip. Zhenfeng exclaimed that this was out of the question. He had promised to escort her and would not renege on his words. In fact, the young man was thinking of something else entirely. He begged the heavens to send a stronger enemy as soon as possible. Zhao Shueli silently thanked her savior and hugged the back of his head, pulling him tightly against her chest. The boy couldn't understand what was going on. It was like an immodest attempt to seduce him again. Feeling a touch on his chest, Zhenfeng groaned and helplessly raised his hands. His eyes went to his forehead in surprise. The girl pressed him even harder against her. The young man squealed indignantly that it was too much. He couldn't breathe. Fortunately, he managed to break free. The guy jumped back and shouted to the cultivator that this was a very inappropriate act. Zhao Shueli blushed like a boiled cancer and said that the artifact was still affecting her. She asked the young man to step back for a while. The girl admitted that she can get rid of the pink fog effect, but to do so, she needs no one to look at her. Zhenfeng willingly agreed to move farther away from the cultivator and not interfere with her getting rid of the remnants of the magical effect. The warrior's moans echoed throughout the forest. The young man promised that he would move farther away and not look or listen. Meanwhile, in one of the mountain camps belonging to the Ecstasy sect, Shui Qingmei received sad news. There was a bluish smoke coming from the magic card rolled up in the scroll. It signaled the demise of her person. The smoke was increasing with every second. It became more and more visible, and after a while it covered the entire scroll. The priestess grudgingly thought that Zhao Kuanyi had no chance of winning. She had only lost a valuable artifact. Unfolding the map, Shui Qingmei reviewed her ambush locations along the girl's path. She was certain that Zhao Shueli would not be able to handle them. The further journey through the forest was successful. The boy and the girl reached the city of Janan without encountering any opponents. Seeing the signboard with the name of the city, Zhenfeng recognized that his companion knew her business. She avoided places where she could give an ambush. While walking through the plaza, the young man asked why they would enter this city if they were going to the location of the sword cult. Zhao Shueli unfolded the map and explained that Janan was protecting the entrance on the western border of Xidin County. From there, it was a short walk to the sword cult. The boy looked with interest at the map and the roads with intersections marked on it. Now he had a better sense of the terrain. Zhenfeng asked if they could be pursued by the demonic sect while they were already not far from their temple. The girl thoughtfully replied that Wen's sword cult was the strongest, but that didn't rule out the possibility of meeting mercenaries. The young man clapped his hands together happily in anticipation of the pleasure. The journey was getting more and more dangerous, which was to his advantage. The pair of young men were walking down a wide and spacious street. As he continued to talk with his companion, Zhenfeng imagined a sword stabbing into him. A whole day went by like that. The moon replaced the sun's rays. The boy cursed the timid sectarians. He wanted to die quickly. Stretched out in a handstand, the young man regarded the screen behind which the water was pouring. The cultivator was taking a shower. Unfortunately, the room was small. Zhenfeng didn't have a chance to turn the other way. The blood from his nose ran down his forehead in rivulets. At the girl's request for safety, they rented one hotel room for 2, but the guy was no better off for it. Zhao Shuili stepped out of the shower and exclaimed that their enemies were nearby. She tore off her sheet as she walked. The young man could not bear the sight. His mouth was bleeding profusely. His eyes reflected astonishment. Seeing the naked companion, Zhenfeng couldn't keep his balance and flew face down on the floor. The girl walked over to the guy, who was barely breathing. He couldn't resist and touched the soft skin of her leg. The boy noticed that everything happened too fast. Zhao Shuili bashfully turned her head to him and wrapped herself in a sheet. She declared that she could sense the sectarians as well. Zhenfeng sighed heavily and spent a glance at the girl's seductive figure as he continued to lie on the floor. His companion was too susceptible. Voices could be heard outside the window. They were all cursing the cultivator and promising to take revenge on her tonight. The warrior unmistakably recognized who she was dealing with. Putting on her magic ring, she shouted that she recognized the mother of the 5 poisons. Taking the sword out of its sheath, the girl called out the names of Lin Shenggu, nicknamed 1,000 Shards, and the faceless monk Wu Xiangxi. Zhao Shuili demanded that Xi Yangpai and Sang Weishi show themselves to her. The young man glumly observed his partner. He assumed that the sectarian who had come after them at the inn was indeed named exactly as she had said. It was simply unbelievable that the girl smelled the presence of the mercenaries, who didn't give themselves away with a single sound. Suddenly, the large double-paned window of their room opened noisily. There was no one behind it, as if it were the fault of a strong wind. Cultivator ordered her partner to prepare for battle. She already had her sword at the ready. The boy grabbed a stool. Several silhouettes appeared in the window. One of them said that they were happy to hear their names. Zhao Shuili had not forgotten them. The gray-haired woman reminded the girl that she had killed many unfortunate people. They do not forget those who hurt them badly. The warrior laughed and informed her that she wasn't quite sure which one of them could be called unhappy. She took a leisurely look at all 4 of the night visitors and declared that it looked more like a bad joke. Pointing her finger at the elderly woman, the cultivator revealed that it was the mother of the 5 poisons. She poisoned the river to stop the plague. That smiling man over there with the red necklace around his neck was actually a faceless monk who killed people and slashed their faces. The gray-haired elder Lin Shenggu, whose age no one knows. He ate children to cultivate his own soul. The guy with the frightened eyes is named Xia Yangpai. He used mortal humans as fodder for shadow monsters. Zhao Shuili threateningly made a lunge with her sword and declared that all 4 of them were sinners. They would not be able to survive this battle. Zhen Fei couldn't believe that it was all true. He confusedly said that he had never experienced plague and cannibalism before. The mother of the 5 poisons tapped her cane irritably on the wooden floor. The sound echoed through the room. She shouted that no mortal could match the strength of cultivators. This guy's not getting out of here alive. Zhao Shuili pulled off her sheet. She exclaimed that in that case, there was no need to wait. She was ready to fight right now. The young man realized that his finest hour had arrived, and bravely rushed at his enemies with his stool, hoping to die quickly. At this moment, the sheet that the cultivator carelessly threw off fell on him. The boy shrieked in surprise. Trying to free herself from the sheet, Zhen Fei shouted that they can't undress whenever they feel like it. They might get kicked out. Besides, she is still injured. The girl needs to conserve her strength. The hunter quickly brought the girl her robes and carefully covered her with the cloak. Zhao Shuili perplexedly thanked him. The mother of 5 poisons coughed softly, clearing her throat, and asked if the guy really wanted to fight in the center of the city. She explained that a very large number of mortals would suffer if all cultivators used the power at the same time. The young man grudgingly repeated that he was willing to fight instead of the girl. He was fine with it. Zhao Shuili looked away. It was as if the old woman didn't hear him, but was communicating with the girl. She asked if the cultivator could protect the mortal in this room. The guy looked at the elderly woman in surprise and told the mother of 5 poisons that she didn't need to worry about it. Zhao Shuili leisurely spoke. She asked what the uninvited guests were after with a sharp tone. The woman offered to make a contract using the soul-joining technique. Whoever breaks the contract forfeits his soul. The young man and the old woman began to shout at each other, proving their point. The warrior watched their argument with a frown. After a while, the girl and the guy were walking through the square. Unfolding the map, she asked how many people supported them. The young man admitted that none had yet. Zhao Shuili and Ulle look at the 4 from the pleasure clan. The mother of the 5 poisons asks if the girl agrees to their little test. The woman knows they are probably no match for her, but now they have the advantage. Zhao thinks over the proposal. Yu tensely watches them. It's obvious to the guy the trap of the foursome, and he's even amazed at how they even managed to fool anyone. Zhao blurts out after a short thought that she agrees to sign the contract. Ulle whispered to her to think better. After all, the foursome couldn't be trusted. The girl smiled, saying that she knows that. She just doesn't want anyone to die. Yui stares at her in astonishment. He definitely didn't expect such a revelation. The mother of 5 poisons had already expected Zhao to agree, so she wasn't surprised at all. The girl waved her hand, followed by some energy. She was about to sign a contract. Suddenly, Ulle realizes that the woman is up to something. The mother of 5 poisons smirks, clearly pleased that she fooled the girl so easily. Yu curses under his breath, sweat dripping down his face. He doesn't want anything bad to happen. He tells them not to hurry because they will still have time to sign the contract. Zhao Sueli removes his hand, looking at the guy perplexed and waiting. The mother of poisons and the faceless monk were wary. They were ready to play by their rules. Ulle says the contract doesn't spell out all the details and rules of the test. The guy thought the contract was full of holes that obviously needed to be filled. Thoth swung around and punctured the magic pact. All of this needed to be fixed. Le couldn't stand by as Zhao is obviously being fooled. The guy has to make sure the contract will be well written. The mother of the poisons said that the one didn't dare to do that after all. Yu is the most ordinary person. Ulle started shouting that she was scared and therefore threatening. The woman said it wasn't true, and he shouldn't ruin her reputation. Zhao Sueli smirked and asked, "Does the woman definitely have a reputation?" Then she stood confidently and said that either they were going to change the contract or fight. It was obvious that she would not go for anything else. The foursome stepped back to negotiate, wondering if the contract could be changed to their favor. Ulle watched their whispering intently, following every movement and raise of voice. One of them shouted, "It's not worth trying, and there's no need to be afraid. It would not be any worse for them." The others hit him, saying none of them actually wanted to die. After finishing, the mother of the 5 poisons said that since those were so worried, they would agree to change the contract. Ulle started listing the edits and conditions that should definitely be in the contract. Tot thought that since those were so sure, he should put in a few more conditions. Another condition was that the foursome had to go to uninhabited lands after the test, so as not to cause any more trouble. The mother of the 5 poisons realized what was going on, but decided that it was better for them to agree to Ulle's terms. But here, unexpectedly, the guy said that his name should also be on the contract next to Zhao Sueli. The mother of 5 poisons agreed, mocking the guy. He's human after all, so he's not a threat at all. Ulle had no regrets, for he knew that he would only regret it if he didn't sign the contract. The woman began to recite the spell for the contract to appear. The condition of the contract had all the things Ulle listed, so the guy was satisfied. The guy turned around at Zhao's call. Her voice was concerned. She said the guy shouldn't sign the contract. It's too risky for his life. The guy smiled and said that since the whole foursome signed it, they should too. The girl looked at him in disbelief, but he did not radiate uncertainty. Ulle almost squealed with joy. The contract was almost 100% fatal, which meant that he had to sign it. Les started biting his fingernail with impatience. He already wanted to get started on the tests. That one put his finger to the contract and signed with a hand trembling with excitement. Yu carefully inscribed his name, and Zhao Sueli only realized that they would be partners. The girl always worked alone. It was unusual to see anyone around her. The girl put her hand up to the contract. Would an ordinary mortal really fight her? With careful handwriting, Sueli began to sign, carefully marking each character. Ulle had already started warming up, preparing for the test. A plan was slowly being made in his head. He couldn't wait to get started, so he asked when those would start explaining the test to them. The mother of the 5 poisons was outraged and said that these tests were completely irrelevant to mortals. However, Yu said with a smile that since his name was on the contract, the test would be up to him. Or were they afraid of losing? Zhao Sueli looked at this picture with open eyes. Few people dared to be rude to the mother of poisons. The woman got angry and grabbed Li Shengu's beard, saying that Lei was too cocky. The mother of poisons got angry and started yelling at the guy. She still saw him as an ordinary mortal. She started pulling Sheng's beard and he got angry, saying, "Why is she pulling his beard?" The woman presented her test where they have to drink 3 glasses of wine where one of them is poisoned. Li Sheng said it's easier and consists of winning it in checkers. At the faceless monk, the test was a debate. One of them had to fight a man. And at Xie Yingpai's place, those must last an hour and a half next to the shadow beast without dying. The mother of the 5 poisons told those to choose which test they would start with. Ulle had already started to choose, thinking about the test, however. He was cut short by Zhao Sueli. The girl said it's a game of survival, so she's gonna pick her. The boy looked at her unhappily. He didn't want her to ruin his plans. Zhao Sueli said that Yule's body was too weak and he might die. She would like to choose the test herself. Le felt uncomfortable, for it was obvious to him that he was not going to die. Suddenly, the guy realized that if he tried too hard to die, he would not be empowered, because they would consider it as an independent departure from life. Yu called out to the system, waiting for it to appear in front of him. Little lightning bolts appeared in the air, and that meant that in a second that one would appear. A small blue screen appeared right in front of the guy's eyes, greeting him. Yu said he signed a contract to take the test and asked if his death in battle would be considered intentional. The system responded that it would be a heroic act, not an independent taking of one's own life. Ta said that if death is not predetermined, it doesn't fit the criteria for independent deprivation. Ulle turned towards the four and Zhao Sueli. He was going to use one plan. He approached the girl and said that she seemed to think he was too weak, too. Sueli was wary, shifting her gaze full of anticipation to Li. The guy thought they were friends and even signed a contract for her. However, apparently he was wrong. Yu lowered his eyes to the floor and said that he understood, after all, that to perceived him as a mere mortal even after all this. Zhao looked at him wide-eyed. Obviously, she didn't want to offend the guy, but she couldn't trust him either. Meanwhile, the mother of 5 poisons and Li Sheng sat eating popcorn. Sueli looked at the boy with a worried look until he began to speak. However, after everything, the guy ripped off his mask of sadness and became like before, making the girl laugh. That one put even the two who were eating popcorn and laughing from the drama into a stupor. The old men choked and started coughing loudly, opening their eyes wide. Zhao shouted for Li to go already, and he said that the girl's act was good. First, the guy chose the test from the mother of poisons to drink a poison glass and get the power. The woman began stirring all the glasses with frantic speed, preparing them for them. The old lady explained the rules and told them to choose the first 3 glasses. In the first batch, one of them would be poisoned. Ulle didn't even know how to choose to get exactly on the poison. He even thought of taking glasses at random. Leaning over the liquid, the guy began to pick out the drink by color. The first 3 seemed like plain water to him, so he decided to choose one of them. Yu sighed as he gathered his strength and sipped the incomprehensible liquid from it. The drink didn't taste any different from water, so the guy was about to think it was. Examining the second glass, Ellie found that one suspicious. It must have been the one with the poison in it. Suddenly he opened his eyes very wide. His pupils narrowed as if a flashlight had been pointed at his eyes. The guy's arms and legs were numb. He couldn't feel anything at all, and it was hard for him to move. Ulle started to stagger, almost falling from his chair to the floor. Would he be lucky enough to die right now? After that, he collapsed to the floor, unable to move. His body trembled. Zhao heard the sound of falling and turned around at the sound, asking if Lei was okay. He tried to get up and replied that he was fine, though he didn't even move. The woman smiled smugly and advised Ulle to give up because he wouldn't be able to continue. Despite his numb limbs, he stood up shakily. He said he was all right, but the old woman said to wait. Yu reached for the third glass with a trembling hand that was very difficult to restrain. However, remembering the unfinished second one, he reached out and picked it up. Despite his best efforts, the glass shook in his hand and a couple drops of liquid fell onto the table. The drink burned a hole in the table, sending up a small puff of smoke. The boy's eyes widened in surprise. Ulle took the drink in his hands, looking at it slightly joyfully and detachedly. He laughed smugly. This was just what was needed. Now he would finally take his own life. Leaning back slightly, Yu tipped the glass into himself, taking loud sips. Ulle sat and prayed for the poison to take effect. He wanted to take his life sooner rather than later. The time dragged on for a long time. It seemed like an eternity, but it was only a couple of minutes. Li opened his eyes, but nothing happened. What was he wasting his time for? The woman said the one was smarter than expected. She wondered where he had learned to recognize poisons. Yu was angry. How could the liquid be so caustic that it burned through the table and just be harmless? The mother of poisons asked. Why doesn't he name his master? He has nothing to fear, for if he asks, she will not touch him. The guy was denying it, saying it wasn't about that at all. It was hard to explain. The old woman didn't understand, but Ulle said that he never had a master and didn't study poisons. The mother of the poisons brushed it off in disbelief, telling them to keep drinking. Since he was afraid to tell, she would not insist. In the first round, the woman made the most dangerous-looking thing appear to be the safest. You still couldn't believe that that liquid hadn't killed him. Just how could it have happened? The only thing that was pleasing was that it was hard to make a mistake in the second 3. That's why the guy chose the safest-looking drink. Who knows, maybe the guy will get lucky. But suddenly he stopped, his inner self telling him something. Ulle's realization hit him. He was dumbfounded for a few seconds. A dozen hexes were spinning in his head. Well, the old woman won't use the same method twice. Then you can't choose the first glass. Yu squinted his eyes. In the second round, it should obviously be the other way around. The guy, without thinking twice, chose the most dangerous-looking drink. Black. Ulle grabbed his left hand. What if the old woman had anticipated everything and poured the poison into a very ordinary mug? Or maybe she foresaw that he couldn't choose between the first and third and poisoned the second. The guy stared expectantly at the glasses, his eyes trying to find the right one. After which he grabbed his face, stretching his skin. He really didn't know where the poison was. Yu almost cried as he looked at the glasses, trying to pick out the one with poison. He touched the purple liquid and watched the mother of poisons react. Then the one touched the right liquid, and that one frowned heavily. Maybe it was a sign? Yu took the black liquid. The woman frowned again. This must definitely mean something. As the guy brought the glass closer to her mouth, the woman began to frown even more. He placed the black liquid on the table. Now Ulle was definitely sure that it wasn't poisoned. Then he took another glass. Since the others are poisoned, there's no difference in them. The boy drank it in a gulp, proud of himself, for he had been careful to pinpoint the poison. The mother of the 5 poisons said that he was really good since he chose the only glass without poison. Ulle, barely holding back tears, pressed one lip. This was the most tremendous rosary. Zhao Sueli was shocked, as he wilted and became completely sad even though he had won before. Lu let out a tear. After all, 2 rounds are already behind him, and he didn't drink the poison. That can't be true. After which he turned his gaze to the old woman and began to shout, saying why was she frowning and confusing him? The woman was shocked by such insolence and became very angry. The woman saw him as a small gnat. She started yelling about how the man was annoying her with his slowness. The guy listened to this with a serious face, feeling ashamed and stupid. How could he think it was some kind of sign? Zhao Sueli said behind his back that she admired his knowledge of poisons. She encouraged him, saying that she believed in him. However, the guy interrupted the girl and told her not to cheer him up too much. You said he would try his best. Meanwhile, tears flowed from his eyes. Toth shifted his gaze to the glasses. He's thinking too much. He needs to clear his head. Lee decided to act at random and chose a glass with a strange green liquid in it. The guy closed his eyes and without hesitating for a second drank it in one gulp. The drink was sweet. To a guy it reminded him of non-fu mineral water. And it looks like he's chosen a poison-free drink again. He's had a lot of bad luck lately. Suddenly his eyes widened and his pupils, on the contrary, narrowed greatly. The guy started coughing and blood flowed out of his mouth. Zhao was very frightened. The mother of 5 poisons burst into laughter, happy that Yu would finally die. She had won. Zhao Sueli was angry and scared at the same time. She shouted, asking what the mother of 5 poisons had done to Ulle. The woman, smiling smugly, said that Le wouldn't be able to pick the right glass this time. All because they all had poison in them. After the old woman said this, she laughed. She said that only if Yui drank the contents of all the glasses would she be able to eliminate the toxins. Afterwards, the mother of poisons made a sad grimace. Unfortunately, Ulle only had 2 hours left. The boy stood up a little and asked if it was poison. He didn't have any pain, so he was still on the job, right? Zhao Sueli didn't understand what he meant, and so she silently asked herself a rhetorical question. The old woman said that this was Yu's body's way of easing her last hours. The boy was glad, for he could die in a few days, and so he would get more power. The mother of the poisons was puzzled, as he had just drunk the poison and was already laughing. However, the woman decided not to think about him, and turned her attention to Zhao Sueli. She said that the girl had 3 more tests to take, and she was the only one left. Ta's eyes widened a little. The woman was interrupted by Le saying that he was, in fact, still alive and could move around. Toth shouted that he had 2 more hours and was enforced to take part in the tests. But now he would move on to the board game. Zhao was shocked at this guy's determination after all. He was literally spitting blood just a short while ago. Ulle smiled. This game should definitely finish him off, so he would hope that no one else would interfere. He and Mr. Sheng were actively playing while uttering some incomprehensible words. Yu strode black. He could already feel the strength leaving his body, and it was glad. Li Sheng walked with white chips again, watching the guy intently. His body grew heavy, and his joy grew ever greater. Lei was waiting to die at last. Sheng, meanwhile, was combing his beard, preparing for his victory. The old man raised one eyebrow, smiling smugly and considering the young man. That one told you not to overwork himself. After all, he would win one way or another. However, the guy said that's not going to happen, and he's going to show how the real champions play. Lu twirled the black chip in his hand, turning it one side and then the other. The young man shrieked, about to walk. His strength would soon leave him for good, but he was frustrated that he wasn't dead yet. But suddenly he felt pain and his eyes went wide. All the black chips went down, completely throwing the game off. Ulle grabbed his head and started screaming. It was too painful! Sweat ran down his face and the guy wriggled in pain, holding his hands near his ears. Zhao Sueli ran up to the guy. She called out his name and stroked his back. Lei was trembling, and so the girl realized that the poison had begun to take effect. The mother of poisons enjoyed watching this. All this time the poison had been coursing through her veins, and because of the game it had taken effect. Zhao glared angrily at the old men, then asked afterwards, what were they up to? Li Xing said that it was just his harmless special tool. And this weapon is called Ming Ye. It attacked without Yulei's knowledge. There was absolutely no way for him to know about it. The mother of poisons and faceless ones squirmed slightly. At the mention of technology, they wanted to pretend they were strangers every time. Grandfather told them to shut up so they wouldn't spoil such a moment with chatter. Sheng explained that while playing with it, the player's soul is destroyed. The purpose of the tool is to help cultivators. But Ulle, as a mortal, without a cultivator's soul, it drained energy and destroyed the mind. The man pointed the stick at the girl. She cried out that it actually hurt terribly, and it was all because of that implement. Li Xing smugly said that even without the poison, that person would have died in terrible agony. It was past midnight. A full moon. There were thousands of stars scattered across the sky. Zhao Sueli asked Ulle to take it easy and finish the tests by her. The guy, however, didn't want to stop. He asked to be allowed to die in battle. Lei was reminded of the past. He had already lost his life from lack of energy once before. Such a death was not the first time, so the young man was determined. A shadow beast loomed over Yui, flashing its red eyes. The guy, on the other hand, although he was very tired, still stood upright, radiating confidence. Time went by. The moon grew brighter and brighter, and the strength drained away faster and faster. Ulle held a black chip in his hand, almost lying down on the playing board. Thoth looked very tired, his cheekbones expressing from overwork. However, Grandpa Shang looked almost the same. Only there was no poison flowing through his veins. There were already huge bags under the guy's eyes, and sweat protruded on his forehead. He was breathing deeply, barely finding the strength to sit up. Yui felt like he was about to fall. There were still red bloodstains near his lips. He took another chip, rubbing it this way and that in his hands. The guy was leaning over the table. The game was indeed tedious. The mother of poisons hummed. He obviously didn't have long to live, but there was still time for fun. Zhao glared angrily at Ulle, feeling very bad about his sheepish stubbornness. The girl asked him to stop and wait a bit, for with every chip he put down his energy was being taken away. The same sat, staggered slightly, and placed his chips slightly crookedly on the board. The guy still said he was fine and that he could handle it. Some more time passed, but the moon was still in no hurry to disappear. About 15 minutes later, Li Shang was already very tired. That one slightly raised his head, asking if Li was definitely an ordinary mortal. Ulle was already lying upside down, but still replied, albeit with a brief yes. After that one said that he would show the strength of real mortals. Old man Shang looked at the young man tiredly. The guy with shaky hands moved the chip, saying that Grandpa's move was next. Li Shang began to stagger. He was shaken from fatigue, but he tried his best to steady himself. After that, his eyes rolled up, the iris completely missing. Grandpa Shang started to fall down. That one said he wouldn't be able to walk next. He pancake fell to the floor with a loud thud and said that Yu was the winner. The mother of the poisons looked at her grandfather with obvious displeasure and anger. She found it hard to accept their loss. Li staggered back and gave a victorious grunt. It was unexpected because the old man's strength was powerful. What was amazing was that the most ordinary person had defeated a cultivator. Yu wanted to say that he had won the second round as well, but he was interrupted by a severe pain. Here the guy started to feel nauseous. Something came up to his throat and he coughed violently. For the umpteenth time he started coughing up blood. Sueli was frightened and called out to him, running closer. The girl picked up Le as he cowered slightly to the right, and when asked how he was feeling, he couldn't answer with anything more than a stifled grunt. The mother of the poison stared at the guy in astonishment while opening her eyes wide. She said that somehow he still managed to neutralize the poison. Now it was Yule's turn to be amazed at his unexpected ability. Zhao Sueli looked at him admiringly, asking if he really did it. The old woman pointed her finger at someone, getting excited and swearing hard. That someone she pointed her finger at was the faceless monk. The woman blamed him, and said that he was the one who prevented her from poisoning Ulle and neutralized the poison. Yu only absent-mindedly hovered in the clouds, pondering how it was that he was able to neutralize the poison. Li Shang shouted at the woman to stop complaining. After all, these were not games. The mother of the poisons, however, was angry and not that very willing to listen to the lamentations. Ta said that this poison trick was a precautionary measure, in case Yu knows Li Shang's trick of the game. So, after drinking the poison, Li chose the pyrotechnic meteor. Shang and Ulle thought of the name at the same time. It was too loud. The old woman immediately explained that it was her clan's poison. It first gives energy, and then takes it away, and kills because of its excess in the body. However, she miscalculated, and the board took some of the poison along with the energy. Ulle listened to this and was amazed at how stupid and easy it all came out. The woman turned to Shang and said that he died because of her poison. The mother of the poisons was astonished, for even she had not thought of such an outcome. Ulle was very angry, for he didn't even know that there was poison in that glass. Shi Yangpai said that the poison mother had overestimated Ulle. He couldn't plan everything from the beginning. The boy's ears perked up as he heard the man's retort and listened to every word. After that, one realized that Yangpai was actually right. However, the old woman didn't believe it. She found Yui's smile while signing the contract too suspicious, but Z assumed that the guy was just too dumb. The woman still found a loophole and asked why he was so calm after drinking the poison. To this, Yangpai found no answer. Here the woman realized something. The guy didn't even believe there were poisons in the glasses. Ta concluded that Yui was teasing her, testing her patience. Lei was shocked and angry at the same time. He coughed and blood came out of his mouth again. Zhao was very frightened, shouting that the guy started coughing up blood again. The woman began to speculate on who Ulle could really be. Shang and Yangpai watched this interestedly. That's when the mother of poisons came to mind that Yu might be the son of eternal demonic master Yu Shui Han. Lei completely misunderstood who he was talking about and asked not to throw around names. Zhao Sueli tensed up, her gaze determined and frightened. After seeing the reaction, the guy became agitated and started shouting at the old woman, telling her not to dare to spread such rumors. The one said that it wasn't his father, and his father wasn't a cultivator. Yulei's father was a hunter. There was no way he could be a cultivator. The old woman was talking nonsense. Everyone listened to him attentively, slightly shocked by the shout. The mother of poisons cried out as if to say, "Here, it's obvious." The guy pulled out a small knife and asked what she was even carrying. The woman said that the master was also a hunter in the past. Yulei looked to be about 20 years old, and the demon master had disappeared just about 20 years ago. The mother of poisons decided that Yu was his secret son born after he disappeared. With those words, she made him angry. The entire foursome tensed up and got into defensive postures. Zhao Sueli looked at Lei with a startled look, but didn't dare to say anything. Yulei started to get even angrier, saying that none of this was true. The boy approached Sueli and said that his father was dead after a fight with some beast of the forest. The mother of poison struck her hands and said the words again about to be said. Yu was already twitching at this. It was very difficult for him to contain his anger. The guy cringed, asking what does that even mean? She's giving in or whatever you want to call it. The woman began to tell him that 20 years ago, the demonic master had arranged a duel. The duel was with Master Despotia. Rumor had it that he was seriously injured afterwards. And then it was said that either he had died or had turned to mortal life, forsaking former deeds. The woman said that it looked like the rumors weren't lying, and lo and behold, the son of the demon master was now standing in front of them. The guy turned to Zhao and said that the mother of poisons was lying. The girl wanted to pull out her sword already, but the guy said that he didn't have magic powers. How could he be the son of a cultivator then? The old woman shrieked, telling Yu not to lie. Who doesn't know that it takes more than 30 years to master these powers? Sweat broke out on Yulei's face. He knew absolutely nothing about this. Could he have even gotten into the body of a demon master's son? He waved the thought away, for the man was talking utter nonsense. Yulei is his name, not the name of the guy he was reborn as. The woman was talking nonsense. Suddenly, a very strange idea came into the young man's head. He began to deny his involvement with the demon master again. How could anyone even believe that? The entire foursome was offended and tense at the same time, the old woman glaring at him piercingly. The woman shrieked that since he was his son, why was he helping Zhao Sueli? The girl wondered the same thing, asking why he was doing this. Yulei was tired of arguing. He had no arguments and no desire to continue. If the guy disagrees, the old woman will come up with some new argument. And Zhao might not kill him, but just cripple him. What would Li do in that case? The guy decided he couldn't die until he'd taken 2 more tests. She was, he thought. Yulei said that humanity doesn't come from a cultivator's strength, but from his soul, and he is a human at heart. He turned to Sueli, saying that he wasn't done with the tests yet and would like to continue. Ellie asked if the girl would believe him if he passed all the tests. The girl hesitated, pressing her right hand tightly to her chest. Faceless One inserted a comment, saying that one was worthy of the title of demonic master's son. The boy was already preparing for the debate. He was bad at them, but it would be even harder to last in a room with a shadow monster. The faceless monk asked his friend if he was ready, and he answered in the affirmative. Both men fell to their knees in front of Yulei. Clinging to his feet, those shrieked, calling Le Master. Faceless and Young Pai held onto the edges of Yulei's kimono. One said that his father was his master, and the other that he had fought under him. And since he's his son, they want to surrender, since Yu is their new master. The mother of the poisons was horrified, calling them traitors. How could they be so low? However, Li Shang and the old woman later cried out together, saying that those had forgotten about them as well. Zhao Sueli and Yu were in a state of incomprehension about what was happening. The guy tilted his head toward the 2 men on all fours. He said they needed to finish what they had started, but the 2 men said they were giving up. Yulei got angry and started shaking them to continue the tests. The old ones just watched, already fearing for their lives. Suddenly the woman realized something and her eyes widened greatly. The guy heard her mumbling and tried to listen to the words, but still asked what she understood already. Mother Yadai decided that Yulei had signed the contract to kill them, and had purposely pissed them off during the tests. Zhao bared her blade and shouted that she had had enough of this talk. The girl said that since those surrendered, they were contracted to go west. The entire 4 from the pleasure cult tensed up and fell silent, pondering. A second later they left, saying that they would meet again. Sueli and Le were puzzled. Yu sat down on a chair, saying that he was very tired and they never got anywhere. Zhao, on the other hand, told him not to act like this, for it seems that he had greatly underestimated the mother of the 5 poisons. The girl said she couldn't have beaten their 4 now, so it was good that those left. The boy, however, suggested that we go to bed, for he was very tired. It had been a long day and night. Zhao told him to take his time, as they had something to discuss, and got into her robe. Yulei's head was immediately filled with dirty thoughts, and sweat broke out on her face. From her robe, the girl pulled out some kind of purple ball, glowing in the light. She asked if Yu knew why the pleasure cult was after her. Le said that maybe she had a grudge against them. Zhao, on the other hand, said that she stole the sorcery sphere from them. Sueli explained that the orb is the domain of the cult. The orb corrupts people, which is why it is dangerous. Yu rapturously looked at the sphere, asking if there were more of them. The girl quickly hid it in her robe, replying that there was such an orb still in the soul-devouring flag. However, through some circumstance, LOL was not received. Zhao didn't talk about the orb because she didn't think it was significant, and perhaps he had corrupted them both. Telling a mortal like him about the orb was dangerous. She continued, saying that things were different now. She had revealed all the cards, hence she was waiting for Ulle to share something of her own as well. The guy doubted if he should even tell her everything he had up his sleeve. And if he didn't, would she let him live? Thoth imagined gently taking her hand, starting the dialogue. Yu put the girl's palm to his chest and said that he came from another world to turn on the system. In fact, he should die. After that scene in his head, the guy realized that it was definitely not a good idea to talk like that. Zhao looked at him expectantly with her eyebrows slightly drawn together at the bridge of her nose. A faint sweat appeared on Yule's face. He didn't like this look. He gathered his strength and began his speech, thinking carefully about every word he said. Raising 2 fingers up, Yu began to recite the words of the promise. The guy looked at her confidently, saying that he promises to never hurt her. Thoth said that he did have a couple of secrets, but that he definitely wouldn't hurt her. Zhao looked at him questioningly, as if assessing the veracity of his words. After which, Sueli smiled and said that she understood, after all, everyone has different cockroaches in their head. Ulle felt like an ass. He didn't think it would be this easy. 2 horses were pulling a large wagon through an empty field, leaving puffs of dust behind them. The roof of the wagon was painted with different figures at the corners. There was even something beautiful about it. Ulle was very upset, after all. The mother of poisons and her 4 had been very encouraging to him. He was outraged that everyone ran away as soon as they smelled burning, and even made his companion Zhao Sueli doubt him. The girl turned to the guy asking if everything was okay. He looked very uncomfortable. Immediately after that question, the guy felt sick. He covered his mouth with both hands. Lei almost threw up right in the wagon, but he managed to step back to the exit and open the door. Sueli came up behind him and told him to be patient for a little while. After all, it was safe here. Yes, they would be at the inn soon. The guy blurred, and for a long second his nausea stopped. After that, the nausea resumed. He doesn't need safety. Better let him finally die. He and Zhao finally reached the inn. The journey was quite long. The building wasn't huge, but it was quite beautiful from the outside. The girl said it was the only inn along the way, but it was usually more crowded. It was too quiet, and Sueli assumed that the pleasure cult might have ambushed them. Ulle, on the other hand, was twisting in all directions. He was desperate. Thoth figured he'd probably die of nausea before he got swatted. Someone's quiet footsteps were heard. Someone called Zhao by name. It was a red-haired girl. That one gradually approached them with a dangerous smile. Yu didn't react at first, hovering somewhere in his thoughts. After a second, however, he had already perked up his ears and started looking around. Suddenly, Sueli and Li heard stomping. Obviously not 1 in 5 people. The girl looked around while Yu looked around in incomprehension. The stomping belonged to a large number of people. The 2 of them were surrounded by men in black robes. There were about 24 of them. Seeing so many people, Liu smiled, already anticipating a colorful battle. He thought, finally some fun. The girl who met them said the 4 were completely useless since there wasn't a scratch on these 2. She decided she would have to kill them herself. Zhao tensed, and Yu watched with interest. Sueli drew her eyebrows together and asked why she was here. The other asked with a smile, wondering if Zhao was scared by the chance. Ulle didn't understand. Did Sueli really get hurt badly? The red-haired woman leaped into the air, intent on reaching the girl. Zhao immediately drew her weapon, intending to defend herself. The attacker shouted to the girl to prepare for her death today. After that, black shadows immediately surrounded them, flashing their eyes and confusing them. A large number of shadows were smiling and shining their red eyes, trying to intimidate the opponents. Zhao swung her blade, swinging them all away from her, clearing a path for herself. Ta turned to the girl, asking if she really thought she was worth anything. Sueli got into a defensive posture, preparing for a serious battle. She looked determinedly at the shadows, already trying to figure out their weak point. However, unexpectedly for not only Zhao, but also for Le, she was overtaken. Ulle ran forward with a smile on his face, shouting that he would save her. It wasn't that he was contemplating this action. Ulle ran at the priestess, shouting that he would save Zhao Sueli. He wanted to lose his life faster. That one came in shock at not understanding what was happening. She really didn't expect such boldness from a human. Shock replaced horror. The priestess screamed in surprise, after which Li threw her quite a distance away from her and Zhao. The men in black robes whistled as they watched the trajectory of the woman's fall. She fell to the ground with a clatter, raising a cloud of dust with a grunt and a cough. One of the fighters approached her, asking if the woman was okay. Her face showed the exact opposite. The priestess tried to get up and told them to kill the two of them, and especially the guy. The girl's face was padded from the fall, and her gaze was full of anger. She wanted blood. Ta aggressively shouted for them to kill Ulle, for he had greatly dishonored her. All the fighters drew their blades and prepared to attack. However, before those attacked, Zhao used her power. Everyone in black robes was thrown off in different directions by the sound wave. The men screamed in terror and pain, for they were totally unprepared for such a strong attack. Yu meanwhile stood nearby, listening to the shouts of the fighters. The one was indignant that Miss Zhao wasn't giving him even a chance to say goodbye to his life. How could she even fight? Sueli smugly said that the strongest in the pleasure cult had fallen from her sword. Ta was surprised that such weak opponents had been sent to them. Why wasn't it the young cult master? The priestess only replied that he would avenge them and be more ruthless. After these words, the woman's eyes widened and she collapsed onto the stones without strength. Yu lay tensed up. Did she really just die like that? Behind him, he heard a blade strike the pavement and a thud. Someone fell down next. It turned out to be Miss Zhao, who fell down without strength, but fortunately did not lose consciousness. Li walked over to the girl and tried to sit her up, supporting her back. The one said she was very exhausted, and now even he could easily kill her. The guy thought the best thing for her to do was to take his life, but didn't voice anything about it. Yu only said that the priestess looked very strong. That one was amazed that she appeared so weak. Sueli said that even though she was a priestess of the cult, she could only teach. She wasn't capable of fighting at all. Li told Miss Zhao that she was too weak, and they should rest in the tavern now. Meanwhile, someone was sneaking up behind them. The unknown man swung his blade loudly, swiftly cleaving the air. Sueli reacted faster and pushed the guy away. He was astonished. How much longer can you attack them? This unknown person turned out to be the priestess. She once again waved her blade towards Zhao. The woman's blade hit her right side. Sueli called the Shui priestess Qing Mei. She mocked the girl and said she had only pretended to be dead to fool her. Miss Shui weakly held the blade as if to taunt her even more. Miss Zhao waved her hand vigorously, trying to push Qin Mei away from her. Sueli managed to move away from the woman, and by then Ulle was already rushing towards her. He covered her bleeding wound with his hand, asking how she was feeling. Meanwhile, Priestess Shui was already running away, saying that a wounded beast was the most dangerous, so she'd better leave. Last of all, she said that they would wait for Sueli at Dohoku. The priestess said not to forget that, or else she would use people from the suburbs for the sacrifice. Ulle shouted back at her that all she knew how to do was talk. The woman probably didn't hear, but the guy cursed under his breath anyway. In the suburb of Dohoku, sunlight illuminated a small house. A small river flowed nearby. The shadow of a huge tree was falling on the roof of the same house. It felt like it was about to fall. Suddenly, something or someone fell on the same roof, raising a huge ball of dust. That someone was a young master with golden hair. A yellow aura gathered around him. He looked down piercingly and barely smiled with the corners of his lips. He was greeted by the priestess of Shui, shouting and notifying everyone that the young master had arrived. Thuth gently made his way downstairs, chuckling slightly. He smiled smugly, pleased with his bright and loud appearance. Miss Shui saluted with a bow, greeting the master once again. The woman wanted to tell him the news about Zhao Sueli. However, as soon as she spoke her name, the young master seemed to evaporate. Thoth raised his voice from the crowd of fighters in black robes. He was scared, but the Shui priestess assured him that she had wounded the girl. The guy smiled, saying that the one did a pretty good job. Thoth grinned caustically. It was great for a sacrifice. The priestess watched her master's reasoning, looking at him slightly skeptical. The young man, on the other hand, had taken something to improve his strength. Now he could easily kill Zhao and take away her corruption sphere. Miss Shui was scared for the pleasure cult, for who knows what would happen to it after the battle. Meanwhile, Zhao Sueli was explaining to Ulle the paths of a cultivator, which were categorized into 5 stages: human, creator, spirit, Tao, and heaven. Sueli said that she was at the 10th rank of Tao, but the young master of the pleasure cult was at the 1st rank. The young master grabbed a few villagers, leading them in small groups to the sacrifice. Those who had their hands and feet chained, there was no way they could escape. One of the black-robed fighters shouted at them to kneel down. A weapon appeared in the air, surrounded by a fiery blue, eye-scorching aura. The young master took it in his hands, looking down at the villagers. That one flashed his eyes and said that today those would see the power of the soul-devouring banner. With one swing, he used the weapon, and the souls began to leave the bodies of the villagers. Souls began to gather and circle around the young master, and people's bodies began to fall to the ground. The guy lifted his head up, sniffing the air and smiling. Breathless bodies gathered at the young man's feet, some still squirming in pain. The guy enjoyed the moment and involuntarily wondered, what did Zhao Sueli's soul taste like? He flashed his eyes. He wanted to know what she tasted like right now. Ulle and Zhao Sueli finally checked into an inn on their way to Duhek. A small bird sat on a tree branch. It flinched when it heard the cry. The shout belonged to the Lagai. That one made a noise, for Zhao Sueli was not breathing. The girl was dead, and he had failed the mission. Now there was no point in going to Duheka. He didn't know what to do and was tearing his hair out of frustration. The girl lay on the bed with her side bandaged. You was too close to the target. There must be something. He stood over the girl in silence for a few seconds. Suddenly he pulled out a knife. Maybe that's how it'll work. Maybe if he kills her, the Wenshin cult will haunt him and spare his life. The boy brushed the thought away, throwing the cleaver out of his hand. This isn't right. Is he out of his mind? Yu looked at the girl again. The one had fallen down on his house from above and was fine. If so, she would defeat the cult as well. Even injured, that one was very strong. Ulle has a duty to save this girl. Small drops of sweat ran down Yule's face. He didn't know how to help Zhao Sueli. Maybe indirect breast massage might help her now? Or maybe the girl needs CPR somehow. First, Yu prepared himself before the indirect chest massage, kneading his hands lightly. He made the first push and asked the girl several times to wake up, but she didn't respond. After that, Le began to vigorously press on Zhao's chest, shouting for her to wake up. Suddenly, a purple orb flew out of her robe. The guy looked at her with widened eyes, trying to identify the object. That one fell right into his hands. At first, Yu didn't realize what this thing even was. After that, memories began to pop up in his mind. For sure, Zhao Sueli had shown it to him. He looked into his palms, where the orb lay peacefully in his hands. The boy remembered. It was a sphere of sorcery. However, despite the importance of the artifact, that one set her back. Now was not the time for magical things. That one bounced a few times and rolled on the wooden floor, making a noise. The sphere stopped almost at the corner of the room. Yu was already eager to get started. Suddenly it dawned on him, and indeed it did. The sphere of sorcery is a very important artifact. A purple aura appeared around the sphere, and it was as if it was on fire. The sphere began whispering to the guy that it could grant any wish he wanted. He just needed to approach. Ulle stared at the burning orb for long minutes, thinking about something. Then, as if hypnotized, he reached out his hand to her. He had the orb in his hands now, staring at her mesmerized. She was getting hotter and hotter. After saying that, the guy smiled evilly. Since he had the orb, the pleasure cult should definitely kill him. He imagined running away from the priestess of Shuya and her assistant. Ulle knew that he could still die, however. He had a problem. A trickle of sweat trickled down his cheek. He tensed hard. The boy bit his lip and almost cried as he thought about how his luck was always bad. It meant that without Sueli, the pleasure cult probably wouldn't find him. Thoth shifted his gaze to the girl lying there. This would be the first time Lu would have to save someone's life. He leaned down to the girl's lips and began to give her CPR. His cheeks flushed slightly. The boy looked at Zhao hopefully. A little less than a minute passed, and the man realized that it didn't help. He just couldn't let Sueli die. Yui cried out, saying that he would simply be lost without the girl's presence. He started crying like a baby, saying he'd rather be hurt. Ulle knelt down and lay on the edge of the bunk with his torso, already trying to come to terms with Miss Zhao's death. Suddenly the guy heard someone calling his name, and movement was heard on the bed.
Zhao Sueli, she's alive.
She was born in the very, very distant mountains of the Wen Sword cult. Zhao Sueli started practicing since she was a child, doing different exercises. The lake near where she practiced had lily pads blooming almost every year. The girl always strived to become brave and diligent so that she would never betray fear to her enemies. Her teacher had told her that the only way to get ahead was to deprive herself of romantic relationships. So when love letters were sent to her, she didn't reciprocate. Zhao promised herself not to look for love in someone, but only to serve the sword faithfully. That was why many people trembled when they saw the girl's sword in action. Sueli had always stuck to the path of a cultivator, not daring to change her path. Ta decided she was willing to do anything to protect her goals and priorities. The girl was even ready to die, and then she opened her eyes abruptly. Everything around me was hazy, no clear detail. The sun was shining too brightly, illuminating the room. When she was struck by the priestess of Shui, she knew it wasn't going to be that easy. There's no way to break through the pleasure cult. She's too weak for that right now. However, the sorcery realm was too powerful. The girl wanted to take it to the Wen Sword cult to be destroyed. Zhao had already come up with a plan in which Yu himself would have to go to the Wei cult, and Sueli would have to go to Duheku. But even if there is a plan, there is an equally important issue. Can Zhao Sueli trust Ulle? Is he as trustworthy as he pretends to be? She was really touched by the guy's speech about the shower. She even almost let a tear fall there. However, the fact that he hid his origins from her alarmed her. That was why she pretended to be dead to test him. Zhao wanted to see the real Ulle, after all. Who knows what he was hiding? When the guy leaned over her and started pressing on her ribcage, she was a little shocked. As he yelled for her to wake up, the girl thought about how that was impossible. It's impossible that he would really want to save Sueli's life. After a sphere flew out of the kimono, that one was already ready to check on Lei. However, the man simply flicked the ball away without even looking at it. Zhao was shocked by this. Maybe he just doesn't know what the sphere is capable of. When the guy yelled out that Sueli couldn't die, the girl couldn't believe that she really wanted to be saved. But then he performed CPR. The girl remembered her friend's stash. Did the action resemble what she had read there? She immediately dismissed the thought as Yui began to fill her lungs with air. Though in a strange way, he's really trying to save her. When Yu started crying like a little baby, Zhao skeptically thought about how strange it all was. They know each other very little. And when the guy fell to his knees in front of the bed, that one was completely bewildered at all. The sphere of sorcery lay beside her on the bed again, glistening slightly from the light falling on it. It burned with purple fire, as if begging to be picked up. It was strange how Yule immediately agreed to help the girl. He learned how to defeat the mother of 5 poisons and her company and won, and Yu protected her without a fraction of fear, even as the poison gradually flowed through his veins. The one didn't share his secrets, yet was willing to protect without something in return. Zhao's face turned red. I think she was beginning to understand. Sueli started to rise up, thus perplexing the boy. He looked at her with wide-open eyes.
The girl realized that it seems like Yule really loves her.
Zhao Sueli raised herself slightly, stepping out of her role as a dead person. Her cheeks were burning. Yule looked at Zhao perplexedly and said that he was glad to see her awakening. The sphere of sorcery lay nearby and glowed more brightly than before. The girl, on the other hand, pondered over Yule's feelings. When could he have fallen in love with her? Could it be love at first sight? Ta imagined them getting married in the future. Now she understood why he was willing to give his life for her. But what about his feelings? Thinking about it, Sueli's face turned as red as a ripe tomato. Yule is talented and smart, but she swore to herself not to fall in love. However, Lei is also the son of a demonic master, and if a cultivator's strength appeared, he would be the strongest. Zhao slammed her fist on the wall with all her might, interrupting her thoughts. She couldn't give up her oath to serve her sword so easily. Sueli is not some mortal. Yule should not fall in love with her. The girl can't reciprocate, for that would cause her to go off the path. Yui smiled at her and asked her how she was feeling. The girl clutched her breasts. Why was he so handsome? But the second she grabbed her hair and started screaming at herself. She can't fall in love. Lea looked at the girl. She must be deciding what to do with him. Sueli finished and said she had something to discuss with him. The guy took her hand, and she let him help her up. Yule doubted. Did the girl not believe that old mother of the 5 poisons? Toth pleaded in his thoughts that Zhao didn't believe her. He just wishes to die, that's all. Yu thought, what if he begged her on his knees with no clothes on? That probably wouldn't help. Just then, Zhao raised her voice. She said that she couldn't win at Duheku, and therefore Yu must go to the Wen Sword cult by himself. The boy looked at her perplexed. Does she want to go to Dukeka by herself? And she's so exhausted. Yule shrieked, saying that the one asking him for nonsense. Zhao said that they need to deliver the sphere to the cult, and therefore the sphere should go to the sword cult. In her mind, she felt sorry for Lei, because she thinks he is in love with her. The guy said loudly that he didn't care about the sphere and would go with her. No one should prevent him from dying. What was she even doing here? Sueli folded her hands in her lap. She said she didn't want him to die with her. Yui still stood his ground, saying that he would go with her even though. They came together, right? So they'll die together too. Zhao's cheeks flushed. She didn't expect such a speech. He cared for her that much? The girl blushed even more. He's so worried about her. Yu noticed the girl's redness and asked if she needed help. After these thoughts, she clutched her head. She has to pull herself together. She can't betray her vow. Zhao Sueli covered her face with her hands, telling him to bring her water as she was thirsty. The one said that as long as they were together, then he would do anything. Zhao fell into a stupor. While they're together? Together? Ta shrieked. Yule was too good. Meanwhile, the guy went to pour Sueli some water. She didn't answer him. Maybe he made her angry. And why didn't the system stop it anyway? That was really weird. The guy called up the system to ask the question he wanted to ask. Yu asked, why didn't she stop him if the guy was intentionally going to his death with Zhao Sueli? A download popped up on the screen, the system analyzing his request. The system analyzed all of Yule's actions and words before, preparing its response. She was silent for a few seconds, preparing that answer. Yu was eager to know the reason, so he hurried the system. It took too long for the system to process the answer. Ta said that if they work together with Zhao, he has a chance to survive, and he also has a reason to take the hit, so it's pretty much by the book. Le thought for a moment. What reason could he possibly have for taking the blow? Zhao asked Yu. Le why he wanted to go along with her so badly. Meanwhile, he was already picking up the empty glass. She gave him time to think. Maybe then he'd realize that none of this made sense. Lee, on the other hand, knew what to answer. The system had said the right words. He would just paraphrase them. The guy said that the two of them had a better chance of survival, so he should definitely go with her. Zhao looked at the guy with huge eyes. Is he really willing to do anything? And he doesn't care if the sphere ruins his life? He stared at her for a long second, then answered with a simple yes. The girl's world seemed to turn upside down. No one had ever said that to her before. She couldn't believe it. They were going to do this together?
You agreed with the girl, saying they would really go together.
Sueli began to shake slightly. Is he not scared at all? Ulle raised his right hand, ostensibly waving it away, and said no. Zhao blushed, her mind reeling. She was ready to break all her vows and go to the end of the world with him. She shouted her agreement. Maybe they could actually survive together. Ulle said with a smile that he would try his best. He was immensely pleased with her agreement. After that, the girl relaxed. She felt too good. She smiled, feeling lighthearted, too easy. Suddenly, something burst in Zhao's subconscious. Ta returned to the ground. There was something wrong with her condition. Even if it was so easy for her, Sueli still couldn't move away from her principles so easily. In any case, they couldn't be together. Ta shifted her gaze to Ulle. He's too nice to her, and she can't repay him. The guy shuddered. What had happened to Miss Zhao? Why did she get upset in the blink of an eye? At that moment, she was trying hard to think of something interesting and romantic to repay the guy. Ta clenched her hand on her chest. She should definitely think of something. With a determined look at Yui, she remembered that she had something in mind. Zhao asked the boy to sit down next to her, for she remembered an interesting poem. Lei looked towards the girl interestedly. Is this all because they are going to certain death tomorrow? Ulle took off his shoes and sat down. He wondered what kind of poem it was. They took the lotus pose together, and the girl started quoting. The boy liked the first lines. When the part about romantic feelings started, Yu felt insecure but still commented on it as a very beautiful poem. Next was a huge part about love. Yu wasn't sure if he liked it, but he said that part was pretty cool. After this comment, Zhao froze and her face turned black. Ulle trembled slightly. Sweat broke out on his face and he gently asked, "What did that even mean?" The girl leaned forward and grabbed Yui by the scruff of her kimono, pulling her to her. After that, the one pushed the guy down with all her might, still not out of the evil image. Ulle was in complete shock and incomprehension. Did this poem mean something? Yu lay on the bed and then Miss Zhao fell on top of him as well. She covered them with a blanket and asked them to make love to him. The guy's cheeks turned a deep red. Is he definitely in reality right now? Maybe he's asleep? Those swooped down. Lee thought about how strange this all was. The orb of sorcery still lay beside the bed. It was even hotter than before, and it might even be able to give off heat. Later the sun went down and the moon came out. That night the moon shone brighter than ever. Ulle asked the girl to slow down. The girl wouldn't even let him take a breath. The boy only just relaxed, however. Miss Zhao once again reached out to him. Yu's eyes widened. Well, what kind of tireless girl is this? That one shouted to Sueli to stop, for he was already very tired. Meanwhile, a grand plan has already been cooked up in Duheku. The young master was catching fish, but his assistants were hanging them on his hook. The young master swung the rod, confidently pulling out what felt like a big fish. His assistants saluted each other. The job was done. The master smiled, happy to see a large fish. Let Zhao Sueli get ready, after all. The plan was already in place. All she had to do was grab the bait. Ulle exhaled tiredly. He hadn't slept for almost a whole night and was now willing to give up everything for a good night's sleep. Zhao Sueli was lying next to him. She said that he refused close contact. She wondered what he meant. Wasn't that what they called making love? And then she asked him if they were seeing each other now. You thought about how stupid that one was. To move so much with so many wounds, he just couldn't agree. Zhao contentedly rolled over to the other side. This was the only thing she could do for Yui's sake. Afterwards, she called his name quietly. The boy asked what she wanted. Zhao took one of her hands in the other and timidly asked the guy to hug her. Ulle was slightly dumbfounded. He hadn't expected such a thing. Sueli could be so gentle at times. The guy turned and hugged her. He said he would do everything to protect the girl tomorrow. The day came. Ulle dragged Miss Zhao on his back. They were going up the hill. Those had already arrived at Duheika. Suddenly a young master appeared in front of them. He said that he was expecting Zhao Sueli. Yu immediately let the girl go and said that he was leaving him to her. The young master mockingly pitied her. He wanted to fight and see who was stronger, but he was afraid he might kill her with a flick of his pinky finger. Zhao drew her weapon. An aura like pink fire surrounded her. The master looked at her skeptically, expecting an attack. Sueli jumped up and attacked the young man in that second. The one didn't expect such a quick reaction, but fended off the attack. After that, he fell to the ground, raising a small cloud of dust. The young master looked at Zhao in astonishment. Was she uninjured? She led all of them. Whereupon he shouted out the name of the priestess, saying that she was a liar. Her master waved his weapon, about to take the woman's power. Shui Qingmei looked at him in horror. She wanted to justify herself. But he didn't care about excuses. He didn't want to listen to her. Ulle stared shockedly at both the priestess and the master. The soul gradually left Shui's body. The young man was angry. After taking her energy and soul, he realized how pathetic she was. She had very little cultivation. You looked at all of this and concluded that this master was crazy. killing his own people? That's so stupid. After that, the young master looked at Zhao. He flashed his eyes and said that she would be next. The young man was glad to have a tasty refreshment soon. Li asked Zhao to be careful, for the master was even more dangerous than he thought. The girl assured him that everything would be fine. Sully said that he sent his men after her as if he was afraid of losing. Was he ready to repay the past master? The young master scoffed at Zhao. He had long ago realized that his father was talentless, yet the girl had helped him by taking his energy. Now it was her turn to be in his father's shoes. The young man extended one arm, thrusting forward with great speed. He suddenly blew the girl away. The girl had not expected an attack of such strength at all. Ulle was startled and shouted out her name, trying to be supportive. He realized that he had relied too much on Zhao. Blood came out of the girl's mouth. She was too wounded, she wouldn't be able to win on her own. Ulle must save her and therefore wanted to shout to the young master that the spheres were not here. In the same instant, a weapon appeared in front of him. The guy didn't even have time to finish his sentence. Another day at the inn on the way to Duhek, Ulle and Zhao Sueli had a rough evening. The cultivator hugged Yu again. He didn't even realize when or how it happened. That one had prioritized coming up with a plan where he should die, not her. In that second, an idea came into Yui's head that should definitely help her survive the battle. The guy recoiled from Zhao and asked if the sphere was the reason her wounds weren't healing at all. The woman was slightly taken aback. The unexpected question caused her to hesitate to answer, but she later confirmed Ulle's guess. After that, the boy hesitated. She prioritized the safety of the sphere, but not her health. Zhao stared at Yu in bewilderment. He was so deep in thought that he didn't even pay attention to the question. After a few seconds, he asked if not having a sphere would make Sueli's job easier. She thought about it for a moment, and she was right. Without her, she wouldn't have to sacrifice herself, and she might even be able to destroy the enemy. Currently, the young master was pointing his weapon at Ulle. However, the guy said that the realm of sorcery was not theirs. He spread his arms out to the sides and yelled about hiding it so that if the master killed them, he would never be able to find the orb. A faint sweat appeared on Yu's face. He couldn't anticipate the actions of this young man, because if he killed his own, he was afraid of what he would do to them. The one in turn only grinned sharply. What does he propose to do? Li didn't reply, but ran up to Zhao Sueli, who was barely on her feet. That one thought that she would be able to build up the energy to win, so he wouldn't sacrifice himself. Hearing this, Yu frowned. Sueli was so stupid to think that he wouldn't sacrifice himself. The girl turned to face the man and with a slight hiss of pain said the rest would be up to him. This was when the young master interjected. He was a bit taken aback, not understanding what Ulle's words meant and where they were sharing the sphere. The guy stepped away from Sueli and said he would only tell when the two of them were released. The young man covered his face with his hand and made a sound like laughter, and later he actually laughed. Following him, his fighters in black robes started laughing. They did not hesitate to show complete disrespect to Ulle. The young master asked with a crazy smile, did they really think he was such an idiot? Yu looked at the young man skeptically, as he said he could send his men on their way, and they would easily find the orb. The master smiled smugly. Did they really mean to fool him like that? He's not some kid. Now it was Lei's turn to smile, for the young master was indeed wrong. That one said that even Zhao didn't know the location of the sphere, and here the pleasure cult master was so confident in his men? Ulle smiled smugly, asking if the young man's people would really be able to uncover his plan since he had found out about the sphere literally just now. Here the young master hesitated. The banner didn't work, which meant that he wasn't lying and they didn't have the sphere. He frowned, looking at the guy incredulously. Is he trying to scare him? Oh no, that would be difficult. His weapon can find the orb, so he'll check every merchant in the world and find it. Yu chuckled enigmatically, introducing the pleasure cult master into a perplexed state. Lu said he had locked the orb with something, and without the right key, it was impossible to use the orb. There's been an upheaval in the young master's head, an explosion. This can't be happening. The one hesitantly asked if the guy was referring to an artifact of the secret lockdown cult. Yulas said with contrived disappointment that the latter was quite smart. He was astonished that such a thing existed, because he had just made it up. Yu then walked over to the young master and gave him a friendly hug, whispering a warning in his ear that if he killed Zhao, it would ruin his reputation. The young man agreed with Ulle, however. He said that he couldn't let her go. What if the boy lies to him and he will be left with nothing? After that, Yu suggested that the young master step back to talk. Zhao watched the whole thing with interest. Le calmly said that if the young man let Sueli go, he would show him where the sphere was. However, they would have to sign a contract to keep the girl safe. The young master stared intently at his interlocutor, pondering. Right now, he didn't care about anything but the sphere, but he wouldn't be able to kill it even after obtaining the artifact. After much deliberation, the young man gave in and agreed. The most important thing now was the sphere. Those immediately signed a contract that Zhao Sueli would not be killed if Yu gave up the sphere. The guys split up on both sides right after the so-called peace treaty was signed. Lee Fairley walked up to Swilly, saying that he had completely sorted everything out. The girl was shocked. After that shock was replaced by admiration, she clapped her hands and smiled. Suddenly, Yu cried out, shouting that there was a flying sausage behind Zhao. She turned around perplexed, looking for it. Meanwhile, the boy slid behind her back. Immediately afterward, he hit her with all his might. The girl swayed in surprise. Yule closed his eyes and apologized to the girl for his actions. After all, he was doing it for her good. Zhao turned around, looking at him with widened eyes and asking what he was doing. The guy panicked. Apparently it doesn't work on cultivators. He then took out the strange powder he had stolen from the pleasure cult master. Swelly looked at him, asking what it was. Yu didn't answer, but just blew the powder into her face. She was stunned, already realizing what it was. The girl was slowly losing consciousness, but before she did, she looked at him with a look full of regret and sadness. After that, she fell on Yulei's chest. The latter immediately caught her so that she wouldn't get hit. The guy was confident in his actions, but apparently Zhao misunderstood his intentions. Yu picked Swelly up in his arms. This was the only way he could make sure she was safe. He carried and put her into the boat, already about to let her go free on the sea. The boy hoped she could take it from here. He couldn't put her in that kind of danger. Yui took one last look at Swelly. He was sure that she would get out safely. After which Lo pushed the boat, and it raced through the water with great speed. The guy was completely splashed with water. A small turtle even landed on his head. He stood in a stupor for a few more seconds. What were those boats so fast? But at the same second, his thoughts were interrupted by a voice. It belonged to a master of the pleasure cult. The one glared at him angrily, saying that he probably wouldn't catch up with her anymore, right? Yu looked into the distance and said that if the golden-haired girl tried her best, she would definitely catch up with the boat. The first part of the plan succeeded. The young master swung his banner, pointing it at the boy. He demanded an answer about the orb's location. The man scratched his head and said, "Okay, right now it's going to happen." Yulei made a loud clap with his hands, putting them both together. The second part of the plan had succeeded. The guy said with a smile on his lips, unfortunately lying to him. He didn't think to tell where the sphere was. The young man's face turned black with anger. He froze in bewilderment at first, digesting Yu's words. Then the veins in his eyes became more visible and his eyes turned red. He began to shout, "What kind of a circus has he organized?" The aura around the young master turned fiery blue. The third part of the plan also succeeded. The turtle on Yulei's head raised its paw, ostensibly urging the young man to approach. The guy followed her as well, only also yelling for him to come over. The young master went into a full-blown rage. He shouted that he would use all the most sophisticated methods to kill him. Yu said with a stone face to stop talking and attack already, for he was tired of waiting. The young man took out his banner. The fiery blue aura around him flared even stronger. It promised to eat his soul and scatter his spirit. A magical skull flew out of the weapon. It was approaching Yulei, intending to devour his spirit. The boy stood there with his tongue hanging out in anticipation. He couldn't wait to be killed. However, suddenly Yu had a thought. Did the young man promise to eat his soul? Something had been told to him about that. Toth remembered what the system had said. It had said then that such an action would be reflected doubly by killing the enemy. After this memory, Lee froze. Killing the enemy. That's just awful. The young master reached him. A huge stream of energy surged into the guy's body. Yu grunted. Soul-sucking was not the most pleasant process. One could even say painful. That one cursed under his breath, the energy gradually leaving him. Damn, master. The boy's eyes rolled back, and it seemed that death was close at hand. It is already coming at his heels, waving its scythe. It's all blurred. It's not clear or visible at all. It was like he was looking at everything with tears in his eyes. However, a second light suddenly appeared, yellow like the sun and hopeful. It came from Yulei, who locked his two hands together, pressing them against his torso. After that, it was as if he was attacking. A tremendous force flowed from his body in all directions, blowing away everything in its path with a shockwave. The pleasure cult master fighters were frightened when they saw such an enormous power that covered them head to toe. Yu flew up and attacked from there. All of his strength headed down towards the fighters and the young master. Everyone was fleeing so that the force wouldn't take them too. No one wanted to lose their lives. The master looked up as the light slowly swallowed him up. He stood in a stupor, completely unaware of what was happening. The power finally reached him, but he still didn't understand the level of its danger. He wondered what was going on. The young man began to tear up, looking at the whole thing with eyes widened with horror. After that, the master fell into the unknown. He was washed away like sand on a beach. A strong wind blew. The ash clouds were carried to the water, and there they were dispersed and soaked. The turtle on Yulei's head gazed at the shore absent-mindedly, quietly quacking. The look on the guy's face was almost exactly the same as the turtle's. He was in complete shock. His eyes were bruised from using so much energy. He cursed quietly to himself, as almost all the people had been blown away. Ulle crawled along the shore, looking for something completely incomprehensible. It was all over. His expression was disappointed and sad. The turtle was still on his head. Suddenly someone called out to him, the voice moving closer and farther away from him. It seems after a while you recognized the voice, for his facial expression changed. Slightly taken aback, he turned around at the voice as the turtle gripped his head even tighter. Zhao Sueli was running towards him. How did she even end up here? The guy asked why that one had come, and in his head was cursing that useless powder. The girl said slightly angrily that she was awakened by a huge pillar of light. That one had come because she was worried that those had reached the heavenly level, and you had gotten hurt. The guy assured her that she had nothing to worry about, as everyone had been destroyed by the beam of light. Li started grumbling about how pathetic those were, but Zhao paid no attention to it. As long as the one was fine, then she didn't care about the pillar of light. Zhao and Yu returned to the inn they had stayed at about 24 hours ago. Those left the sphere under the bed in their room and were surprised when no one picked it up. The orb was still blazing with a purple aura, glistening beautifully in the sunlight. Ulle took the orb and said that while Sueli was injured, she would stay with him. He put the sorcery orb into the kimono where the turtle was already sitting. The girl agreed and afterward covered her face with her hand. She felt sick. Zhao Sueli first started to feel wobbly, after which she fainted without strength. Yui stood there in shock. Was she seriously going to faint again? He thought she was much better now. The guy was already rushing to help her. Right now, she must be brought back to the Wensword cult. The clouds had gotten dense and large from the puffy clouds. It must have been an hour or two. Ulle was dragging Sueli, who still had no way of gaining strength, on his back. The guy was very tired and was breathing heavily. It seemed like he and Zhao were almost there. Stopping and catching his breath, Yu looked around for the cultist. Seeing nothing made him feel out of place. Maybe he didn't see something? He turned to Sueli, saying that there were no cults here. He assumed he had just come to the wrong place, but the girl told him to go to the stone. Then she pointed her finger at several huge stones, asking him to take her to it. Li obediently walked over and lowered her to the ground. She panted slightly, leaning on her arms. Ta looked confidently at the stones, searching for the right one, and hummed, arching her eyebrows to the bridge of her nose. Then she placed her palm on the smooth stone. She put her palm on the smooth stone, and Yu began to wonder if this was the right place. However, after a few more seconds, the stone under Zhao's hand glowed. Different patterns began to appear in the air. They rose higher and higher to the sky. Following those lines, the lines of houses began to emerge. They were in the crowns of the trees in the forest. Ulle was completely flabbergasted, so that was it. This was an invisible city. That was why he couldn't see it. Then this city on a little piece of land just took off into the sky. It was very exciting. Yu made a sound like admiration. The sun illuminated the city, making it even more beautiful. Suddenly, someone parted the air, making Yu wary. Sweat broke out on his face. He shrieked determinedly, asking what was wrong. His turtle peeked out of his kimono and quacked. 3 people jumped down from the flying city. Obviously, those were from the Waysword cult. As far as the guy could see, it was 2 men and a girl. Those ran to meet Ulle and Zhao, shouting about how happy they were to see Lady Sueli. In a second, they had the girl, who was barely able to rest her arms on the ground. The main man said that they would take her to treatment now. After that, they immediately flew away. Yu was a bit taken aback as he was in an unfamiliar place. The turtle by the scruff of his neck was also shocked. After a few minutes, the guy saw someone start to walk back. It was the head young man. He apologized for that and thanked him for saving their mistress. Li was slightly offended, but brushed it off anyway and asked the kid's name. Suddenly a sound came from somewhere, and Yu perked his ears, watching interestedly. It turned out to be the strange green crystals on the belt of the guy in front of him. A huge number of questions immediately poured out of them at the same time. The people from the crystals called the man Master Guang. Ulle did not comment on this in any way, but only made a very strange expression on his face. Guan was furious and shouted that he had already said he would only be away for a few minutes. Suddenly, one of the crystals turned red, and from there, pleas for help were heard. Master Guan threw a worried glance at that phone. He then said that he would be there soon. Yu looked at the young man uncertainly, not understanding what was happening. Master Guang put Ulle on his flying board. He told the boy about the area just like a real guide. After that, those flew upwards at full speed, leaving a trail behind them like an airplane in the sky. Those arrived at their mentor's residence. The entrance was labeled * Pure Heart and Some Desire. Yu chuckled in his mind at that. Master Guang opened the doors to the residence. Inside, everything inside glistened as if it was all made of gold, although Le could have sworn it was. The boy froze at what he saw, his eyes bulging slightly. He had never seen such expensive decorations anywhere. Master Guang was greeted by a maid, informing him that his mentor was waiting for him in the water pavilion. Seeing the ladies made Yule's nose bleed. He was still slightly shocked. The boy turned to Guan, asking if this was definitely the mentor's residence and not a soul-sucking place. The man was slightly shocked at such a statement. He even became slightly uncomfortable. Both boys were awkwardly silent, and neither one interrupted the silence until it was time to go to their mentor. Yu and Guang came to the water pavilion. It was on the street near the sea. Master Guang introduced Lei to his mentor, saying that he was accompanying his lady Zhao. A turtle half emerged from Yui's kimono. It looked at the old man in front of him with a detached look. The mentor had a very long beard and hair. He also wore clothes that were much more revealing than the rest of the Wen Sword clan. The clan head greeted Yu Lei, and the latter was willing to swear that he had seen his twisted fantasies about him and Zhao Suili. The guy was amazed that someone like him was even a mentor for an entire cult. The old man turned to him again and asked Yu to tell him more about the journey. Without a moment's hesitation, the young man began his story as soon as everyone was seated in the gazebo. Lilies were growing in the water nearby. The lilies were already in bloom and were being nourished by the sun, shimmering beautifully in the light. When Yu held out the sphere of sorcery to the cult leader, he was amazed that the guy agreed to keep it with him. The man took the orb from the man's hands. It shimmered beautifully in the sun. You could even see through it. The mentor said that since Zhao trusted him, those could fulfill his every wish. Yu Lei hummed thoughtfully. He didn't know what to ask for without arousing their suspicion yet. A little earlier, he and Master Guang had run into some place before going to see the mentor. The young man from the sword Kalen was informed that one of them had been mortally wounded in battle. Guan asked to arrange a funeral for him, saying it was an honorable death for their clan. At that moment, Yu leaned over interestedly, for he wanted to see the corpse. That man had many wounds, was missing an arm, and had a huge wound on his face. Even then, the guy came up with one very interesting idea to help realize his plan. Right now, Yu Li will ask the mentor to join the Wensword clan. This is a great opportunity. This cult is full of victims, and one day he could definitely be one of them. The head of the clan was slightly taken aback. He had not expected this from a human. They thought he would wish for treasure and happiness in the human world, but not this. Yu stared at the old man in astonishment, saying that he didn't have this kind of desire. The mentor continued, saying that the path in their clan is quite hard. He could die at any moment fighting for their cult. However, the boy said that it would be an honorable death. The old man went on anyway, explaining that even simple training here was complicated, and any slip-up would cost him great sacrifices. His life would be short. Was Liu ready for that? The boy told the man confidently, and with a smile, that he wasn't afraid to die at all. The old man looked at the orb and after a moment's thought decided that he would give him a chance. In a few days they'd have a screening, so if he passed the test, he'd be accepted. The cult leader asked Guan what other trials they had left. The latter replied that it was the climb to Sword Peak. The mentor turned to Yu Lei, saying that an exception had been made for him, and if he passed this test, they would allow him to join. The head sent him to fetch Qi. She should show him the way to the trial. When Master Guang and his mentor were left alone, the former asked if there was anything else the master wanted. The man grabbed his head and said he had a severe headache. Ziyu stared at him with wide eyes. The strongest cultivator was really suffering from a headache right now? After that, the guy became more serious. He asked, could it be because of Yu Lei? Could there be something wrong with him? The man huffed, saying that there was definitely something wrong with that kid. He was definitely not an ordinary hunter. After which the latter spoke about Sueli. Master Guang listened attentively to his mentor. Tu asked if he really thought that Zhao could have sizzled the pleasure cult with such wounds. Ziyu's eyes widened. So the head wants to say that it wasn't Sueli who destroyed him, but this person? The old man handed him the orb and told him to look at it more closely. Guan shrieked with indemnity. He loved all sorts of dangerous artifacts like this sphere. The mentor slapped the guy to stop making a fool of himself and get serious. The kid holding his cheek said he understood. She had been with him long enough, but he was in his prime. The man exhaled, saying that although Yu had a human body, his soul was the spirit of a heaven-ranked cultivator. If his spirit was awakened, the guy would be affected by absolutely nothing. How does his soul even connect to his body? Master Guang shrieked, saying that such a thing was not possible at all, and even if it was, Yu hadn't developed cultivation yet. The mentor calmly responded and said that he only knew 4 cultivators of this rank. The most recent one was a demonic swordmaster from 500 years ago. Before him, there was a supreme Taoist that ruled even earlier, as much as 2,000 years ago. There was also one cultivator before him, and it was the Taoist without a sword that ruled 6,000 years ago. And of course their founder who kept heading east. It is not known how long ago it existed. A faint sweat appeared on Ziyu's face. Doesn't the head want to say that Yu Lei can become as powerful? The old man said that anything can happen. Fate can be capricious, so who knows what will happen. However, if luck is on their side, Yu Lei will raise their clan to unprecedented heights. And if not, Yu will leave behind devastation and a great deal of death, and their clan will fall into oblivion. Gwen shouted out that in that case, they couldn't let the one stay. The sword demon had already destroyed their clan 500 years ago. The mentor didn't approve of Ziyu's stance, saying that now their clan was on the verge of collapse, and they needed to increase their power. Otherwise, the demonic clan would destroy them instead of Ulle. Meanwhile, Ulle was trying to join the trial. The man shouted that he couldn't allow him right now. Chier argued with him, saying that maybe now was a special occasion. However, the man did not compromise at all. After informed that it was an order from the elder himself, the guy's gaze softened, and he let pass. The girl gave a final shout of good luck wishes, and the guy thanked her and said he'd treat her next time. Yu was led into a special room, and he was surprised at the number of fighters gathered for the test. It was full of girls, men, and it seems even children. Everyone was standing around waiting. A few seconds later, a huge bell rang, which alerted everyone to the start. Afterward, a man stepped onto the stone wall, beginning his speech by admiring their cult. Everyone listened attentively to the fellow. He said that if they wanted to join the cult, they had to prove their strength again. This was the final test, the toughest, and may all who are worthy pass it. Yu looked up, marveling at the sight. The host introduced the challenge. It was called the Peak of the Sacred Sword, which was right behind the stage. Lu covered his eyes from the sun. This peak was indeed very tall. If it were in the human world, it would definitely earn the title of a natural wonder. Finally, the host said that everyone would have only 1 hour to climb as high as possible. The condition was not to fight each other. Eula scoffed in thought. Was that really all this was? The body he had transmigrated into was strong, so climbing the mountain would be easy. The man shrieked, alerting everyone that the last final challenge was starting right now. As soon as the guy approached the steps, he already thought he'd win. Just climb up and that's it? What kindergarten? He resolutely looked forward. Very soon, Yu would become a member of the Wei Sword clan. After a while, Yulei was already screaming from exhaustion. He couldn't bear to climb the mountain anymore. The guy spat furiously. Why the hell couldn't he move his legs properly? All participants have already passed above the halfway point, reaching the top very soon. Yulei even joked about how those are completely like the crew members. How can they be so resilient? Unfortunately, even with Chen Fei's strength, he was still the very last participant. It was so unfair. He makes a tremendous effort to get to the top, but is still only halfway there. Meanwhile, the three from the Wen Sword clan were watching them, assessing everyone's abilities. The final challenge was not easy because it is not only climbing the mountain, it has magic power, and the first 2 steps have a special gravity. This test is also known as the Peak of Death test, and after 200 steps, the most important part of the test begins. The other man oohed, staring intently at this so-called screen. The first candidate has finally walked over 200 steps already. Everyone stared intently at the portal screen, looking for that one lucky guy. It was the candidate with the fiery red hair. She stopped to catch her breath and already felt victory in her hands. The girl looked down. She had gone down 200 steps, and there was no one here to give her a challenge. It was the daughter of the emperor of the Sidin country, Zuo Yuhan. When she came, she begged to be taken for trials. And it was because the man saw potential in her that he decided to take the girl into the clan. It was no surprise to one of the trio that this girl was number 1 in the challenge. However, his co-worker said not to be so sure. The woman was more favorable to the other candidate, for the one was born without any powers and is still here. Zuo Yuhan looked up, confidently intending to continue her climb. The girl decided that she would try and hold her first place. No one would overtake her. And finally she stepped on the 200th step. Who knows what's about to happen? Suddenly, someone started shouting cheers. In front of Zuo, there was a huge number of people kneeling in front of him. She was stunned. Was it really her that these people were greeting and worshipping? How did Zuo even end up here when just a second ago she'd been at the trial? Her maid said the girl's mother was fine, so there was no need to continue. Zuo Yuhan abruptly turned to the maid, not expecting such a turn of events. Immediately afterward, however, someone called out to her, pulling her sharply but gently to herself. It was the mother. She clasped her daughter to her side, talking happily about how lucky she was to have such a daughter. Zuo cried out, saying how wonderful it was that mother was okay. She relaxed into her embrace. In the real world, that one stood on the 201st step with cloudy eyes. The girl had already been caught. The observers, meanwhile, just watched. However, the one who was drowning for the girl shrieked. This is only the first hallucination. How could that Zuo be so useless? His co-worker said that the 200th through 400th steps show the participant's deepest desires. His applicant is young and has many desires. Zuo overtook Fang Qingshu, calmly and measuredly moving down the steps. At the same moment, it began to swim in front of his eyes. Toth made a sound that sounded like surprise. The boy was surrounded by hallucinating girls who affectionately called him their prince. But the one did not hesitate very beautifully and elegantly drew his sharp sword. He swung it lightly and swept the blade of the blade across the figures that appeared before him. Those were cut to pieces, while Fang calmly walked forward, completely unmoved by the temptation. Qingshu made an uncertain gesture with his hand, telling himself that these were mere illusions. He can't stop himself. Another swing of the blade followed, cleaving the air and everything in its path. The hallucination that followed was an image of a member of his family, but that one cut even her off. Fang Qingshu's father was next, but the hallucination was also completely cut off. The guy put his sword to his back, making that strange gesture again, placing his hand in front of him. The woman waved her fan. This was definitely exactly what she expected. Meanwhile, her colleague prayed that Zuo would finally wake up. Zuo Yuhan was still in her hallucinations, unable to come out in any way. Everyone else going through this trial was also under the influence of their dreams. Ulle, being at the 188th step, was watching them and was in incomprehension. Immediately afterward, however, he dismissed any thoughts, focusing on walking. The observers were already evaluating the participants. Fang was already at the 421st step. Mentor Kao was still hoping for her awakening. Master Guang came to them unexpectedly, evaluating the results of the participants. Fang had achieved an excellent result, and Zuo was in second place. The master looked at the so-called scoreboard and oohed. He was interested in the last place. And of course, it had Ulle on it, who was at the 193rd step. Guan wondered, didn't the elder say that he had great potential? Although, if he theoretically wanted to destroy their clan, it would be better to let him lose. He was already barely crawling, his arms trembling slightly from fatigue, but he couldn't afford to fail. He finally reached the 200th step and stood on it joyfully, with all confidence. At first, nothing happened. The guy just tried to catch his breath as quickly as possible. But after that, he realized that something very strange was obviously happening to him. Yu cast his eyes downward. Was he not wearing any clothes? And where was his turtle anyway? Where did it disappear to? Ulle found himself in the pool along with several pretty girls. Those encouraged him to swim with them, calling him all sorts of cute nicknames. One of them ran up to the guy naked, asking why he wasn't coming. Did they give him a bad service? Li looked at them unhappily, even slightly angry. He didn't care about that right now. He brushed aside the girl who ran up to him, telling her to stop all this outrage. The second girl that was in the pool turned to him, asking what was so important about perfection. Ta promised that if he stayed with them, they would let him relax. You didn't even seem to be listening to this young woman as he immediately went on the attack. He swooped down on the girl, causing her to fall, diving deep under the water. The guy said he was doing it for absolutely no perfection, calling the other one a fool. He did this only to finally forfeit this life by becoming the ruler of the world. Eventually, Yu woke up, the illusions starting to dissipate. The disappearance of attractive ladies was not the most pleasant feeling. Somewhere below, a familiar quacking sound was heard. Li began to look up and down the steps. It was his turtle. He picked it up in his arms, rubbing his cheek against its shell. Putting the turtle by the scruff of his neck, he was going to continue on his way no matter what happened. The watcher spotted Ulle, alerting everyone that someone was catching up. Her coworker said it was the kid at the end. He joined later than everyone else on the elder's orders. The second, tall man looked at the screen. Who was this Yu anyway that he was allowed to join? The first man, who was a little shorter, watched bewildered as Lei climbed the steps with confidence and speed. How is that possible? And then suddenly he stopped. The observers relaxed slightly. The first man wiped the sweat from his face, exhaling. That one had already managed to tense up. He said those were just lucky, but the contestant was really good. The other said that it was just amazing to go from the bottom step to the top 10. Master Guan stared at the screen in bewilderment. How could this even happen? Li's turtle peeked out from behind his sinus, quacking to its master. It was more like asking why they had stopped. That's why the guy replied that he was just tired and needed a break. Yu is hungry as hell. The young man was sitting on one of the steps. He remembered the novel, and so he began to reason that maybe he should slow down. However, his subconscious was trying to shake himself away from those thoughts. Yu is afraid of dying? He needs to. Rubbing the cheek he had supposedly hit himself on, he remembered his goal. He must go higher. The woman on surveillance was shocked. Yu started to rise again. Why? Meanwhile, Lo began to accelerate, climbing the stairs with confidence. He must win! The woman came to a standstill. Didn't Ulle stop to rest? How long had he been going for? The tall man grinned and said cryptically, who even knows? The one continued, saying that maybe this young man, he would surpass even Fang Qingshu. Sweat broke out on the face of the female observer. She said the guy couldn't do it, and the tall man waved it off, saying he was joking. However, the lowly man stared at the screen and later shrieked, saying that, actually, the man was already catching up with Qingshu. Yu was a few steps away from Fan when those still didn't believe that Lei would overtake him. However, as soon as that one was in front, the entire trio fell into a bewildered and stuporous stupor. The tall man started yelling about how unbelievable it was. The shorter man watched him continue walking. How high was he going? Ziyu looked at this picture and was also shocked. Sweat broke out on his face, and his eyebrows drew up to the bridge of his nose. First, Ulle crossed the 450th step, the best result in 400 years. After a time, he reached the 500 mark as well. It hadn't been reached in like 500 years. Whereupon he crossed the 550 steps, securing the title of the best for the last 700 years. The entire trio of observers and Ziyu looked at Ulle with their mouths open as he reached the 620th step. That one jumped up to the 650th step, becoming the best in the last 1,000 years. Next, Yu jumped up to the 700th step, and almost reaching it, he began to get into funny poses. The observers were already almost catching heart attacks, and Master Guang was staring at the screen, wondering only one question. How did it happen that a person who, in the near future, could theoretically destroy the clan passed the test? However, before Ulle reached the 700th step, the host announced that the trial was over. The lowly man said that it must be that if the kid had more time, he would have reached the 700th step as well. Ulle was definitely a miracle. However, the man's co-worker interrupted him, saying that since he joined later than everyone else, it meant that Yu wasn't properly evaluated. The entire trio fell abruptly silent, as if in anticipation of something. Or did they have some kind of plan? After which those snapped out of their seats, leaving small puffs of dust behind them. Ulle was already trembling with fear when he saw their faces. Sweat was running down his face and his eyes were slightly scared. There were 3 shadows leaning over the guy. Meanwhile, he sat huddled in some corner. The trio assured Le that he had nothing to worry about. He just hadn't completed his tests, so now the Watchers would be fixing that. Yu reluctantly agreed, but his kimono had already been pulled on, exposing his chest. Afterward, one of the evaluators pulled out a small needle, which was jabbed into his chest. It was very painful because the boy shrieked, opening his eyes wide. The observers inserted the needle into the green stone, watching for a reaction. Sweat even ran down the face of the short man. He'd been too nervous this year. The others watched, and the woman shrieked, saying that something was happening. However, the red dot in the middle did not increase in any way, and seemed to even get smaller. Ziyu looked at all of this with open eyes, more out of indignation than shock. The observation was interrupted by Yule's voice. The one whined that the needle prick was too painful. The entire trio turned sharply on him, and the boy felt uncomfortable. He asked, what were they even looking at? One of the Watchers told Yu to go rest. The guy was a little puzzled. Was it over so quickly? Then he turned around and shrieked happily. He was very tired from the ordeal. When Ulle left, everyone turned to the table and shrieked in indignation. This is too bad! The lowly man gibbered about how a level of chi like Yu's wasn't even close to comparing to Fang or Zuo. The second tall man was also gibbering. How could a person with such a strong heart have such a low level? The woman was desperate. Could the gods be mocking them? This is just awful. Master Guang was watching all of this, and some part of him was very happy. With such a low level of ki, he wouldn't even pass their easiest test. Having already arrived at the mentor's residence and hearing his residual verdict, Ziyu was completely shocked. Why should they leave him behind? However, the head said that the guy still has a lot to learn about fate, and the more you try to subdue it, the more it resists. Guan shrieked, saying that they had never taken someone with such a low rank before. But the elder only replied that he had climbed to the peak of the sword thanks to his own strength. It was foolish not to take it just because of fear. That's why Ziyu must accept you and register him into the clan with everyone else. If he doesn't step up, they will kick him out. The boy was silent for a long time, thinking about it. He had no choice. His word was nothing against the elder. But Guan said that since those were going to take the boy in, they would have to look after him harder. Meanwhile, Ulle was in a luxurious dormitory for new recruits. The guy was resting, happy for the opportunity. A turtle lay on a cushion next to him, also resting. Zhao Sueli had sent someone to give him the negotiation crystal so that the two could contact each other. Yu didn't know what would happen to the girl next. He had heard that Sueli's soul was damaged, so she was sent to a healer. But Ulle hoped that Zhao would recover soon. After all, this case was too serious. Finally, close to noon, they were all summoned to a class of registered participants. Yu was still just approaching the classroom, and loud voices could already be heard there. Someone was bragging about their achievements with someone else. However, those later moved on to talk about the results of Fang Qingshu and Zuo Yuhan. Those were definitely better. Meanwhile, Zuo Yuhan walked over to her friend, about to do something. Ta grabbed her friend's breasts and cried out, displeased that she was practicing in secret from her. The others in the room noticed this strange action and watched, wondering what was even going on in there. Yue, Zuo's friend, slightly twitched and joked, saying that maybe that one is endowed with a pure heart for studying and it's a secret. After which the opening of the door rang out. Ulle easily swung it open, walking into the classroom. He smiled smugly, must have been expecting the whoops and oohs at the sight of him. However, when it didn't follow, he tensed slightly, not out of character. Meanwhile, no one was even looking in Li's direction. All eyes were on the one couple. Even some 2 girls blushed at the sight of that picture in the middle of the hall. All eyes were on Zuo and Yue, who had their first kiss. Ulle even felt kind of uncomfortable. Now he realized why no one was looking at him. Ulle was in the classroom for the registered participants. Zuo Yuhan's face was as red as a tomato, but she was very angry. The girl was yelling at the guy for ruining such a moment. The guy was even taken aback by such a statement and hurriedly apologized, saying he hadn't noticed them. Suddenly, everyone turned their attention to Yu as well, recognizing him as someone who had passed the 690 steps. Zuo's ears were now perked up, looking at the guy. Someone had asked him to introduce himself. That was why Ulle got into a modeling pose and said his name while mussing his hair with his hand. Zuo Yuhan was already angry at that moment. Meanwhile, Yu listened to the admiration of the others in the class. Zuo shouted for attention, for this circus was already really annoying her. Everyone else in the room, and including Le, felt awkward and looked at her with big eyes. The girl pulled out her sword, saying that Yu didn't look like a legend at all. Ta said that according to the Qi ranking, the best is Fang Qingxu, and Yu is only a parody of him. Li asked what she meant. After all, Fang doesn't have to be good at everything, does he? Zuo, on the other hand, didn't listen to him, but only prepared to attack, and told Yu to show her his skills in combat. The guy was slightly taken aback, completely unprepared for this turn of events. However, Yuhan was already preparing to run at him, telling him to let his strength answer for the guy. That one snapped out of her seat in a second, making Ulle slightly anxious. She took a swing, but it was as if Li was frozen in place, unable to move. The sword blade was already at his face, as if to stop for the hunter. And right after that, Yu automatically crouched down. Zuo's sword blade sliced through the air. Then the young man bounced behind the girl's back, moving contentedly. Several people had. This development was expected, but it still surprised him. Yuhan half turned around. Someone like him had dodged her attack? Yes, she would make him suffer. She then made a full and sharp and dangerous turn during which one could easily fall. Next, she gripped her sword tightly and quickly ran at her opponent. Ulle looked at his hands. This body had the so-called conditioned reflexes of a hunter, which unfortunately saved him. Turning around, the guy once again saw Zuo behind him, who was already swinging for a punch. It was unexpected, and Lee had no intention of defending himself, so he just closed his eyes without moving from his seat. You heard the sword cleaving the air, but along with that, he heard a clang. Fang Qingxu defended Ulle at the last moment, thwarting Yuhan's attack. Yu closed his eyes even harder, biting his lower lip. This was something he hadn't expected. Zuo's eyes widened, his hand trembling slightly. Fang began his so-called speech by addressing the girl. While the hunter was perplexed at having survived again, Qingxu explained to Yuhan that she shouldn't use her sword against the other participants. The guy went on to say that their swords were only meant for fighting demons. The girl put her blade away and snorted. Fang set it aside as well, glaring slightly angrily at Zuo. Yuhan was angry. What should she do then? She doesn't want someone like him to get away with it, and Yu started it all. Meanwhile, Li put his palms together and turning to Fang, thanked him, saying that it was all just a misunderstanding. The guy smiled affectionately, saying that Ulle must have tremendous willpower since he had reached such a high stage. Zuo shouted, saying that Qingxu is a hypocrite. Just because Lei has climbed the mountain doesn't mean anything yet, because his qi level is too low. But Fan didn't give in to the provocation, saying that they were improving to protect the clan, not to compete with each other in glory. Yu appreciated his condescension and ability to choose his words. He deserved to be the leader of their class. Yuhan raised an eyebrow. Not for glory, then? Then why don't they make a bet? The boys looked at the girl with interest. Ta said she's betting, and over the next 5 years as a clan follower, she'll be the best. Then, a fourth voice suddenly appeared, shouting that it wouldn't take no for an answer. Everyone in the class turned around at the voice, immediately recognizing the guy as Master Guang. He was probably going to be their teacher. Master said that if they were going to use the Wensword clan as a gaming table. After a short pause, Ziyu squinted his eyes and said that in that case, they should be willing to gamble for their lives. Yu's eyes lit up. He said he liked how risky it sounded. The whole class came to a huge canyon from which black haze was rising. A few people came to the edge, looking down into the abyss. Those were intrigued and asked what it was. Master Guan replied that it was one of their trials called the Single Plank Bridge. One day their team got into a dangerous situation, and after that, this test was created. And if you lose concentration even for a moment, you will fall into the abyss, which is considered worse than death. And if they manage to get through, their spirit is strengthened. Ulle stood on the edge, looking into the canyon. On the first day, there was a great opportunity to die. The boy smiled, keeping his gaze on the black smoke. Perhaps this was not the worst fate, but a blessing. Guang turned to the three who had made the bet. He said that they didn't need to wait 5 years. By passing this test, they could already be considered the best. Right after the speech ended, Ulle volunteered to go first, talking about it almost every second so that he could be chosen. Ziyu was angry. Why is Yu not scared and even looks somehow joyful? His spirit looks truly strong. Is that one not afraid of danger? After that, Zuo Yuhan was the first to volunteer to go as well, causing Lei to huff. The girl said that she couldn't lose to a person with such a low level of qi. Well, Fang Qingshu volunteered after her, saying that it was best for Master Guang to summon his disciple first. Thoth smiled quietly, in his thoughts pleased that almost no one was intimidated by the ordeal. Fang stepped forward, followed by a relaxed and joyful Yu and a little farther away Zuo. Qingshu thought that since he was going, he just had to pass the test successfully. At the same time, a smile spread across Lei's face. He could finally finish what he had started. Zuo, meanwhile, thought about how much her fear would increase. Fang Qingshu is a few steps ahead again. This is humiliating. Fan was about to get on the board already, as long as he was focused. Then it was all the same to what was below. Everyone held their breath and remained silent, afraid to let out the slightest sigh or squeak, so as not to disturb the guy. Whereupon he fully became, taking the first large but slightly unsure step forward. His steps were tentative at first. He could barely walk for fear of falling. He walked forward, his mood changing from confident to unsure, but he was still focused. After walking a few more steps, the next ones became much more determined. Thoth balanced skillfully on the small board, spreading his arms out to the sides and striding forward confidently. Everyone gave a startled gasp. He's amazing. He's more than halfway down the board. Yuhan wondered if he would make it to the end. After all, it was impossible, right? Master Guang was also watching Qingshu. He's quite good, but he's always a bit boring. Suddenly, Fang looked down and his eyes widened, becoming the size of a coin. The guy stopped, looking down with a frightened look and shouting, asking, "What's that down there?" And of course, because Fang was no longer focused on the board, he slipped. The whole class was amazed. One of the best contestants just took a slip. He was falling, however, without screaming or showing his fear at all. Was he really ready to accept it? Everyone looked down and saw two glowing huge dots like lanterns at the very bottom. These lanterns appeared to be the eyes of a bird. It opened its mouth wide, but Fang Qingshu still didn't scream, as if he was paralyzed with fright. After that, the bird closed its mouth, crushing and eating Qingshu as if he was some kind of sweet berry. A few people almost threw up. They looked down with their eyes wide open, batting their eyelashes. Someone started screaming in bewilderment. Did Fan seriously just get eaten by a huge bird? One of the girl's stomachs couldn't take it and she threw up. Some guy stood there in complete shock, not realizing whether it was a joke or not. Zuo Yuhan was also standing there with her eyes wide open. It seemed to be the first time she was so shocked during the entire ordeal. Her tongue was slurring. She wanted to inform Master Guan of their loss, but only unrelated words came out. Mr. Ziyu chuckled. Did they really think that he was joking, and if those passed the sword peak ascents, the rest would be a complete trifle? Zuo remained silent, unable to find words. A few more guys looked at Guan in shock. Ziyu, on the other hand, said that such trials would await them constantly, day in and day out, and if they have confidence in their abilities, they should show it. But if any of them are afraid, let them get out now. Finally, ulle was about to step onto the board. He asked the master if it was too reckless to give a task that could kill them so easily. Teacher Guang said that he doesn't force them to do this. They can leave at any time. However, if one stays, one must face the consequences. Li asked another question, saying that he wouldn't save his students from death no matter what happened. He said yes, he would not, and if anyone was afraid, he could retreat right now. Ulle looked down. He felt sorry that he wouldn't be able to take revenge on Guan for Fang Qingshu. However, this was the perfect opportunity to put his plan into action. So the guy began to step confidently onto the board. Master Guang thought to himself that since even Fang Qingshu had fallen off this board when he felt frightened, an ordinary person would definitely fall. In that case, it would be a blessing, for then the Wensword clan would avoid disaster. Master Guang and the rest of the participants looked at Ulle with admiration. Did he really do it? Yu stood on the other side of the canyon with his head up, biting his lower lip. He had really done it. After which the guy leveled his head and, making a very disappointed expression on his face, swore. Who the hell tricked him? 30 minutes earlier, the young man had been balancing calmly on the board going forward. He estimated the thickness of the board and smiled. It was very thin, and it would be easy to fail. He pretended he was about to fall, leaning slightly to the left and talking about the wind knocking him over. After walking a few more steps, he cowered to his left again, saying with contrived consternation, "Oh no, his foot had slipped!" You started to tumble down, reciting prayers to all the gods and thanking them for this opportunity. Everyone cried out in fright, with their mouths wide open, screaming that the one had already started to fall. Master Guang, on the other hand, was smiling like a small child, happy at Ulle's fall. However, Lu grabbed onto the board firmly in time before being eaten by the three-eyed bird. He did a sharp flip, using his hunter skill and unlocking his reflexes. He barely managed to stay on the board with his legs spread apart. Sweat dripped down Ulle's face. He was also very angry at this too successful reflex. Teacher Guang was disappointed and snorted. Meanwhile, the students exhaled lightly, thinking Yu was lucky. Suddenly, a system appeared above Ulle. It asked if the one who had stumbled now was on purpose. Yui was slightly unpleasantly surprised to see her in the sky. Still, that one had noticed. The system was very angry and looked at the guy aggressively, waiting for an explanation. Lee made a cute face and assured her that there was no point in doing that because he was just getting used to this body. He would try harder from now on. The system said he'd better not lie, and she'd better keep a better eye on him from now on, and now she was leaving. Yu stopped, keeping his balance in one place. He can't relax now. After all, he would be caught with the shelves, however. If he went at the same speed as Fang, he would get it over with. The guy got ready to go, while trying to think of a plan for his future death. A very long minute passed. He still couldn't move from his seat, tensely waiting for something. He's only a third of the way through, but he's making steady progress with each step. That won't do. He must try to bring himself closer to failure. Master and the others tilted their heads to the side like little puppies. They were interested in the reason why Yu wasn't moving. Thoth made a rather odd gesture with his hand, jerking it slightly downward, rubbing the brush. He fidgeted with his legs, trying to move forward on the board. Ziyu looked at Yu and was slightly perplexed. What is he doing on this board? However, if you look closely at the whole thing, it looks like a full-blown but weird dance. Watching all this, several people awed, not understanding the principle of the strategy. Next, Ulle started walking on his toes, making everything for his failure. A few guys looked at the whole scene with bulging eyes. One of them clutched his head, completely shocked by Lee's fearlessness. Yu meanwhile stood on one foot, continuing to move in the dance and getting into different poses. Next, he twirled in one place as if performing a ballet dance. Master Guang looked at the guy and seemed to be slightly worried about him. Not only had he conquered the fear of death, but he also had the calmness to perform the dance. Yu continued to move using a different set of movements. As long as he moved at this pace, then the system would not react. That's when he stopped and decided he could do something more spectacular. Thoth jumped up, about to do something obviously unbelievable and difficult. Master Guang gasped in anticipation of the exciting trick. His heart was already racing. Ulle said that he wanted to do a perfect eightfold, 360-degree standing jump, already preparing to perform it. However, he pulled himself back. How should Liu even perform such a complicated trick? And unexpectedly for himself, he just took and fell off the plank, falling down. Ziyu and the others were frightened. Someone shouted that he had started falling too suddenly, and everyone didn't understand what had happened. Yu flew head down, crossing his arms on his chest. He was glad that he had finally reached his goal. But at some point, a magical hand appeared in the air above him. The boy couldn't see it because his eyes were closed. A hand headed towards him, intending to save the guy. He, meanwhile, was already relaxed in flight. And now he was up the other half of the canyon with the most disgruntled face possible. In his head, Yu was screaming in anger. What kind of thing saved him just now? Outwardly, however, he was still as disgruntled as ever. And on the other half of the canyon, everyone was yelling about what a hero he was. Master Guang, meanwhile, stared at the ground, completely unaware of anything. Why did he, the one who said he wouldn't help the contestants, save Ulle? Zuo Yuhan clenched her fist. She couldn't lose to such a person again. Ta confidently approached the board. Since Ulle had done it, she could do it too. One of the participants said that the one hasn't lost yet, which means it will cross the bridge. Before going, the girl thought for a moment. Zuo can't cross the bridge just like Fang Qingxu. She took her first steps on the board, and then began to move with strange actions. A few people noticed that she was moving the same way as Li. A few seconds later, Zuo plopped down, screaming loudly and immediately drawing attention to herself. The disciples cried out that once again they had lost another fighter. The top two had simply been eaten. Watching all of this, Ulle couldn't believe what he had just seen. Pulling the bandage over his head, he hummed. It was the second person to die, but not him. Yu ran back across the bridge, shouting as if he was going to attack someone. Ziyu was watching this. It seemed like the one was about to walk back down the board on his own. After accomplishing such a difficult task, he does it again. This guy is definitely up to something. After returning back and not dying, Yu was shocked. How did everything go so quickly and easily? Afterward, the guy touched his head, asking why it was so hot. Someone in the crowd of fighters shrieked, saying that his head had self-ignited. Teacher Guang slapped that guy on the head, saying that he had just risen one cultivation stage higher. A guy with a funny hairstyle said that it wasn't fair, but Ziyu said that he was giving everyone an equal chance to get a new rank. It was their own fault for not taking the chance. After that, the teacher waved his hand. The same bird that had previously eaten Fang Qingxu and Zuo Yuhan flew out of the canyon. Everyone started to shout, but the master shut them up. After a few minutes and effort, the bird spit those two fighters out onto the ground. They were recognized, happy that two of the top three were still alive after all. Guan told them to get up, and Zuo and Fan quickly woke up, startled. The teacher began his speech by saying that death is everywhere, and it is the duty of the fighters of their cult to fight for the clan against the demonic clan. A competitive spirit is all very well, but if they are afraid, they won't be able to handle even the simplest task. Yuhan and Qingshu blushed red with embarrassment. The other coughed into his hand, covering his face. Master Guang sat on the bird and said that the lesson was over. However, those should not try to cross the bridge without anyone's help. After all, they may say it's all nonsense, but if those fall, they won't get a second chance. After that, the bird with 4 wings and 3 eyes soared into the sky and flew away. Ulle also escorted the bird with his eyes, slightly angry about the whole situation. He was furious because, surprisingly, the system didn't show up a second time. His salvation must have been Ziyu's doing. Yu muttered to himself to his tray that he was obligated to return when no one was there. Meanwhile, one of his classmates approached him. Ta turned to him, saying that Master Guang would not let them die, and later said that Le is awesome and she would like to train with him. Yulei turned around and asked who she was, and the girl introduced herself. Her name was Liu Yuer. The guy froze for a while. Is it normal for cultivators to be nice? Yu crossed his 2 index fingers. He told the girl that there was no way he was going to train with her, looking at her with a very strange look. The guy just wanted to die, and getting close to someone would be very problematic and nothing good would come of it. Yu turned his back to the girl, saying that cultivation was very important to him and Liu shouldn't waste her time on him, and therefore let her not look for him. Ta stepped back slightly and apologized for her rudeness. She wouldn't go near him again. Ware walked away, leaving Lei in the company of a small turtle behind the crotch of his kimono. He exhaled in relief as US stepped back a safe distance. It felt so good to not have to commit to someone. It was already nearing nightfall. All the students had long since lain in their beds in the dormitory. Yulei asked Zhao to tell him about his sensei Guang. She told him and finally said that he was very reliable, so he was the person to ask for help in case of trouble. When Sueli finished, she asked the reason why she was so interested in Ziyu. The guy replied that he was their teacher and therefore wanted to know more. Suddenly, the girl became sad and called Yu by her full name, as if she was about to say something. The guy looked at the girl worriedly, asking the reason for such a concerned and sad voice. However, Zhao waved him away, smiling and praising him. She said that she would work hard to heal herself. Zuo Yuhan is doing an exercise with her classmates. Ta says that Yulei definitely looks down on them and doesn't count them as people. Her buddy agrees. Liu Yue ran after the two, saying that the one wasn't that bad. The guy just loves his training. Suddenly the teacher appeared and hit them on the head, calling for silence, for they were in class. The master began to tell them about the path of the cultivator and the level system. Right now, those are training their bodies to advance to the 2nd stage of human. Guan said that once those completed all 10 levels, they would advance to the art stage. Fang and Zuo were dragging 2 huge cobblestones behind them, trying to outrun each other. They remembered Yu Lei. Where was he? Meanwhile, the guy was looking up at the sky, brooding and hovering in the clouds of his thoughts. He was lying on the lawn. Why would he get stronger? It would make it so much easier for him to lose his life. Suddenly, Teacher Guang appeared from behind a rock. He was very angry about Yu's truancy. He started screaming and took a board and hit him on the head. Just because he was able to reach the 2nd human level thanks to the bridge, it didn't mean he had to go to it every day. Some guys watched Yulei's beating in astonishment. They were still beginners. Why was he skipping? Ziyu heard them whispering and asked if they wanted to get some too. The trace of them immediately disappeared. 3 months had passed. Yulei tried to catch his breath. Sweat dripped off him. He would no longer be able to continue today. That one had passed through that bridge 450 times and was able to reach the 6th rank of the human stage. He hadn't slipped once on that poor bridge. How could he? When would he finally be able to leave? Yu exhaled softly, reciting the number of times he passed through the bridge. Behind the stone sat Fang and Zuo. How did Le get to the 6th rank so quickly? In 3 months of hard training, these two had only reached the 3rd rank. They thought that the gap between them was very small, but they must have been wrong. Yu interrupted Qingshu and Yuhan's misery, asking what they had forgotten by the canyon. They looked up and said they wanted to watch him practice. Immediately, Zuo Yuhan jumped up from her seat, making Fang Qingshu interested. She turned to Yu, asking how he crosses the bridge. Her spiritual powers aren't weaker, so why is he the only one who managed to cross the bridge? Li hesitated. He really didn't know what answer to give to Zuo. If he said the wrong thing, he could get the girl in trouble. Yuhan looked at the guy with cheeks flushed with embarrassment and waited for an answer. Yu felt uncomfortable, but he replied that he didn't have a good level of ki, nor was he interested in cultivation. But most likely the guy had just always been like this. Fang and Zuo didn't understand. What did it mean to have always been like this? Strong? Arrogant? Yulei stepped away from them, standing on the board. The one said that he had always liked one saying. The guy started walking, dancing across the bridge, and quoted a saying, "The madness of a demon can do its own thing." Qingshu and Yuhan became numb. The saying sounded very exciting. Zuo Yuhan's eyes widened. She repeated the beginning of the saying while pondering over it. Suddenly, something very large rapidly began to fall to the ground. An explosion rang out, sweeping away and incinerating everything that had been at the site of the explosion before. A huge ball of smoke and fire rose up, billowing upward and making itself known. Someone abruptly rushed into the elder's residence, shouting for the mentor to help them. It was Guan. The head urged the one to calm down, but he absolutely could not. He said that the lower-level disciples began to become possessed. It was already night, and the bright blue moon was shining. Someone was reporting to their master that they could enter the secret zone tomorrow. The Lord smiled. What, did the disciples from the Wensword clan break their traditions? The unknown person was sitting near the mirror. All of this was happening because of their new student Ulle. The master told his man to take a look at him, for Yu was too strange. He also said to collect items from the 6th level of the secret area. The master will be waiting for him. The 6th secret area of the sword contained a great deal of energies and treasures. It was discovered by their founder 10,000 years ago. But countless monsters and demons also live there, and many dangers lurk there. After passing the trial within the confines of this area, a cultivator will greatly increase his rank and combat skills. And of course, this area was only accessible to disciples with a level above the 5th human stage. Ulle held onto something with his teeth and shouted loudly that he wasn't going anywhere. Fang Qingshu pulled the one by his feet, saying that the guy couldn't miss the special chance to enter the secret area. Zuo Yuhan also pulled him, but only by the other leg. She said that it was his own fault for talking about the demon's madness. Now he must spend 3 days in penance. However, Yu held on tightly to the wooden pillar with his teeth, saying that it would only happen over his dead body. After saying that, Zuo and Fan made very fearful facial expressions, asking if he really wanted to die like that. Li immediately calmed down, saying he was joking and this would be a great opportunity for him. Here Master Guan got into the argument, telling those to hurry up, for he would guide the participants to the level for the human stage. Everyone immediately lined up behind Ziyu, waiting for him to open the portal. They were immediately transported to another dimension. Guan began to explain that there were many tests on the first floor. Each of these trials hides an emerald stone. Their task is to bring 5 stones to the top of the volcano to pass the floor and of course get a reward. Then Teacher Ziyu pointed his finger at some huge selenium ball. Toth said it was a surveillance system, and he would wait for them right under it. If there was a problem, the elders would tell him about it. Guan shouted that the trials were starting, and everyone immediately snapped out of their seats. Someone's first challenge chose to defeat a huge fire monster, Scorpion Man, and some battle with tall, transparent silhouettes that look like ghosts. Ulle was fighting a huge orc. There, the system forbade him to die, so he tried to fight back. Someone in general was struggling with a scary woman in white with her hair in her face. Master Guang looked at the large sphere in the air. Most of the trials are used to train basic abilities. Those kids performed well on the Sword Peak climb, so they should definitely be fine. The teacher heard the first students finish their first tests. They argued about which one of them came faster. Zuo was sure that Fanya had come first. They held out 1 green crystal each to Teacher Guang Ziyu. Toth looked at them, saying that those did a pretty good job and acted very quickly. A great many more voices were heard in the distance. Someone was saying that the monster had almost bitten his arm off. They turned around at the voices, and Fang commented that the others were returning as well. Liu Yue rubbed her sore head. Something had blinded her for a while. Ulle, meanwhile, was throwing away his crystals. He noticed someone watching as he tossed those green rocks. The guy whispered, asking those not to give him away since he didn't want to increase his cultivation level. He held out his hand, showing his remaining 5 stones. The disciples immediately cheered up, looking at the guy's hand. Would those raise their level? Suddenly an earthquake started. It seems like something terrible is about to happen. Even Master Guang gasped in astonishment, raising his head up and not realizing what had happened. Ulle trembled slightly as he looked up. What was even going on? A new trial? However, literally at the same second, the volcano erupted and lava just poured out of that one. Fang was about to ask what it was and what was going on, but the teacher shouted, saying that they were all going back. Whereupon the latter made a sharp and very strange gesture with his hand. The man pulled her forward and something seemed to start appearing in front of them. Ziyu shouted for those to hide behind him and made a small dome around them. A huge rock flew right at them. There seems to be a huge problem in the secret area. The foyer of the Waysword cult was in complete turmoil. Everyone was worried about the situation in the secret area. A short man from the elders shouted, assigning duties and people to groups. The woman from the 3 elders was looking at the so-called screen through the stone. The tall man asked her if she had found his students. She said that the celestial eye couldn't see them, and it was likely that they could have gotten into other training areas. They could also have died. The man shrieked, saying that it was impossible after all. Guang Ziyu, with the highest level of the Dao stage, was with them. The lady looked and saw that the eye of observation saw them when they were in grave danger. A few students were fighting off the monsters. They didn't understand why the rescue team hadn't been sent yet. Would they really become the monster's lunch? Master Guang, fighting off the monster, assured them that they need not worry. After that, he jumped at the monster, intending to attack it as quickly as possible, after which the man swung around and cut him off. The teacher said he would protect them if anything happened. Ulle cried out to help his master and was about to run towards him. Zuo Yuhan and Fang Qingshu followed suit and said that they would help as well. Mr. Ziyu shouted for those to be sensible. They are still too weak. Ulle looked at the teacher. He couldn't afford to die now, after all. Guan would 100% try to save him. It was very strange that something had happened right now. Suddenly Yu heard a strange sound. He turned around and started looking for the cause of it. The earth began to crack and huge canyons appeared in it, just like in that test. Everyone started screaming in fear. Now this problem has appeared at absolutely no time. Master Guang looked at the situation and cursed to himself. He was horrified. This had not happened for a long time. However, at the same moment, as if out of nowhere, a huge, snarling monster flew out. He pounced at Teacher Guang, catching him off guard and knocking the man to the ground. Ziyu roared, lightly lurching in pain. He had allowed himself to be careless. The teacher abruptly swung his sword he held in his right hand and stabbed it into the monster, after which he took another swing and cut the monster in two, severing the head. The master was right above the canyon at that moment, so both parts of the monster fell into it. Meanwhile, Zuo Yuhan was in the middle of nowhere. She was awakened by someone's voice. The one asked if the girl was okay and she opened her eyes, answering positively. On top of her lay Ulle, seemingly still completely awake as well. The one swung with all her might. You could even hear her hand parting the air. The girl slapped him and he woke up, not realizing where they were or why his face hurt so much. Fang Qingshu called out to Yu and Zuo, telling them to hurry to him, for he had found a teacher. Those surrounded Master Guang, who was bleeding on his left shoulder. Zuo tried to shout to him and wake him up. When yelling didn't work, the girl grabbed him and started shaking him. The man immediately woke up, telling Yuhan to stop. Fang worriedly asked the teacher if he was injured while looking at the bloody kimono. The man replied that everything was fine and it was only a minor scratch. He had nothing to worry about. Ulle, meanwhile, was looking around the room. He wondered where they had fallen to. Master Guang said that it looked like they were in a temple meant for 10th level spiritual stage cultivators. Someone was shocked. They were only at the human stage after all. The man said that this place was created to train the bodily and wandering soul. The man also told them not to forget that he was at the Tao stage, and it would not be a problem. After a few minutes of reasoning, he realized that they were most likely blocked in this space. He was interrupted by Yu asking about the corporeal and wandering souls. The boy asked if that meant that if they didn't pass, their souls could be scattered. The man said no, but they could die because of carelessness. Yu exhaled a sigh of relief. He had already thought that this would be a repeat of Duhoku. A flying face suddenly appeared behind the young man. It wanted to swallow the guy completely, but he was saved. Master Guang grabbed Le and pulled him away from this strange monster, and he was fidgeting in confusion as to where his prey was. The students looked at that creature with bulging eyes, asking the teacher what kind of creature it was. The man replied that it was one of the tasks for cultivators of the 10th level of the spiritual stage. Yu shrieked for the teacher to be more gentle with him next time, and right after that, some symbols appeared in the air. Those began to come together and create a pattern, and later something opened up. Guan told his charges that cultivators of the 10th level of the spiritual stage were training in the spiritual palace. There are ghosts who specialize in attacking the corporeal and wandering soul. There are also 3 giants, which correspond to the 3 wandering souls. There are also 7 wandering spirits for the 7 bodily souls. They dwell in space. Stray spirits will try to enter the trial participants to gain control over them. At this time, several stray spirits were looking down at the people standing below. Guan gripped his sword. He looked carefully to the side, watching for spirits. The man said that if the contestant could protect his soul, he had passed the test. If the contestant did not do so, his body would be taken away by the ghost. The Zuo girl asked fearfully, "Will the ghost live in the possessed person's body?" The teacher explained to the girl that it wouldn't be quite like that. Spirits kept flying overhead. People crowded from below on a small platform. The spirits continued to approach them. Guan ran his hand over his sword. He prepared to fight off the flying spirits. The man grabbed his sword blade with his hand and prepared to fight off the ghosts with it. The ghosts continued to circle over the Guan. There were bright flashes of fire above it. The man saw his friends nearby and shouted for them not to worry as he was here. One of the students shouted to Teacher Guan Yu to be more careful. The man looked excitedly in front of him. Something had scared him very badly. A huge monster appeared. It stuck out its paw to grab the teacher. The main character was very scared. He couldn't help the Guan in any way. The pig-tailed student stood looking at the man confused. He was afraid of the monster. The guy was very amazed. He couldn't understand how the monsters were able to get physical. The man on the celestial platform angrily asked the attendant, why still she doesn't know where the people are. The man menacingly reminded that his companion could not find a stage Tao master. He added that there had been an attack on the secret area. The attendant grudgingly said that something had broken her search engine. The astonished man said there was no way a search engine could be blocked in a classified area. The man thought fearfully that the teacher and his charges might actually be dead. At this time, the teacher continued to fight. Guan shouted fearfully that the spirits were taking physical form and they were huge. The man was screaming fearfully for someone to help them escape. He yelled for the guy to go and kill someone else. The boy asked fearfully for the teacher to let him go. The ghost ran after them. Suddenly, the ghost's body broke into 2 pieces. The legs continued to run forward on their own. Guan couldn't understand how such monsters could appear in a secret area. He decided that he had to pass the test as soon as possible and get the disciples out of here. Half of the ghost's body was left lying on Earth. It began to heal itself. The man saw the spirit's body begin to regenerate. He realized he couldn't kill it. After that, the evil spirit completely recovered. It jumped up and headed out to attack the Guan. The teacher held his sword in his hands. He was preparing to fight off the spirit that was running at him. The Guan swung his sword to immediately strike the ghost running at him. There was a very strong, loud, and bright explosion. Rocks flew around. Flames raged everywhere. From above, another flying ghost appeared in the air. The teacher noticed as the flames began to gradually approach him. Guan Mahal swung his sword in all directions to strike the ghosts. They dodged. The man excitedly realized to himself that the spirits had grown very strong. They were flying around him. The teacher continued to fight surrounded by flames. At that time, a Zuo student called out to him. The Guan turned to the side and looked at his students with excitement. The girl and the boys were very frightened when they saw the spirits flying at them. After that, the teacher turned around. He pushed himself off the ground and ran to the side. The girl was very much frightened. She covered her eyes in fear. Zuo opened her eyes and looked at her teacher with great consternation. The protagonist looked fearfully at the Guan and noticed that he was injured and bleeding. Ulle stood looking at his teacher very scared. He decided to go and help him. The protagonist called out to his teacher in fright. At the same time, a monster approached Guan from behind. Guan was very badly hurt after being hit hard in the back by a monster. The man found his strength. He jumped up and swung his sword to strike the dangerous ghost. The teacher folded his fingers in a magical symbol and activated the protective energy. A very bright and strong glow came from Guan's hand. It traveled upwards. A huge yin-yang magic symbol shone from above. Blue waves emanated from it. The main character was very amazed. He looked at his teacher with great excitement. The exhausted Guan fell to his knees. He had no strength to fight any longer. The teacher was very badly wounded. Blood was gushing out of his body and dripping on the floor. A frightened boy ran up to the man. He asked excitedly to Mr. Guan if he was all right. The teacher coughed and said he was fine and just needed a rest. Ulle silently looked at his teacher. He realized that none of the students wouldn't believe Guan. The girl excitedly asked the teacher, "Are they going to die here since no help has arrived so far?" The female student asked the man, "Don't they have a way out of a situation like this?" The teacher didn't say anything back to the girl. He was stunned silent and staring in front of him. A Zuo girl approached. She decided to address her friends who were standing. TSO told her friends that the teacher is hurt because they are not doing anything. She added that they need to work together. The main character came over. He asked the other students to calm down. Yu asked the teacher, "Is there no way out?" The man calmed down a bit and told the guy they had a way out. Guan explained to the disciples that they could pass the test. They needed to resist the spirits and cross over to the other side. After successfully resisting the spirit's influence, there would be a reward and the exit from the palace would open. The teacher added that as soon as someone rings the bell, the spirits will retreat. The man added that the rules of the test remained the same. Teacher explained that spirits couldn't be killed. If human stage cultivators were attacked by ghosts of this level, they would definitely die. The excited students suggested that the teacher try to contact the other people again. Yu didn't like what his friends were saying. The main character looked in front of him and asked the teacher if they could escape if they got to the other platforms and rang the bell. Guan replied to the protagonist that it would be exactly as he said it would be. Yu said confidently to his friends and teacher that he would go and accomplish everything. Guan and one guy were amazed when they heard such words from the protagonist. The teacher tapped the student in the face and told him he was talking a lot of nonsense. Guan told the boy that once he got there, he would be torn to pieces. The trial was 2 levels higher than Yuli's current stage. The teacher shouted that his ward could go straight to heaven. I asked the teacher very calmly if he had a better idea. Did the protagonist explain that the barrier that Guan had put up would not last forever? If help doesn't arrive in time, the man won't protect the students. Ulle explained that time was running out and they didn't know what might happen. Then another ghost appeared nearby. The main character turned around and told his friends that he was lucky and would definitely open a way out for them. The guy ran up to his friend and tapped his hand. He yelled that his luck was just bad. The teacher told the boy that he was the strongest of them all. The man added that he would go in place of the main character. At this time, a girl came over and put her hand on the protagonist's shoulder from behind. TSO told her friend that if he went, he would take everything away from her. She excitedly added that it was now her turn. The students became very animated. Each one of them shouted confidently that it was his turn. Ulle shouted excitedly to his friends not to be stupid. He added that he was the student with the highest level and the strongest spirit. Ulle explained that he was going since he had the greatest chance of survival. The teacher looked at the boy and realized that it would take a bold decision to find a way out of the current situation. The protagonist walked up to the teacher and asked him to clear his path. Guan asked the student if he was really not afraid at all. Yu explained that if they spent more time, things would become much more dangerous. The man took up his sword and told his apprentice that he would help him in any way he could. Guan explained that he could make his way to the platform, but it wouldn't be open for long. The protagonist replied absolutely calmly that it would be enough. The friends shouted to the protagonist confidently that they wanted to go too. Ulle turned around and told his friends grudgingly not to be silly. The apprentice said that he and the Zuo girl would help the protagonist since they have great fighting potential. The teacher looked at his charges and was silent. He was full of thoughts. Guan decided to himself that he would have to agree and told the students to walk together. The man raised his sword upward. He shouted to his charges that he would protect them at the cost of his life. The ghosts were still flying overhead. The protagonist headed out with his friends. They ran across the castle floor. Ulle was running at full speed. He had to get there in time with the other students. The protagonist angrily thought to himself that he was going to die. Even if he could pass the test, it would be difficult to survive afterwards. Ulle was running at top speed. At this time, ghosts began to appear all around. The flying ghost with an evil grin was beginning to catch up with the protagonist. Ulle was startled to see the monster flying at him. He jumped aside. The flying ghost stretched out its arms to try and hit the protagonist. The evil spirit caught up with the protagonist in flight and threw him aside with a powerful blow. Ulle turned to the side and looked at his friend. He heard the scream. The monster was able to successfully hit and wound the guy. The student shouted loudly. After a tremendous blow, the protagonist was swept aside and slammed into a wall. Ulle was worried about his friend. He shouted and was called by his name, Qingshu. Qingshu shouted back at the protagonist not to worry about him. The guy thought to himself that he shouldn't lose. Ulle looked at his friend fearfully. He realized that ghosts could continue to attack Qingshu. The protagonist vividly recalled how his teacher had been struck from behind by an evil spirit. The protagonist froze for a moment and thought to himself about the people who help him fight. Zuo told his friend fearfully to hurry up. The girl with the knife added that she could no longer contain and further the ghost. The protagonist turned to the side and looked excitedly at his girlfriend. Ulle kicked off the ground and ran. He was amazed that the people around him were very fearless. Ulle ran as hard as he could. He realized that his friends were sacrificing themselves for those who didn't want to wear their contribution at all. The protagonist ran up the stairs. There was his target at the top in the form of a bell. The guy was having a hard time. He was running up the stairs. Ulle looked carefully in front of him. He saw that the bell was already near. The protagonist looked at the bell and realized it would calm the ghosts. He walked up to it. There was a loud and clear ringing of bells throughout the castle. Everyone heard it. The striking of the bell had a very strong effect on the flying evil ghosts. Tsuo girl heard the bell ringing and realized that the protagonist had reached his destination, and waved the bell angrily in all directions. A ringing sound was heard everywhere. Bell ringing came from the center of the palace and spread to all the outskirts. The flying ghost stopped. He couldn't attack the girl any further. The girl noticed the flying angry ghost froze and hovered in the air. Zuo stared in amazement at the malevolent spirit in front of her in the air. The girl turned her head to the side and said gingerly that it was over. Ulle rang a bell and repeated joyfully that it was finally over. Suddenly, the monster's strength returned. He held out his hand in the girl's direction. The evil spirit continued to reach out with his hand to grab the girl. Zuo watched fearfully as the dangerous monster reached for her. She couldn't defend herself. Ulle kept tapping the bell, but couldn't understand why it wasn't working. The protagonist didn't know what to do or how he could make the ghost stop. The guy kept banging the bell and yelling for him to do something. Ulle tapped the bell and demanded that he start acting now. Suddenly, a very powerful explosion sounded from above and a pillar of fire appeared. The guy was really scared. He didn't realize what had just happened. A magical black necklace suddenly appeared from above. It floated in the air. The main character looked with great surprise at the necklace descending on him from above. He didn't realize it was in front of him. Guan saw evil ghosts near him. He shouted to the protagonist that they could not let the necklace fall into the hands of evil spirits. Evil spirits began to step and approach the protagonist from all sides. Ulle was scared. He realized he couldn't just run away. There was danger on all sides. The main character was holding a necklace. He turned his head to the side and saw an evil ghost. Ulle threw the necklace into his mouth and shouted to the evil spirits that they wouldn't get it. The protagonist swallowed the magic necklace from his hands with great difficulty. The ghost and the humans were very surprised because of the fact that the guy was able to swallow the magical artifact. The ghost turned around and headed away. Guan shouted to the students to look at the ghosts. Then the main character rose up above the stairs and floated in the air. The guy was flying in the air surrounded by pink lightning bolts. Guan shouted that Ulle was dying. The main character was very sick. He started wheezing and choking. Ulle was in the air surrounded by lilac color. Friends and teacher looked at him excitedly. Ching Shugai was surprised because of the main character being tested by ghosts. He added that the evil spirits are 2 levels higher than Ulle. Guan realized that the ghosts had taken physical form and the protagonist had eaten them. Suddenly, the main character jumped up and started jumping around like a madman. The teacher and the boy's friends looked at him in amazement. They couldn't understand what had happened. TSO tapped the guy on the head and yelled for him to wake up. She added that they wouldn't give the guy a chance to get dumbfounded. The student asked excitedly to the Guan teacher to come up with something. The man explained that the bell that suppressed souls is broken. Now they can only watch and wait to see if the protagonist passes the test. After that, the rampaging guy flew high up. Friends shouted that Ulle could do it. The protagonist flew up, and from there he could barely see his friends below. The main character found himself in a parallel reality. He noticed that his body was turning yellow. Ulle was surprised. He looked around and saw ghosts hovering nearby. The main character saw spirits floating around. He thought the ghosts were attracted to the beads and entered his body. The guy kept hovering. He realized to himself that if evil spirits were hovering near him, then everything was fine outside. Suddenly, the protagonist got worried. He realized something was going on. Ulle felt his body begin to get smaller for some reason, as if he was being sucked in by something. The main character's friends looked at him fearfully and thought he had failed the test. The disciples saw Ulle twisted in all directions and thought he had become possessed. The protagonist noticed that evil spirits were approaching him. He shouted to them to be careful. The surrounding ghosts had yellow mist coming out of their mouths and becoming the guy's body. Ulle angrily shouted to the evil spirits around him to be gentle. The yellow-clad boy's body lay unmoving. The protagonist looked around. He realized he felt faint because of the ghosts. The guy's body was floating in a parallel reality. Ulle decided that his mind no longer belonged to him and he was dying. The protagonist remembered the words of his teacher. Guan said that the ghost could take over the body but not the soul. The main character felt a noise. He couldn't understand what it was and turned around. The protagonist was floating in space and couldn't figure out exactly what he was about to see. Then the guy looked up and saw something unusual in front of him. Ulle saw before him a huge demonic creature with many heads. The guy looked at the ghost in front of him and decided that it was weird for him. He could die. The protagonist stared in amazement at the demonic creature in front of him. He didn't understand what she was doing. Ulle turned mentally to the ghosts and told them to take his body and let him die. The protagonist decided to himself that it was all over. He once again turned to the spirits and said that they could take his body but leave his soul. At that time, the system beeped. The protagonist in the parallel reality came to his senses. A bright and blue lightning bolt appeared. It was a spirit-protecting attack. The guy kept going wild and bouncing around like he was possessed. He was full of energy. Ulle hopped and twisted in place. His friends looked at him in amazement. Zuo asked the teacher in surprise, "Why did Ulle suddenly stop?" The student asked the Guan teacher, "What is going on here now?" Suddenly, the main character glowed brightly with a golden color. The people around him closed in from the bright glow. Zuo looked at the main character and saw some changes happening to him. The girl covered herself with her hands from the bright glow. Suddenly, something caught her attention. The student pointed to the teacher at a bright glow off to the side. Guan told the girl that there was an exit gate in front of them, at which time the castle began to shake and large stones fell from above. Zuo and the man got ready to run away. She still tried to cover herself with her hands. Guan shouted to get out. The spiritual palace began to collapse. The main character was still floating in virtual reality at the time. Ulle pondered to himself and realized that he couldn't die since he had just had an attack that protected him from ghosts. A system warning suddenly appeared. The guy asked the system why it changed. The system has informed the protagonist that the body's master is seeking death. The guy must clear the system within the first few minutes. Otherwise, it will go into disrepair. The countdown has begun. The protagonist looked with great attention at the timer, which showed the time remaining. Ulle thought to himself unhappily that he still had only 3 minutes left. The guy started banging his head against the system window. He demanded that the system give him a clue. The palace building continued to collapse. Huge stones fell from above. The system timer showed constantly as time continued to go backwards. The girl grabbed the main character by the scruff of the neck and pulled him behind her. Ulle opened his eyes and looked around. He didn't understand what was going on. The apprentice was glad that the protagonist was awake. She shouted that the spiritual palace was collapsing for some unknown reason. The teacher told the surprised protagonist that he had passed the test, so the door opened. The girl shouted fearfully as a huge rock approached from above. The protagonist looked in surprise in front of him. He remembered the system timer. The system shows 1 minute left. The protagonist must survive and get out of the tunnel in the remaining time. Ulle read a message that if he passes the test, the system will clear. If he doesn't, the system will be reset. Suddenly, a bright blue lightning bolt appeared in the tunnel, as if something had flown through. The girl along with the teacher were surprised. They didn't realize what had just flown past them. Zuo asked, surprised at the teacher, "What did they just see?" The Qingshu guy shouted fearfully that a ghost might have flown past them. The teacher excitedly called out that a ulle had just rushed past them. The main character was running at full speed. He shouted to himself that he had to run 100 meters in 15 seconds. The protagonist remembered that he had to get out of the tunnel as soon as possible to avoid breaking the rules. Ulle was completely focused. He looked in front of him and ran forward. The protagonist shoved off to run even faster. He knew he couldn't die now. Ulle looked in front of him and saw the end of the tunnel. He realized he had to get out of here. The system timer was counting down, only 8 seconds left. The exit was just around the corner. The guy noticed that he only had 7 seconds of time left on the timer before the end. Ulle thought that he had less than 5 meters to go to the exit. He figured he would definitely make it in time. The protagonist saw vividly in front of him that he was almost in the aisle. The guy had almost reached his goal, and the exit. Suddenly, he saw something suspicious from above. He saw a huge shadow looming over him from above. He looked up. The protagonist looked up carefully. He saw a huge rock coming down from above. The protagonist saw that the rock had completely blocked his path. He couldn't get through. The guy saw on the system timer that he had 3 seconds to get out. The protagonist stood and saw a huge rock falling from above, at which time someone from behind accelerated and shoved the protagonist out of the cave with his hands. The system timer showed that the guy only had 2 seconds to get out. The protagonist flew out of the cave at high speed and hit the ground. The protagonist had 1 more second left, but he was already outside the cave. He looked in front of him and saw a rock blocking the tunnel exit. Time had run out. A message appeared saying that the protagonist had issued a test, and the system was cleared. The protagonist was amazed. He realized he'd made it in time and was saved. Ulle tensely thought to himself, who was the one who pushed him out of the cave? In the mountain palace, people were excitedly discussing the news that the main character and his companions had been found. The minister was sitting near the big screens. She said that people were in a spiritual palace on the 6th level, but it was collapsing. The man noticed that only 1 person came out of the cave. He said it could have been his student. The man sternly asked his subordinate, "Why hasn't a rescue team been sent yet?" The repaired man replied that the team was left halfway through. Afterwards, the man told his interlocutors that he would go to deal with it himself. The warrior replied that he would go with the man. The attendant asked her interlocutors in surprise, "Why are they in a hurry?" She added, "Someone has to stay here." The men stopped, turned around, and looked at the servant girl intently. The woman restlessly said that a rescue team should be sent to the people, as they were injured and could not move because of the collapse. The attendant looked closely and noticed something on the screen. The woman was surprised to notice that Ulle wanted to go back inside the cave. The system informed the protagonist that he was trying to kill himself again. Ulle shouted back to the system that he was not trying to kill himself, but trying to save his friends. The system informed the guy that his behavior was beyond what normal people would do to help. Ulle explained that there were people left under the stones. If he did nothing, it might be too late later. The guy said there might be people in the cave who couldn't get out and they were trapped in there. The system told the guy that he had no connection to the people inside the cave, so he was breaking the rules. The main character got very agitated. He didn't like that the system called his action a violation. He shouted to the system that he was fed up with the violation warnings. The guy rushed towards the cave with all his legs. He shouted that his name was Ulle, not Chen Fei. The main character yelled that when Ulle saves the world, it has nothing to do with Chen Fei. The system was silent. She answered nothing to the master. The guy at that time ran up to the entrance of the cave. Ulle on the move shouted to the system that he didn't know why on earth she had chosen him. The protagonist ran up to a huge rock at the entrance to the cave and tried to shove it off. Ulle pushed the rock away with all his might to free the exit to the cave. The protagonist got his familiar girlfriend Sue from the tunnel. She was very hurt. The guy was carrying his girlfriend in his arms. He yelled to the system that he couldn't leave his friends. The protagonist carried his girlfriend away from the exit and laid her on Earth. He decided to return. The system was silent. She didn't respond to anything to the guy's words or actions. Ulle turned around and ran towards the cave. He told the system that she didn't want him to die here. The protagonist continued to run into the cave. He yelled as he ran that he wasn't going to die so soon. The system was activated, but it was silent in response to the protagonist. The protagonist continued to clear the entrance to the cave. He was getting and carrying rocks. It was hard for the guy, but he knew there was no time. He kept clearing the exit. The protagonist tried his best. He ran and carried the rocks away from the cave entrance. The guy had almost completely cleared the exit and prepared to go inside. The system informed the host that the tunnel had 2 minutes left before it collapsed. Only Teacher Guan remained inside. If the protagonist here dies, it will count as a violation. The protagonist turned around and said excitedly that he would act without a chance. The guy ran inside and found his teacher. He was pulling him towards the exit. Guan, in a weak voice, asked the guy to leave him here. Ulle shouted to his teacher to be quiet. He promised that he would drag the Guan out of here. Ulle thought to himself that his body was on the verge. He apologized to the teacher for what he was doing now. The teacher became very wary. He felt that the protagonist had lifted him above himself. The Guan watched in surprise as the guy raised it above his head and prepared to throw it. The teacher shouted fearfully. He flew at full speed out of the cave towards the exit. The man flew out of the cave at breakneck speed and banged his head into the stone. The main character heard a noise. At the same time, a rock fell on him from above. Ulle raised his head excitedly to see what was up above. The guy was startled to see a huge rock falling on him. He didn't have time to run away. A huge rock fell on top of the protagonist and closed the exit from the cave. An exhausted Teacher Guan was sitting near the entrance to the cave. He realized that his student had stayed inside. Guan was very badly hurt, but he realized that he was saved because of Ulle. The man thought that he had always thought of the main character as some sort of monster. But Ulle saved the students and him personally. The teacher thought his ward had been a miracle all this time. Ulle continued to lie in the cave. The main character was very badly wounded and beaten. He lay moaning on the ground. The guy felt like he was about to die. He thought to himself that the system couldn't think he had broken the rules. A huge rock crushed the protagonist's legs. He told himself that it would be all right if he couldn't open the exit. At that time, small stones started falling from above. The protagonist couldn't move. Ulle said in a weakening voice that the roof might come down on him soon. At which time a huge rock began to break away from the ceiling and fall downward. A huge rock fell from above. The protagonist was lying on the ground and couldn't move. Ulle thought to himself that he had never envisioned that he would finally want to live. The boy clenched his hand into a fist. He thought to himself that the stone would fall on his head. The main character told someone to kill him quickly and not let him suffer for long. The guy was lying relaxed with his eyes closed. The rock was about to fall on him. Blue lightning flashed from the side and blew the rock to pieces. The protagonist opened his eyes in surprise. He realized that he was now saved. There was some man standing nearby. He told the guy cheerfully that he was finally on time. The surprised protagonist lifted himself up. He looked at the silhouette of his savior. After a brief pause, the man told the protagonist that he was now safe. The protagonist tried to get up. He had no strength as he was very wounded, and his legs were broken off. He thought that the system would not have left him to his fate if he were really in danger. The man commanded his subordinates to go inside and see if anyone else was still alive. Teacher walked over to the main character lying on the stretcher and checked his pulse. Guan asked excitedly to the man, "What is the condition of the protagonist?" The interlocutor replied that they could save Ulle from serious injuries. The teacher pulled himself up from the last of his strength and looked at his student with excitement. The protagonist was lying on a stretcher. System forecasting was very poor. Suddenly, a bright lightning bolt appeared from above. It struck in the direction of the protagonist. The lightning strike accurately hit the guy. Ulle jumped up after the impact over the stretcher. The main character felt very stunned after the impact. There was smoke coming from his body. As he lay on the stretcher, he asked the system unhappily why it had electrocuted him. The system was surprised. She didn't understand what the protagonist was talking about. The guy was suddenly startled. He realized it wasn't the system that had just attacked him. A very strong shiver went through the main character's whole body. He felt very bad. He felt very bad. Ulle felt to himself as his body began to suddenly inflate from within. The guy started getting bigger and bigger. He was getting huge. Ulle screamed very loudly due to the fact that he was being violently gutted on the inside. The main character was in a huge room. It was a hospital. He opened his eyes and started to look around. Ulle saw a turtle nearby. The man excitedly told the boy that he was finally awake. The boy, lying on the bed, asked where everyone else was. The interlocutor replied that Ulle was in the clan chamber. He added that the boy should recover quickly. The protagonist said exhaustedly that he remembered being struck by lightning. The man helped the guy up. He explained that the spirit palace assumed that the reward would be given to a cultivator at the spirit stage. But the protagonist is at the human stage. The interviewee explained that the guy got really energized and almost exploded. But the paramedics were able to help Ulle. They injected him with the right medicine. The doctors have their love for their students and medical skills are great. The man explained that the doctors pulled excess energy out of the guy's body, reducing the stresses on his body. Ulle excitedly interjected about the spiritual palace's reward. The man told the boy that he had heard all about his exploits in the spiritual palace towards other students. The man explained that the main character, despite the huge difference in strength, had proven that he had the heart of a heaven stage cultivator. Ulle asked his interlocutor with great surprise, "What is he talking about?" The man grabbed the boy by the shoulders and said cheerfully that he was worthy of the spiritual palace's reward. Ulle returned to the cave to save the others. The boy was a little confused. He was uncomfortable after the man pulled him to him by his arms. The man hugged the boy and shouted to him joyfully, very proud to have him as a disciple in the Wensword clan. Ulle shoved his hands away from the man. He asked grudgingly, "Will he be all right?" The interlocutor replied with a smile to the protagonist that he would become even better than he was before. The guy was very frustrated and dissatisfied. He wanted his interlocutor to stop, and then the man gently grabbed the boy's hands. He wanted to tell him something important. The interlocutor explained that Ulle would be able to start cultivating as early as the soul stage. The main character was very much and unpleasantly struck by such words. He realized that he couldn't just die like that. The lad turned to his companion and asked to be left to rest a little alone. The man replied understandingly to the lad that he was very tired and should rest. The protagonist sat staring unhappily in front of him. He realized that things weren't going the way he wanted them to. Suddenly, the main character shouted very loudly. He was very annoyed. The man heard the protagonist scream. He stopped and thought. The man thought that the main character would properly pass the soul stage, and then there would be the heaven stage. The infirmary contained students who had suffered minor injuries. The clan's medicine would suffice for any kind of injury. Most of the disciples recovered very quickly with the help of the cultivators. Teacher Tsuyu's injuries were very serious. They took longer to heal. After visiting the secret area, many students thought they could increase their power. In reality, they remained at the human stage. Yue Air's girlfriend came out and asked the guy why she didn't see Fan or Zuo here. The guy replied that they had gone to visit the protagonist. The girl was very much interested and thoughtful. She thought about Ulle. Evening came and the protagonist's friends came to check on him. The girl held out a huge black pill to the guy and offered to take it. Zuo explains that it's a life force pill and it will help the main character. Ulle saved her life and that's why she's giving him the pill. The main character waved his hand and said he didn't need to be thanked. He was just doing his job. Ulle turned to his girlfriend and said excitedly that she had saved him too. Zuo was very shy. She looked at her companion silently. The girl turned around and started to walk away. She told the guy goodbye that she thought he had a better chance of surviving than she did. The guy fan said cheerfully to the main character not to worry about the girlfriend. Fang explained that he met Zuo before the other students. The girl has been here since she was 15, but they still have conflicts. The girl told herself that she was arrogant, but she was still that kind of person. Zuo thought that when she meets someone stronger than her, she gets very upset and jealous. She becomes more aggressive. The girl decided to herself that if she couldn't catch up with the gap, she wouldn't know what to do. The protagonist listened as Tu said that people always admire others who are stronger than they are. Such admiration becomes stronger. The protagonist thought to himself that he had begged for death, but instead he dragged two friends in. Zuo revealed that she was born in the court of the royal palace. She therefore immediately knew what she had to do to climb the career ladder. The girl explained to the protagonist that she assumed no one could work harder than her until she met Ulle. Zuo told the protagonist that she had only now realized how wrong she had been. She added that there are people like the ones here, and there are places like this. Ulle suddenly told the startled girlfriend that she wasn't wrong at all. The main character told the girl that she has a lot of perseverance. She can achieve her dream in this clan. The girl turned sideways. She thought about the main character's words. The fanboy thought for a bit and replied to the girl that he understood. The girl was annoyed. She didn't like her friend's answers. Then suddenly the girl ran up to her friends and started beating them up. TSO said angrily to the guys to stop being so gentle. Ulle replied to the girl that they were just talking. The attendant, along with the man, watched the wall in the cave carefully. The attendant noticed the imprint of someone's hand on the wall. She was very startled. The man was standing next to the woman. He told her that her assumption was correct. The secret area along with the spiritual palace shook because someone had used magic. The attendant held the mirror in her hands. She said excitedly that it was the heavenly stage. The interlocutor excitedly said that the only person who entered here was the Guan. The woman also recalled that human stage cultivators went to the cave with the main character. Ulle reminded the man that he himself had told him that he needed to rest more to recover. He asked his interlocutor what he had been brought here for. The man replied to the guy that he was here to tell him about exploring the secret area. The interlocutor explained to the guy that what had happened was that someone had sabotaged the place. Someone had come with the protagonist's group to the spiritual palace that day. Ulle was very much surprised. He asked if someone was hiding among them. The man replied that they hadn't figured it out yet, which was why they had gathered everyone here. The interlocutor pointed to the old man who had passed. He explained that the old man would be using a special technique of the clan. Through this, he would learn the deepest secrets of those on whom the technique was being used. As a result, the traitor would be discovered. Zuo thought deeply. She was excited that they were all going to be tested with a special technique. Zuo asked fearfully to the man, "Will they be given any privacy?" The girl asked the man, "Why were the 4 of them chosen out of all the who entered the spiritual palace?" The interlocutor replied that the rest of the people were gathered in another room. The investigation would go faster if everyone was separated. The man explained that, for the safety of the Wen Sword clan, all the participants in the trial must obey their elders. The protagonist was being tested. The old man used a special skill against him. Ulle looked in front of him at the hand on fire in front of him. The boy decided that the sooner it was over, the sooner he would go to bed. The protagonist eyed the old man's hand warily. Suddenly a hunch struck him. Ulle realized that if his memories were examined in detail, someone might discover information about his real identity of Chen Fei. The protagonist looked at the old man and realized that there were 2 ways to activate the collapsed system. The main character could take on the identity of a Chen Fei and then end up dead. The guy could keep Yule's identity and use it further. After his soul is investigated, then people will discover Chen Fei's identity anyway. The protagonist, looking at the old man's hand, realized he couldn't be allowed to fully declassify himself. The old man reached out his burning hand and almost touched the boy's head. The interlocutor asked the protagonist with excitement and interest, "Why is he afraid?" The main character waved his hands and decided to explain why he was nervous. The interlocutor told the guy that he had seen a lot of people with different secrets. He added that he would not say anything about what he would hear from the protagonist. Ulle very fearfully decided to himself that it was all over for him and he would be exposed. The old man was about to touch the protagonist's head with his fiery hand. Suddenly there was a very loud noise. The building shook and everything fell apart. The main character was very much astonished. He was looking around with another student. Huge blocks of concrete started falling from the roof of the building. They almost hit people. The blocks that fell on the floor started to destroy everything. The main character is very badly frightened. The frightened boy looked at the man. The man realized what was happening. The man shouted fearfully, the surrounding aura pertaining to the Heaven Stage Master. From above the building, someone suddenly soared overhead surrounded by pink flames. The man shouted fearfully that the traitor is a fellow Ding Shuyuan. The protagonist repeated the name Ding Shuyuan to himself. He remembered that it was one of the disciples. That's when the pink flame guy stopped on the roof of the building. The protagonist looked carefully at the disciple standing on top of him and repeated his name, Ding Shuyuan. The man shouted that the interrogation technique showed Ding Shuyuan's memories. He was the one who destroyed the transition zone and the spiritual palace. The man added, that Ding Shuyuan was the most famous traitor from the Batian clan. The man said that Dean was in reality a demon cultivator of the celestial stage. He asked the warrior, "So why did Dean pretend to be a new student and get into their clan?" The warrior replied that Dean did all this to collect some treasures from the secret area. Dean's boyfriend stood on top surrounded by pink flames and looked down at the people below. Ding angrily turned to the protagonist. He revealed that he had infiltrated the Wen Sword clan with great difficulty. When he finally found the treasure, it was eaten by Ulle. The protagonist was surprised to realize that the bracelet of pearls he had swallowed was an ancient demonic treasure. Din rushed down. As he flew, he shouted that he had collapsed the spiritual palace to kill the protagonist. The disciple threatened that he would open Yule's stomach and take what belonged to him. The people downstairs got really scared. Someone shouted to the main character to hide as soon as possible. Dean flew overhead. He shouted menacingly to his rivals that they would not stop him. The protagonist stood scared from below. He realized he couldn't defend himself. Ulle gathered his strength and said fearfully that it was all an accident. The protagonist noticed some kind of artifact descending from above in bluish lightning. It was a sword. The guy stood and looked in front of him. He saw huge blue sparkling lightning bolts. Ulle noticed with excitement as the sword began to approach. Din was still flying nearby. The protagonist realized that he was facing a special Qingming sword that belonged to the elders. Ulle thought sharply to himself that everything that was happening was a disgrace. Dean's boyfriend was floating in the air. He saw a bright blue glow in front of him. The apprentice laughed evilly. He saw something in front of him that interested him. Din was hovering and had a special sword in his hands. At this time, a huge number of birds of prey appeared in the air all around. The protagonist saw someone standing on a hill in the distance. The stranger put a hand to his chest. The stranger stood alone at the top of the hill. Birds of prey continued to fly around. The protagonist excitedly realized that he was seeing a strike of dragons and 9 spirits. At this time, the magic sword continued to float in the air. It began to change its direction. The sword, surrounded by blue flames, headed in the direction where Dean was. The sword flew through the air and killed the birds flying around with its radiance. After that, the sword flew up and shattered the lilac haze around the flying Din. Student Dean was very angry and scared. He screamed very loudly. A bright blue glow reached Dean and completely enveloped him on all sides. The protagonist stood on Earth. He looked at everything that was happening in silence and with excitement. Dean's boy had a little time to himself. He laughed very wickedly and merrily. Din shouted to his opponents not to even think about catching him. Suddenly, the guy got really scared. He screamed really loud. Dean was pierced by a very strong electric shock. He continued to scream loudly. There was a very strong explosion at the place where Dean's boyfriend was. Blue and purple lightning bolts flew out in all directions. The protagonist looked up in amazement. He had never seen anything like this before. Zuo said with admiration the elder had completely annihilated a heaven stage demon cultivator with a single sword strike. At this time, the elder slowly began to descend from the top of the hill toward the people. The old man slowly descended and prepared to put his feet on the ground. People fell to their knees before the elder. Someone said he wanted to learn his techniques. The main character was very disturbed. He decided to himself that it was all a very strange coincidence. Ulle thought the traitor had shown up at just the right moment. Dean seemed to want to help him. At this time, an old man suddenly walked up to the protagonist and grabbed his arm. The boy was very much frightened. He realized that the elder had come very close to him. After that, the old man guided his hands and touched the main character's stomach. Fang looked at everything that was happening with great surprise. He didn't understand what the elder had done. The protagonist felt suddenly as if something inside him had changed. The old man said judiciously that he knew that the protagonist had swallowed a demonic artifact. Ulle can't handle it himself. The elder told the protagonist that he would seal the artifact inside his body so that there would be no problems in the future. The man next to him thanked the elder for the good idea. The elder told his companion to take the injured disciples to rest. Ulle wondered what kind of trouble he might have in the future. The old man asked the man, should they examine the protagonist again? The man calmly replied that according to the elder's decree, they would let all the students rest. Evening descended on the clan residence. The apprentices were in the infirmary. There was a girl in one of the infirmary rooms. A servant came to see her. The maid asked the Yue girl to drink the medicine she brought. Yue took a bowl of drink from the tray. She prepared to drink it. The girl calmly carried the cup to Hermith and began to sip the medicine little by little. Yue closed her eyes and slowly consumed the medicine into herself, one sip at a time. The maid told the girl that the medicine was very bitter, but she just drank it. Yue placed the drinking bowl on the tray and said that she hadn't drunk anything like this before. The maid told the girl to rest and she's about to turn out the light. The room with the girl went dark after the maid left. The moon has risen over the infirmary building. There's complete silence all around. Suddenly a pink glow appeared in the girl's room. Someone asked her if she understood that technique. The girl replied to her interlocutor that the mission had failed, and the celestial ice raven was now dead. The girl remembered how she got to the Yuan demon clan. There her mentor met her and welcomed her. The mentor told the girls that they are now in debt for disobedience. One of them could be kicked out. The girl asked her friend, will this be their new family now? The girlfriend told the girl that this would be their new family as long as they behaved themselves. Their new friends would not leave them again. Yue closed her eyes and smiled. She felt at ease around her girlfriend. Yue remembered how she had killed many people and saw the girl's body lying on earth. Yue was standing with a ball in her hands. Many corpses of the people she had killed were scattered around. The girl remembered that she had to obey and kill everyone to gain saint status. Yue thought excitedly to herself that she should be loyal to the spiritual master. The warrior realized that she had to fulfill everything in order not to be abandoned. The girl bowed to the supreme mentor. He headed towards her. The mentor asked the interlocutor Liu Yue if she was the last candidate for sainthood. After that, the interlocutor told the girl that he accepted her as his follower. The interlocutor told the girl that she would receive the title of the Supreme Master's successor. Liu Yue replied to the master obediently that she would do exactly that. When the girl was in the Wensword clan, there were some amazing changes there in 3 months. After the destruction of the pleasure cult, the other demon clans divided territory and resources among themselves. After that, the clans began to fight among themselves. Before the events in the secret zone, the master turned to the girl. The interlocutor said that there is a good opportunity for the demon clan Yuan to expand its territories. Yue will have a good opportunity to prove his loyalty to his mentor and pay back the clan. The girl asked calmly to her mentor, what instructions would that one have? The master told the girl that when he was hunted down in the fateful year, he left half of his powers in the secret area of the Wen clan. Now he wants the girl to retrieve it for him. The mentor said that if he regained his power, they could unite all the demon clans. Yue was very surprised that her teacher had left half of his strength behind. At the same time, her mentor was at the 7th level of the heavenly stage. The girl answered her teacher unequivocally that she would do anything for him. After that, Yue decided to fully fulfill what her mentor demanded of her. The girl realized that the secret zone was the great asset of the Wen clan. The zone is well guarded and she found no way to get in. It turned out that the protagonist's performance was astonishing. Because of this, the Elder allowed all the students to train at the first level of the secret area. The spiritual palace was on the 6th level. Ulle and the Ice Raven were able to trigger an earthquake. The girl used the passageways in the secret area to get all the disciples to fall down the spiritual palace. She blended in with the crowd and was undetected. Ulle spent a lot of effort to find the magic rosary beads. In the end, the main character swallowed them. When everyone got out of the tunnel, they were being watched by the surveillance team. Ulle had no way to get the brushes out of the main character. The girl told the Ice Crow to seize the opportunity when the cave would collapse. It was to kill Ulle and take the rosary from him. The protagonist proved himself amazing during the escape. He was able to dodge all the falling rocks. The girl was running behind the protagonist. A huge rock was falling on them from above. Ulle remembered that they were very unlucky as they were hit by falling rocks. To ensure that no one would catch them from the clan, they had to surrender. In the end, the protagonist got out. Ulle informed the master that they had not finished the mission and the Ice Raven was dead. The mentor angrily told the interlocutor that she had wasted the Ice Crow's life. He interrogated, "Does she still want to go back to them?" Ulle fearfully replied that there was nothing she could do. The girl said excitedly to her interlocutor that if she remained unnoticed, she could complete the task and return his power. The girl told the master that she would arrange that there should be no suspicion and she should not be discovered. Ulle said that the memories that were found in the Ice Crow boy had been altered. The girl assured Master that no one would suspect her of having a connection with the clan. The Master angrily told the girl that she might not come back if she didn't give him his power back. The girl was astonished to hear such words from the Master. She was frightened. Ulle dropped to her knees and begged her teacher not to leave her. She added that she would be able to kill the protagonist and get the magic rosary back. The night was over the clan's opinion. The protagonist was still in the infirmary. The guy couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the Dean incident. The protagonist stayed up all night. He couldn't understand why a Heaven Stage cultivator had revealed his presence. Ulle didn't understand who he wanted to protect. The guy lay there and thought to himself that the legend of Heaven Stage had given himself away when he wanted to protect someone. Ulle realized that all of this did not fit with the character of the Demon Clan. The guy decided that the person who was protected by the Ice Raven must have been stronger than he was. The protagonist had a good idea. He even jumped up on the bed. The guy decided he'd find out who the Ice Raven was trying to protect. Then he'd threaten to turn that person in, and he'd kill him for sure. The protagonist sat staring in front of him, happily contemplating his plan. After a bit of thinking, the protagonist realized that things weren't going to be that easy for him. The protagonist realized that he couldn't just identify the right person. He remembered that even the elders couldn't find a clue. The protagonist got excited and remembered that he could call on the system to help him. The guy turned to the system. He immediately remembered the incident at the spiritual palace. Ulle remembered that system warning and countdown very rarely appeared in the spiritual palace. He decided that he should be more careful. Ulle thought that the system would help him to be reborn with unimaginable abilities. It could also be just useful to him. The guy remembered the system message that she was giving him a chance to survive. The system informed the protagonist as well when he was facing imminent death. The guy also remembered when the system gave him a critical warning. The protagonist decided to himself that the system would always give him the right advice in any situation. The guy remembered the system message during the spiritual palace address. He wondered. The protagonist realized that the system knew for a fact that he would be saved. The guy remembered an incident in the outskirts of Duhek. During that incident, the system had said that if Zhao Suili went on her own, she would definitely die. Then the system told the protagonist that if he went with the girl, they had a chance to survive. The guy remembered that he couldn't have survived on his own. He didn't realize how dangerous it was. The protagonist remembered that when he and his girlfriend came to the spirit box, he received a system message about the chance of survival. The guy realized that the system knew the whole situation and knew he would survive. The protagonist realized that the system knows a lot and it's omnipresent. After thinking for a bit, the protagonist realized that the system now needed to know who the traitor was. The guy started clapping his hands to get the system's attention. The owner accessed the system. It rang and activated. The system asked the host what he wanted and demanded that he activate it. The guy got really excited. He jumped from his seat in the direction of the system window. Ulle flew happily to the system window. He wanted to ask her a question. The guy flew headfirst into a wall. The system asked him what he was smoking and what he wanted. The guy asked with interest to his electronic interlocutor, who was the Ice Raven trying to protect? System, after a pause, replied to the protagonist that she would not tell him. Ulle cheerfully said that he only has a hunch. He is not sure of this person's existence. The system slowed down a bit. She replied to the guy that it was getting late and he should go to bed. Guy walked over to the system window. He asked the virtual assistant why she was leaving so soon. The protagonist told the system on the sly that she would help him and he would be very grateful to her. At which time there was a lightning strike, and electric sparks struck the guy. Ulle clarified grudgingly to the interlocutor. Couldn't he ask her now? The system replied to the guy that he couldn't ask her such questions until he activated her. The guy told the electronic assistant that they had plenty of time and offered her a game. He thought to himself that he would ask the system indirectly. The system was silent for a while. She was mulling over the protagonist's proposal. The protagonist told his interlocutor that he wanted to speculate on possible scenarios. The system responded with acceptance. The guy showed the system a sheet with different names on it. He asked the system, what happens if he fights these people? It told him when he wins or dies. He showed a piece of paper with the name Zuo Yuhan on it. She told him that he was winning. The guy showed a list of other names of various acquaintances. Ulle asked the system what awaited him in case of a fight with Lu Yue. The system replied that the guy would die imminently. The protagonist thought for a moment. He was very much taken aback by this answer. The guy couldn't understand why he would face imminent death if he fought against Liu Yue. He realized that he would lose against the Guan since his teacher is a Dao stage cultivator. The guy knew that the girl Liu Yue only possessed the 3rd level of the human stage. He couldn't understand how on earth she could defeat him in single combat. A hunch struck the guy. He realized that the Yue girl might be a traitor and hiding her power. Ulle thought for a moment. He needed to expose the girl before she got caught and defend himself so she wouldn't kill him. The guy asked the electronic assistant, what was the strength level of the girl Liu Yue? The system was silent in response. The protagonist realized that systemic silence shows he's right. The guy started naming the possible levels of his martial art and asked what would happen if he fought Liu Yue. The system told the guy that he would die imminently. The protagonist was overjoyed. He realized he was on the right path. He asked what would happen if he was at the 1st level of the Dao stage. After a short pause, the system replied to the protagonist that he was in for a called death. Guy excitedly asked the virtual assistant what would happen if he reached the celestial stage. The protagonist got the answer that he would win in that case. He was very surprised. Ulle was surprised to realize that the girl Liu Yue had reached the Dao stage and she was definitely above the 1st level. The protagonist was astonished by his discovery. He stayed up till dawn. Ulle decided to himself that he should calm down. He realized that the big problem for the Wensword clan was that there was a Liu Yue hiding there. The guy realized to himself that he would try to blackmail the girl by revealing her real identity. The protagonist thought to himself happily that now he would definitely be in danger. Ulle imagined realistically how he would meet a girl in the woods one-on-one, after which the protagonist assumed that he would reveal the real identity of the person he was talking to. Then the girl gets angry and kills the protagonist on the spot. The guy got really excited. He realized he could put his plan into action. The system told her master she wanted to leave. The guy got excited. Ulle realized that it was still very early for him to rejoice. He needed to make the elders and the elder know about it. The protagonist was lying on a bed with the moonlight falling on him from the window. It was night outside. The guy realized he had to make the elders find out after he was dead. The main character wrote all the details of his secret on a piece of paper. Afterward, the lad put the sheet under the pillow on his bed and covered it securely. Ulle decided to himself that it was time for him to act. He must plan the most important part. The protagonist decided to write everything down on paper. He sat down at his desk. The guy tried to describe in detail how he should contact Liu Yue. The protagonist kept scribbling incomprehensible drawings on a sheet of paper. The guy was getting bored, but he couldn't figure out how he could exactly find an approach to his girlfriend. Ulle drew a portrait of a girl. He realized that he had no experience in dealing with girls. The guy angrily tossed his quill aside. He remembered that he was at university and working hard at his job. The protagonist realized he couldn't figure it out on his own. He decided to get help. The fanboy was very surprised. He asked his friend why this one had come to him. Ulle said he wanted to get close to the girl Lu, and asked his friend to help him. Fong was very interested in the fact that the interlocutor wanted to get close to Mrs. Lu. Ulle replied to his friend that he was not thinking of anything strange. The guy waved his other hand with a smile and answered him cheerfully that he understood. The protagonist and his friend were sitting outdoors. Fan explained to his friend that he should first ask the girl for details about her. Ulle was surprised that his friend was acting very knowledgeable. The guy told his friend cheerfully to relax, and he would help him make a plan. The protagonist thanked his friend. Fan replied to the interlocutor that his favor is nothing compared to Ulle, all of them saved. There was a bright sun shining in the clear sky. The guy Fan went to the girl's house to make an appointment. The guy explained to Mrs. Lu that she needed to meet the main character. Fan, standing near the threshold, said goodbye to the girl. He said cheerfully that he would go and tell everything to the protagonist. The girl was overjoyed. She realized that the opportunity itself had fallen into her hands. Yue said cheerfully to herself that the protagonist herself had fallen into her net. The girl thought pleased with herself that she was lucky to be born with a beautiful face. The main character met his girlfriend in nature. They were swinging on a swing in a tree. Ulle sat on the swing next to the girl. They were all alone under a large tree and were silent. To himself, the protagonist thought happily that his friend Fang Qing-shu was a very good organizer. The guy had indeed found a remote place. The protagonist angrily thought to himself that in this beautiful place no one would prevent his plan from coming to fruition. The girl was also very happy. She realized that she could safely kill Ulle in this remote place. After gathering his courage, the protagonist told his girlfriend that she was beautiful today. Yue was silent in response. Ulle realized that he couldn't tell the girl the secret directly. You have to make the girlfriend make the first move. The protagonist remembers that last night he studied the secret language of the Tao stage. In the conversation, he will let his interlocutor realize that he already knows about her role as a traitor. Yue sat silently and then thanked the protagonist. She hid her emotions. The girl was surprised that the guy had turned her down before. Now he came to see her. A pink aura appeared around the interlocutors. The guy told the girl that he had come through to talk about something. Yue asked the guy what he wanted. Ulle excitedly said that there was someone else he suspected of betrayal. He recalled about the ice raven who was disguised as Ding Xiu Yuan. The girl was very frightened and disturbed. She didn't expect such a conversation. A pink aura continued to flicker between the two interlocutors. Yue ventured a question. The frightened girl asked the protagonist what he had said to her. The guy turned fearfully to the girl and asked her what was wrong. Yue reminded the protagonist that the elders had reported that there were no further problems. The girl thought to herself that she had not been discovered even by the elders with the Tao level. She realized that she couldn't be discovered by anyone at the human stage. The guy calmly replied to his interlocutor that he had discovered it by accident. Yue decided that she should understand why the guy had just told her that. The girl put her hand on the board of the swing and asked her interlocutor, why didn't he tell everything to Mr. Guan? The protagonist explained that he doesn't have a serious lead. The clan shouldn't do anything just because of his suspicions. Ulle added that the traitor was able to hide his power from his elders. Now he is asking for the girl's help in his investigation. The girl asked the protagonist, does he suspect it could be her? Ulle replied to the girlfriend that she is very beautiful and can't be a traitor. Yue decided that the protagonist would guess her power anyway if he tested it. As calmly as possible, the girl asked the protagonist who he might suspect besides her. Ulle calmly replied to the interlocutor that he might be suspicious of the girl Zuo Yuhan. The protagonist realistically portrayed his acquaintance TSO in a very evil way. Yue with interest asked the guy, why does he suspect Zuo Yuhan? Yue replied that Zuo girl looks like evil itself. The protagonist once again presented his girlfriend Zuo in an even more evil way. Yue looked at her interlocutor. She could not understand whether the protagonist was joking. The girl asked her interlocutor if he had any other suspects. Ulle replied that he only suspected Zuo Yuhan. Yue realized that the main character was confusing her. She found out that the guy first told the truth and then told a lie. The girl asked her interlocutor in a calm voice, what should they do now? Ulle said for Yue to start looking out for Zuo to detect anything suspicious. Ulle told his girlfriend that he didn't want to hurt her. He added that she should not make any sudden movements. The interlocutor agreed. The girl realized that the protagonist is in reality and does not suspect Zuo Yuhan of betrayal. The girl is well aware that the protagonist has exposed her and now he suspects her. Yue fearfully thought to herself, can a guy know about her Tao stage? Ulle happily thought to himself that the girl realized that he had declassified her. He expected her to kill him. Her companion sat silent. She thought for a long time about what to say to the boy. Yue realized that the guy didn't believe her. She decided that she had to find out how the guy was able to expose her. The unexpected girl turned to her interlocutor. The guy turned to her in surprise. Yue hugged the guy and asked him slyly, how could demonic cultivators deal with this kind of problem? The girlfriend whispered to the protagonist, asking if he wanted someone to help him. Yue asked the boy in a whisper, could he tell how he knew about the traitor? The protagonist was very surprised by the girl's questions. He expected her to kill him immediately. Yue put her hand on the guy's leg. She asked him, was the traitor discovered by the elders during the soul research? The girl moved her hand up the guy's leg. She asked, was the traitor discovered earlier? The main character got very excited. He excitedly shouted at the girl, after which the guy fearfully shoved the girl away from him with his hands to the side. Ulle told his girlfriend that she wouldn't believe him, even if he answered her question. Yue looked at her interlocutor unhappily. She thought that the guy might have declassified her before the spiritual palace. The girl remembered that the human stage disciples had gained access to the secret zone thanks to the protagonist. She recalled that Ulle had really caught the attention of the elders. The girl excitedly decided that the guy was creating an opportunity for her. The protagonist asked his companion fearfully why she was looking at him like that. He thought to himself that he should make the hints more obvious to Ulle. The girl thought back to the protagonist's past behavior. She decided that Ulle was doing everything to impress the elders and give her a chance. Afterward, the Sobodnica asked the protagonist with surprise, did he really know from the beginning that the traitor was among them, who pretended to be a new disciple? Guy, in a calm voice, asked the girl what made her think that. Ulle thought her interlocutor was bluffing. She remembered that only her clan knew about the secret plan. The girl decided that the protagonist had discovered the traitor even before entering the spiritual palace. Ulle asked excitedly to her interlocutor, did he really know that they would fall into the spiritual palace? The protagonist fearfully asked her interlocutor what she was thinking. The girl smiled and replied that she was just joking to herself. She thought the main character was getting flustered. The girl excitedly realized that the main character is here to check her out. The guy was not satisfied. He realized that his interlocutor didn't understand his hints and he should try harder. The main character suggested to Mrs. Liu that he would rock her on this swing. She would think hard and understand his intentions at that time. After that, the guy started rocking his girlfriend. She was completely in her own thoughts. Ulle couldn't understand what her interlocutor had planned and what his intentions were. The girl asked the guy as calmly as possible, does he really want to catch the traitor? She didn't understand why the guy had brought her here with his riddles. Ulle replied that he needed to gather more information. The protagonist looked carefully at his interlocutor. He couldn't believe that she still didn't understand. Ulle replied to the guy that he doesn't care enough about his cultivation. At the same time, he does care about the clan. The girl realized that the protagonist was testing her. She realized that the guy knows that she is at the Dao stage. Ulle replied to his girlfriend that he is worried. He added that he cares about the Wen Sword clan. The protagonist thought to himself that everything should be obvious by now. The girl kept swinging on the swing. She kept thinking about the main character's words. Ulle thought deeply. She couldn't understand what the guy was up to. Suddenly some mystery struck Mrs. Liu. She realized what the protagonist was thinking. Ulle realized that the protagonist was a very ambitious person. She decided that she had figured out his intentions. The girl realized that the protagonist had uncovered her clan's plan. She decided that the guy wanted to take the clan for himself. At which time the main character calmly and quietly walked over and sat down to the girl on the swing. The guy sat silently next to the girl. He calmly waited for her answer. After that, the protagonist excitedly got up from the swing and looked at the girl. Ulle was thinking about something of his own. The girl sat quietly on the swing without moving. Suddenly, the protagonist felt a very strong blow. The girl suddenly struck him. The protagonist had his magical necklace thrown out from inside him after a violent blow. The girl looked at her acquaintance without any emotion. Beads flew by her side. After a powerful blow, the protagonist flew far away and began to fall into the abyss. The magical necklace fell to the ground right next to the cliff. The girl walked over, bent down, and picked up the magic beads. She took them for herself. Ulle stood silent. She held the magic beads in her hands and looked down. The girl stood near the cliff. She looked around for any sign of the protagonist. The main character was lying at the bottom of a deep ravine. He was completely unconscious. After that, the guy heard someone call him a man from the outside. An unfamiliar creature with shackles on its feet began to stride toward the protagonist. At this time, with great difficulty, opened his eyes. He decided to look who was here next to him. Ulle lifted himself up. He heard the stranger say that she hoped to get out of here. He wondered in amazement, wondering where he was. He did not understand what had happened. The boy turned around and saw someone's burning eyes beside him. He was frightened. The protagonist saw a predatory and demonic red-haired girl beside him. He was very frightened. He couldn't understand who was standing in front of him. The girl yelled to the guy not to be afraid. She added that she wasn't mean. The protagonist finally woke up. He realized that he had survived because of his new acquaintance. The boy looked around. He noticed that he was all alone in this gorge. Ulle looked at his savior with great attention. He couldn't figure out who she was. The protagonist saw a demonic girl with burning eyes in front of him. She was chained to her. The boy asked the stranger in surprise, was she the one who saved him? The companion shook her head and told the guy that she saw him as he was falling. The protagonist recalled to himself as he fell from a great height downward. To himself, Ulle dreamed of him crashing into the ground at high speed after falling. A guy was falling from a great height into a deep gorge. Suddenly, someone's demonic hand reached out from below the cave. The mysterious red hand grabbed the protagonist when he was about to hit the ground. The protagonist was surprised. He couldn't understand what had just happened to him. Then someone's demonic hand pulled the protagonist into a cave. The boy found himself in a dark cave. In it, only the red eyes of the demonic girl glowed. The protagonist was sitting in a cave chatting with his new acquaintance. Ulle realized that the system had been waiting and knew that he would fall here. Next to him sat his interlocutor. Suddenly, the girl grabbed the guy's arm and addressed him loudly. The stranger told the protagonist that he had a low cultivation level. She added that she could teach him some techniques. The guy shoved the girl away and shouted to her that this was really it. The protagonist bounced to the side. He shouted to his new acquaintance that he didn't want to cultivate. Ulle asked the girl with very great excitement, "Who was she?" The interlocutor was very surprised at such a question from the protagonist. She prepared to answer. The stranger proudly said her name was Tai Shuli. She added that she was a cultivator of the 10th level of the celestial stage. The protagonist was surprised. He didn't expect such an advanced stranger in front of him. Tai told the guy that his chi was very low. She suggested him to learn her techniques. After that, the protagonist would be able to rise quickly. She said that the main character's friends would no longer look down on him. Ulle fearfully replied that his comrades never looked down on him. Tai asked the guy if his friends were laughing behind his back. Ulle replied calmly to the girl that his friends idolized him to a great extent. Tai told the guy that he had a low cultivation level. She added that he should slowly rise through the levels. The main character replied to the girl that he was the strongest new student. The guy told the interviewer that he had absolutely no need for her techniques. The protagonist informed the disgruntled girlfriend that he didn't want to have even more power. He turned around to head for the exit. He wanted to say goodbye to Tai. The girl shouted angrily she had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. She prepared to lunge at the guy. The main character was very scared. He turned around and looked fearfully at Tai. Tai shouted menacingly to the protagonist that she had been waiting for this moment for 600 years. She threw a chain of fire in the direction of the protagonist. The girl angrily yelled to the main character that he would be learning from her today. The protagonist screamed fearfully. He wanted to escape from the evil demonic girl. Ulle looked fearfully at his interlocutor. He realized that she didn't want to kill him. The guy looked around with interest and realized he was okay. Tai told the protagonist that he was her only hope of escape. That's why she shouldn't kill him. The demonic girl smiled at the boy and told him that he would be learning from her from today. The main character screamed in fright. He could not free himself as he was bound by the fire chains. The Yue Air girl returned to her room in the infirmary. She decided to check the magic necklace. The girl looked at the magic beads. They glowed with a pink glow. Yue Air realized that the rosaries lying in front of her did not contain mana. They were just ordinary gems. The girl thought and realized that mana had transferred into the main character's body. The main character was at this time being held captive by the Tai. He was bound in chains of fire and very frightened. The girl walked to the wall and broke off a small stone. She recalled to herself the events of long ago. The main character was lying on the earth. Tai remembered that she hadn't seen the outside world and a clear sky for a very long time. The girl recalled a memorable night. She was running away from a chase in the forest. Tai was being pursued by several warriors. One of them commanded his subordinates to hurry up. The man shouted to his subordinates to hurry up. He added that their target went to the cliff. The girl was running towards the cliff. She was wounded and she was in a lot of pain. Tai ran toward the big hole. She couldn't get anywhere out of the way. The girl was standing near a large cliff and had absolutely nowhere to go. Tai stood staring apprehensively at the vast abyss before her feet. The girl looked down apprehensively. She realized she would have to jump into the cliff. Tai heard the voices of her pursuers very close by. She realized she had been quickly caught up. The girl was alone in front of the abyss. The only way out was to jump down. Tai was really pissed off, but she had absolutely no other option. The girl shoved off to jump down to escape her pursuers. The men stopped. They saw that there was a cliff in front of them, and nowhere else to run. The men were heading toward the precipice. They saw that there was no one on the edge of the cliff. The pursuers stopped. They looked around in silence. There was silence all around. The guy told his leader named Tsuoshi they looked around, but the girl most likely jumped. Tsuo replied to his interlocutor that they have good defense from the mountains. They should not go forward so fast. The boy asked the girl what they could do now. The girl replied that if she died now, she would waste 2 years of her mother's efforts. She added that the victim they were chasing had learned a secret technique for shedding skin. The Zuo man said that the girl they were following came from a family of demonic cultivators. She had already reached the Dao stage in her 17th year. He added that he had to track down the victim. After which the man activated magical telepathic skills. The telepathic waves from TSO began to sweep through the neighborhood. He was trying to locate the girl he needed somewhere nearby. The companion asked the man impatiently, "How was he doing?" The man was silent. He didn't know what he would say to his companion now. Zuo then turned to his companion and said that the girl's mark was completely gone. The stalkers weren't happy. They didn't know how to explain all this to their teacher. Someone said that their victim's family had died 2 years ago. After that, the people left. There was complete silence in the neighborhood, and the clear moon shone in the sky. Ty's girl was lying at the bottom of the ravine. She began to gradually regain consciousness. The girl lay exhaustedly on the ground, but she felt glad that she was still alive. The girl regained consciousness and rose to her feet. She was very badly hurt after the fall. Ty walked under the bottom of the ravine. She thought to herself that she had lost her strength, and so she fled to the territory of the Wensword clan. The girl thought angrily to herself as she readied herself to fight against her pursuers. Ty walked leisurely along the bottom of the ravine. It was very hard for her. She didn't even know what was ahead of her. The girl walked lonely between the huge stone walls around her. Ty looked around and saw only cold walls around her. There was complete silence. The girl walked and looked carefully in front of her. She could not understand where she was. Suddenly something caught the girl's attention. She looked forward with interest. Ty saw a mountain of gold bars and magical artifacts in front of her. The girl bent down to pick up for herself an interesting artifact that she had spotted in a pile of gold. A girl saw some interesting book in a pile of gold. She wanted to take it. Ty took the blue book in her hands. It was a collection of some magical techniques. The girl looked and realized that the demon Jiang's allowance was in front of her. The girl thought. She realized that she had gotten her hands on a very important magical aid. Ty rejoiced angrily to herself. She realized that she had been given a very good opportunity. The girl realized that she was super lucky. She discovered the place where the first demon cultivator had stored all of his technology. Ty happily told herself that with this technology, she would be able to work her way up. Suddenly, huge chains appeared from the side. They headed towards the girl. The chain was around the girl's arm and she couldn't get free. The girl was very frightened. She couldn't understand where the chains had come from. Ty shouted fearfully and asked angrily, "Where did those chains come from?" A fire whirlwind appeared and a very evil demonic laugh rang out from there. The demon told his captive with a chuckle not to resist. He added that she would only be able to free herself when she reached the 10th level of the celestial stage. Ty shouted fearfully to the demon not to trap her. Burning Monster told his interlocutor not to worry. He added that his name was Jiang, and he was a demon lord. The demon explained that he had placed this place here to perfect himself here in complete peace. Jiang added that he only had a piece of his soul left and it was very weak. The girl was silent. She listened in amazement to the story of her new demonic acquaintance. The demon told her that he could give her his power. Tai could reach the heavenly stage, but she couldn't get out afterwards. Jiang told the girl that she could massacre the Wensword clan, and she would take revenge for him. The companion was bound in chains. She screamed angrily for the demon to let her go. The frightened girl couldn't get free in any way. She screamed at the demon that he was a bastard. Tai shouted to the demon that she only wanted to kill those who were chasing her. She demanded that Jiang release her. The girl was in a cave. She sat there and continued her cultivation techniques. The girl, sitting in the lotus position, activated a magic skill. She gave off a pink glow. A magical glow continued to spread around Tai. She sat with her eyes closed. The girl felt a tremendous demonic power awakening inside her. The girl's eyes opened. A bright and red fire flashed in them. The girl shouted angrily. She was still hanging chained up. A white haze passed across the floor of the cave. There was a magical white glow all around. Gradually, more and more white smoke appeared in the cave. It began to envelop the girl. Tai stood surrounded by a white haze. She smiled evilly to herself. The girl stepped with her feet on the ground. She decided that she could now free herself. Tai angrily shouted to the demon that she had completed the 10th level of the heaven stage. She demanded that he let her go. The demon replied with a laugh to his captive that her ki level was very unusual. Jiang told his interlocutor that his weapon was ready, and now he could take his revenge. The girl was very much surprised at such words. She didn't understand what kind of weapon the demon had told her about. Jiang explained to the girl that he had stored his treasures in this cave before he died. The girl was very worried. She couldn't believe it was possible. The demon explained that the girl could break the chains at her level of development, but she would lose a lot of demonic energy. After that, the Wensword clan would immediately recognize Tai's presence here. The girl smugly shouted that she could fight the Ball Wen clan by herself, if those came here. The demon replied to his interlocutor that even he could not defeat this clan. Jiang asked the captive, did she really think that he only wanted to help her cultivate? The demon said angrily that the girl had only two choices. She could stay here forever in the cave or commit suicide. The girl jumped up on the spot. Her feet were off the ground. She was excited. The girl slumped to the ground. She realized she had a very difficult choice to make. The demon told the surprised interlocutor that she, with a 10th level heaven stage, would be able to destroy an entire clan. Tai was still tied up. The demon shouted joyfully that his dream would finally come true. The girl stayed in the cave. It's been a long time since she met the demon. Time passed. The cave remained completely deserted. Years passed. Tai remained chained inside the cave for a very long time. It went on like this for a long time. Until today when the main character showed up in the cave. The girl lay chained on the ground. She stared at the stone walls around her. Tai sighed sadly. She couldn't realize how much time had passed. The girl thought menacingly to herself that she could stay in this place for the rest of her life. Tai grudgingly shouted that she was really bored. She wanted a shower and a proper meal. The girl realized that her body couldn't get out of the pit, but she had a chance to free her soul. Tai realized she had an opportunity to trade her soul with someone. The girl decided that she would wait until the opportunity arose, and then she would return to the human world. Suddenly a sound caught the girl's attention. She woke up and became alert. Tai jumped up excitedly. She realized that a man had appeared in front of her. The girl realized that the appearance of the man would help her realize her plans to free her soul from the cave.